Okay, you guys have been screaming at me in the comment section to cover this story, and so we are going to. Originally, I was going to upload a different story today, but we're actually going to postpone that till next week because it's not nearly as important, and we're going to cover the Immortal Hulk. Now, the Immortal Hulk is basically the return of Bruce Banner as the Incredible Hulk in Marvel Comics, which his absence had really been felt. It was like the Fantastic Four not being there, right? It's just kind of like, I mean, you can't, it was weird they decided to kill him off during Civil War, and then it was like, I don't know why you would, like, wow, like, who thought that was a good idea? I guess it was Bendis' good idea. Now he's writing Superman, so we'll see how that plays out. But nonetheless, you know, it's cool to see the Incredible Hulk return. Now, what this does is this initially picks up with a kid named Tommy, and Tommy actually knocks over a gas station, which is coincidentally run by Roxxon Oil. Those of you guys who don't know what Roxxon Oil is, it's like the most corrupt organization in the entirety of Marvel Comics. They are your Marvel stand-in for your traditional corrupt corporation. They have their hands on everything, like slave trading and all kinds of stuff. They're a very, very sinister organization. But Tommy busts into this place, and this robbery goes exactly as you would expect, because the way this is done, whenever it comes to robberies, there's only ever two kinds. There's basically people who are confident about it, people who have done it before, and those who are brand new. Tommy is brand new to the whole gas station robbery scene, and you can hear it. You can tell by the way his voice is going, the fact that he's trembling, he's unsure of himself. The guy looks terrified and he's sweating. And then what happens is there's a young girl named Sandy who's in there. She's 12 years old, and she drops a glass. And when she does, Tommy freaks out and shoots her. Now this happens directly in front of Bruce Banner. This leads to the Incredible Hulk beginning to manifest itself, which leads to Tommy shooting Bruce Banner in the head. Now, this is kind of an important thing, and the reason why is because one of the arguments that people make on how to kill the Incredible Hulk is to kill Bruce Banner. This is actually going to answer that question, and it's going to be a little bit of a trump card that Al Ewing throws in here in order to bring the Incredible Hulk back. When Tommy takes off and he ends up, you know, shooting the cashier and bails out, we end up picking up with the morgue shortly after this. Now, this does deal with a detective named Gloria, as well as a reporter named Jackie. It is kind of cool because they're basically trying to figure out who done this. Now, initially, there's no real significance to them, right? Like Jackie's just a reporter covering a story about a gas station robbery, and Gloria's a detective who's, you know, trying to figure the whole thing out. But with regards to Bruce Banner himself, despite the fact that he's essentially dead, the Incredible Hulk manifests itself. Now, I want to say that something like this happened during Peter David's run. Not going to swear to it, but as far as I'm aware, in the history of Marvel Comics, the rule of thumb when it came to Banner's impending death and the Incredible Hulk was that the Hulk would manifest right at the point when Banner was going to die. So if you go and you read like the Incredible Hulk The End, for example, Banner throws himself off a cliff, and then the Incredible Hulk manifests in order to save Banner. This is kind of a break from tradition. The fact that Bruce Banner can basically be dead, can be diagnosed, you know, can literally be dead in an autopsy, you know, prepared to be performed, and then sometime later, presumably maybe an hour later, manifests as the Incredible Hulk. You never really see that. It's a way to just kind of invoke the Hulk and bring him back. And so what this does is this picks up with a biker gang, and this is when we realize the story is a little more tragic than it originally appeared, in the sense that Tommy is actually in debt to a biker gang just to keep the lights on, quite literally. Like, he's not really able to pay the light bill, he's got a family to support, he's doing whatever it takes in order to make sure that they have the resources they need, and because he's in debt to this biker gang, he's been knocking over gas stations in order to pay back what he owes. And so he's basically like this guy who's caught in an impossible situation. Now, this leads to the Incredible Hulk showing up and basically massacring everybody. And that's exactly what you would expect. I mean, none of them are prepared. I mean, it's just this giant green rage monster showing up and just snatching people up, smashing their bones. I mean, bullets are being sprayed in every direction, and none of it makes a difference. Because when the guns are going off, Tommy's fleeing for his life, people are screaming, and when the screaming stops, then suddenly Tommy turns around and he comes face to face with the Incredible Hulk himself. And this is cool because the way that Al Ewing kind of plays this out, it's almost like a horror film. And that's really kind of what you would expect with the Incredible Hulk, right? Like, if you really get down to like the great Incredible Hulk stories, a lot of them do focus on the Hulk himself tearing things up and smashing things, because at the end of the day, all anybody ever really wants to see the Incredible Hulk do is just smash stuff. I mean, it's not unreasonable. That's why his catchphrase is Hulk smash, because we just want to see him destroy things. Like, that's what the Incredible Hulk does, you know? But it's kind of interesting because in this instance, the Incredible Hulk is almost merciless. And that's why I say this is like Savage. I mean, Savage Hulk will make his return in the story, but he's really very, very dark and merciless here, because Tommy tries to explain the situation and say, look, you know, I'm a guy who's caught in an impossible situation. You know, I didn't mean for it to happen, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. The Incredible Hulk's response is, who cares what your intention was? You walked into a gas station with a loaded gun. You had no idea what you were doing. You pulled the trigger out of desperation and panic, and you shot a 12-year-old girl and killed her. You, my friend, are in a world of hurt. And where Tommy turns the gun on the Incredible Hulk and shoots him, it doesn't make a difference. And so he kind of asks this question. He says, you know, I'm not a bad guy, am I? And the Incredible Hulk responds, what do you think? And literally breaks every single bone in his body. And from the way it's told, a giant crater is left outside of a hospital, indicating either the Incredible Hulk just crumpled Tommy like a piece of paper, just wadded him up, and then took him to the hospital and dropped him off, or he just threw him at the hospital and just threw him into the ground. Regardless of the scenario, Tommy will probably never walk again, and he'll probably never wake up again. He's essentially going to be in a vegetative state forever. But where you have Gloria and you have Jackie, who are having a conversation trying to figure out what's going on, Gloria and Jackie are friends. And so Gloria ultimately spills the beans and says, look, you didn't hear this from me, but the rumor here, this statement here, at least from what we're understanding from these bikers who have confessed, from the ones who were left alive anyway, the way this is being told is that Tommy didn't do this, that there was somebody who showed up with an insane amount of strength, and he was giant and he was green. And that's when they start to debate. They're like, Bruce Banner was shot and killed by Hawkeye. He's dead. He's not supposed to be back. And they're like, but yes, he is though. There's really no denying this point as an absolute truth, that he really is back and he really is alive. And so it's kind of interesting to see, because you end up having this really cool scenario where Jackie's going through and doing a series of interviews, talking to various people, getting a feel for their stories about the Incredible Hulk. And basically all the stories they give is that the Incredible Hulk is almost like this mythological being. He's like this mythological force that exists out there, that a lot of people have seen him, but it's like he's there and gone. And people don't walk up to him because they're terrified. And so in their response, in their mind, it is, this guy he's like a mythical beast that exists out there, but I'm not going to tell you anything about him. It's like the classic Sicilian argument or Sicilian statement for like the mafia, right? Like, I didn't see anything because I wasn't home. And if I was home, I still didn't see anything because I was asleep. Like, it's really how this whole thing plays out when it comes to like people who have encountered him, being terrified by him. A couple people were kind of enamored, and that's why there's mixed stories here, because the stories like, well, the Incredible Hulk helped people, different things like that. So it's a little bit fluctuating here. Now from here, we switch directly over to Jackie going through her research and so on, looking at these stories, when she's suddenly met by Walter Lankowski. Now, Walter Lankowski is a character that we've never really talked about before, and we've never really had a reason to. But when it comes to the character of Sasquatch, he's been around for a long, long time. The old Alpha Flight story, well, really, he goes all the way back to Uncanny X-Men 120, I think. Way back in the day. He goes back quite some time. Now, the idea behind this, here's kind of the cool thing. The idea behind the introduction of Walter Lankowski was that at the time, going all the way back to Uncanny X-Men number 109, the idea was that there was an attempt that was made by Alpha Flight, which was Canada's superhero team that was monitored by the government in Department H. The idea was that they wanted to bring Wolverine back into the fold, because Wolverine had previously been part of Alpha Flight. What you had is Alpha Flight traveling to try to find a way to kidnap Wolverine and bring him back. And that really kind of led into a little more fleshing out of Logan's backstory and so on and so forth. But the way this originally played out, if you go back and you read Alpha Flight issues 23 and 24. I'm not going to swear by that, although I guess I should be right since this is Comics Explained. If you go back and you read the old Alpha Flight stories, the way it played out, and really it's kind of an origin that Al Ewing runs over again here. It's not super important, but he kind of runs over again here. The notion was that Canada was looking for its own version of the Incredible Hulk, basically. Because the first time the Incredible Hulk showed up in Canada, they sent Wolverine after him. And really, Wolverine was defeated for the most part. And so the question was, okay, they need their own superhero team to defeat the Incredible Hulk, kind of an answer to that version of his character. And so they ended up bringing in Sasquatch, and they basically bombarded Walter Lankowski with gamma rays and turned him into the Sasquatch character. The difference here is that back then in the old Alpha Flight stories, what you had was basically a portal that would open. And so when Walter Lankowski became Sasquatch, what he was doing is he was switching places with a being called Tanarak. Now, Tanarak was one of these like early beasts that existed in Marvel Comics that was really in like a different dimension, but always tried to invade Earth. And over the years in Marvel Comics, at least in the early days, running really throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Tanarak would switch places. So when Walter Lankowski became Sasquatch, it would allow for just a little more control each time by Tanarak until Tanarak fully seized control of Walter and took over his body entirely. Now, of course, this led to Songbird basically destroying Tanarak, but Tanarak had been dead for a long, long time. And that meant that it was basically Walter who was always in control whenever he became Sasquatch. He was always doing his own thing, but he was supremely strong. He was incredibly capable in his various abilities. And of course, that led to him being one of the many legitimate challengers for the Incredible Hulk. Now, where you end up having like this bar fight that breaks out basically between Walter Lankowski and like a whole bunch of crazy guys, this of course leads to him being stabbed, which leads to him going to the hospital. In and of itself, this is not wildly important. The reason why this matters is because what ends up happening here is Bruce Banner goes and speaks directly to Jackie. And when she does, he basically tells her this whole thing is happening in the middle of the night. The clock is about to strike midnight. And when that happens, he's going to turn into Sasquatch again. When he does turn into Sasquatch, it will not be Walter Lankowski who's in control, it'll be the other guy. And because Bruce Banner doesn't really know about the idea that Tanarak is no longer part of the picture, in his mind, he believes Tanarak will be the one to seize control. And so that's when he tells Jackie, you have to evacuate the hospital, you have to get everybody out of here, because if you don't, everybody's going to die. And that's when Walter begins to sort of retransform again, begins to kind of push to the next phase, and then suddenly he ends up just having he really just kind of takes on this form that is almost identical to the old Tanarak character. And so it's kind of crazy because it seems like Tanarak is essentially back. Now this leads into a massive fight between the two groups when really the Incredible Hulk takes over and goes through and just starts tearing everything up. Now Bruce Banner is the one who tries to approach Walter and try to talk reason into him, but this is when, you know, Tanarak basically like slashes Bruce Banner's throat and says, you know, I don't want to talk to you, I want to talk to the other guy. And so Bruce Banner basically manifests into the Incredible Hulk, and the two of them start going at it. Now, this is when things get cool, because on the surface, we would write this off as just a retelling of the old 1970s Incredible Hulk stories with like the Incredible Hulk versus Sasquatch, and that would be it. What happens is Al Ewing actually switches it up, and where you end up having him believing, like where he ends up asking the question, are you possessed by like Mephisto or Tanarak or something like that? The response here is, I'm neither of those guys. I'm the person you're terrified of the most. And we end up finding out the body of Walter Lankowski is actually possessed by the father, by Brian Banner, the father of Bruce. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, when it comes to Bruce Banner's character, over the years, a hallmark of his character was that he was the child of an abusive father. But a lot of that really comes out of like Bill Mantlo and Peter David's runs of the Incredible Hulk, because back then in those stories, they fleshed out the idea that like the Incredible Hulk persona was a result of like all the torment, guilt, and hatred and rage that Bruce Banner felt at being victimized by his father so frequently. And so his father played a major role in the stories, especially under Peter David. But when you're talking about those two runs being combined, it caused all kinds of crazy situations, and it really introduced some really cool concept in terms of how Bruce Banner viewed his father and how he viewed himself. But where you end up having Bruce Banner walking around with like a victim's mindset and really almost like kind of panics for a moment, he basically starts lashing out. But what ends up happening is the Incredible Hulk kind of splits the difference, right? He sits down and he says, you know, in a matter of seconds, you know, in his own mind, he sits down and he says, Bruce Banner's the one that's afraid of his father. I'm the Incredible Hulk. I'm not afraid of anybody. The Incredible Hulk is the strongest there is. And this is when he makes the switch. And the Incredible Hulk stops being Incredible Hulk and turns back into Savage Hulk. And when he does, he absolutely goes toe to toe with Sasquatch. Now remember, Sasquatch was designed to be the Canadian version of the Incredible Hulk minus the unlimited strength. And so Sasquatch is able to readily hold his own and does quite well. I mean, literally you have, you know, Brian Banner in the body of Walter doing exactly what he does and ripping them apart. The difference here is that Brian Banner did not count on the one thing that we almost never see from the Incredible Hulk. The Incredible Hulk's response being, I eat gamma radiation. When it comes to the Incredible Hulk, because he consumes gamma radiation, anything that emits gamma radiation, he can essentially feed off of. You're basically putting him in front of a buffet. And because of the fact that Sasquatch is bombarded with gamma radiation, the Incredible Hulk basically absorbs the entire Sasquatch persona unto himself, and then in turn leaves Walter Lankowski with no powers whatsoever. And so what he ends up doing is speaking directly to Jackie herself. And this is kind of cool. He asks Jackie the question, he says, you're a local reporter in some small town somewhere, but you've decided to follow me all the way here. So the question I have is, why are you here? What are you looking for? And Jackie's response is, I want to be like you. Like, I want to have the power that you have. I want to be a version of the Incredible Hulk. Now, of course, this leads to the Hulk basically walking away and saying, go home, do your own thing. But it's kind of crazy because it introduces the idea that someone is intentionally chasing after to becoming the Incredible Hulk, which is not something you normally see. But where you end up having Walter Lankowski saying, like, the Sasquatch persona is gone, it's no longer a part of him anymore, when Bruce Banner is basically walking away, it's essentially this really cool idea where Al Ewing does a throwback to the old Peter David and Bill Mantlo stories, where the Incredible Hulk has reabsorbed the personality of his father. He's reabsorbed his father's ghost. And so this is one of those things where it returns to the old style of Incredible Hulk storytelling, back when it was more character driven, where you basically had the Incredible Hulk dealing with the torment of his father, giving him all kinds of hell and wreaking havoc inside of his head. Okay, so continuing to play catch up, we're covering the second part of Immortal Hulk, the one where he fights the Avengers, and I want to be dangerous here. I want to have this discussion about like Worldbreaker Hulk versus Immortal Hulk, because it's kind of this debate that's like raging across the internet right now, where like everybody in the comic book fandom is just kind of like, who would win here? Now there are a couple things to bear in mind here. There are a couple things going on with this little particular bit of a story, and to kind of pick up from the Immortal Hulk, which you can find the whole first volume down in the description. The idea here is, of course, Bruce Banner has been back for a little while. Really, he's been been back since like the events of Avengers No Surrender. And one of the things that kind of came out of that was the idea that the Incredible Hulk, and why this is called the Immortal Hulk, is that the Incredible Hulk seems to be inherently immortal, which is to say Bruce Banner kind of sat down and said, okay, the Incredible Hulk has quote unquote died multiple times and always managed to find a way to come back, meaning the Incredible Hulk is basically indestructible and cannot truly be killed. Now, in reality, this kind of seems like Al Ewing basically saying, hey, look guys, so we're probably going to kill the Hulk more than a few times, whether during my run or somebody else's run after mine. So don't worry, the Incredible Hulk's always going to come back. And for those people who had been reading comics long enough, I mean, hell, we could have told you that. At the moment as it stands right now, the Incredible Hulk has essentially kind of come out of his battle with Sasquatch, with Walter Lankowski. Right now, Sasquatch is not a hugely important thing. This is really kind of Al Ewing seeming to kind of wrap up a few plot threads that were sort of dangling during towards the end of like the Incredible Hulk, going into like Secret Wars 2015, where he was basically draining off the energy of people who were gamma irradiated. It really kind of seems to be like Al Ewing sort of clearing the field, right? Like pruning the tree and just kind of making the Incredible Hulk title his own. But regardless of the circumstance, the Incredible Hulk is more amped up now than he was before. And that's really the first part of our discussion when it comes to the Incredible Hulk, really Immortal Hulk versus Worldbreaker Hulk. Worldbreaker Hulk was rage incarnate, right? Like that's basically what he was. He was pure, unadulterated, distilled rage, angry as the Incredible Hulk had ever been. But all roads lead to Rome. Achieving a certain level of strength can be done in a multitude of various ways. And the Immortal Hulk running around and draining off the gamma radiation of various people is a way to amp up his power and kind of move him up to a higher level of strength. Now, Al Ewing up to this point is not really explicitly stated the Incredible Hulk is on par, like Immortal Hulk is on par with Worldbreaker Hulk. That's really kind of us to sort of determine by what we see. But one of the things that's going on here is that following the events of the Incredible Hulk's fight with Sasquatch and the fact that Lankowski had essentially been like possessed more or less and had killed a handful of doctors, what this has done is it's led to a guy named General Fordian essentially just kind of blackmailing Alpha Flight. Now, a little bit of catch up here for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with this, because in reality, the only way you would really know is if you were reading the Captain Marvel line of stories, which after the events of Civil War II, she's really been unpopular. When it came to Carol Danvers, because she was free floating for so long, what Marvel did is they kind of took the old Iron Fist and Power Man approach to like Alpha Flight and Carol Danvers. And what I mean by that is kind of winding back a little bit further. Iron Fist and Luke Cage were like really popular when they first came out, then they lost popularity within the span of like a year. And so what Marvel did is they kind of brought them together under Mary Jo Duffy and said you get Power Man and Iron Fist, heroes for hire. And that was kind of a way to boost their popularity by throwing them in as a team. And ultimately the title was canceled as a result of Jim Shooter's editorial decrees as the editor-in-chief for Marvel. But it's kind of what's going on here, right? Like Carol Danvers had been free floating for a long time. For like 25 years, she was free floating. But in that interim period between 2012 and the time that Civil War II came out, you had Marvel take Carol Danvers and throw her onto Alpha Flight and then have her lead SWORD, the Sentient World Observation and Response Department. And so what that meant was that with Alpha Flight being a Canadian superhero team that nobody ever really cared about, throwing them on and having them operate as SWORD basically meant that Carol Danvers oversaw all operations that dealt with SWORD in its charter monitoring space. And then Alpha Flight was basically her strike force team. And so with that being the case right now, with Alpha Flight basically being the strike force team and Lankowski having killed the doctors, it's good old-fashioned blackmail. It's General Fordian working through Thunderbolt Ross, who always wants to capture the Hulk, and basically saying, if Alpha Flight does not go through and capture the Hulk, then Lankowski will be held responsible for the lives he took, even though he wasn't really cognizant of what he was doing. So it's kind of forcing the hand of Alpha Flight, which in turn forces the hand of Carol Danvers. Now, the discussion of that Alpha Flight really has here is they sit down and they say, we cannot capture the Incredible Hulk by ourselves. And so Carol Danvers kind of responds by saying, I'll assemble my own little Avengers team. And so what she does is she gathers Iron Man with the Hulkbuster, Ghost Rider, Black Panther, Thor, Captain America, of course, and then She-Hulk. And so what they all end up doing is trying to stand their chance against Immortal Hulk. Now, in this attack, like he immediately takes the Incredible Hulk, gives Thor like a concussion with one punch. Now, Thor kind of speaks up and says like he's more powerful than he has been, but this does not mean that Thor's saying he's more powerful than he's ever been. That's a big distinction there. If you were to say he's more powerful than he's ever been, then that would supersede Worldbreaker Hulk. And we would basically be Al Ewing saying Immortal Hulk is stronger than Worldbreaker Hulk. All it means is that in the moment, Immortal Hulk is incredibly strong and incredibly durable. So again, it's kind of left to us to decide what it is that we're going to pull off. But one of the things to keep in mind here is that when Thor starts talking to Captain America, he basically says like what Earth seems to have reproduced here with the return of the Incredible Hulk is that he's essentially kind of a god. It's something close to a god. Not really a god, but something close to a god. Now, the Incredible Hulk's always been on that level, right? Like the Incredible Hulk, once his strength reaches a certain point, has always been sort of god tier in terms of what he could do. Now, it doesn't mean he's on par with Galactus, right? Like the Incredible Hulk decides he wants to fight Galactus. Galactus would just phase him out of existence, and that would be the end of the Incredible Hulk, and that fight would be 5 seconds long. But when you're talking about like strength, you're talking about like Thor either relating it to himself, who is a definitive god, or somebody more powerful than he is. Now, of course, the Incredible Hulk being able to give Thor a concussion with one punch, that's no small feat. Not only that, you've got the Hulkbuster armor, which Hulk just tears apart in the blink of an eye. Now, again, that's not really a major feat here because we've seen the Incredible Hulk do that before. That's not really a major feat here. Instead, the closest indication that Immortal Hulk is on par or possibly exceeds Worldbreaker Hulk comes in the satellites that Tony Stark uses to depower him. Now, these are not the same satellites that were used during Worldbreaker Hulk. They're basically satellites composed of hard light. They basically like bombard the Incredible Hulk with UV light and essentially hit him with the power of the sun. And that's kind of what it comes down to. Of course, the Incredible Hulk loses and the immediate vicinity is totally destroyed. But what we're seeing here is Al Ewing kind of giving us tidbits of what Immortal Hulk is truly capable of, but not really giving us a fleshed out, real discussion here on the feats of Immortal Hulk. And so because of that, there's not really a lot of information to go on here. That kind of goes into the next little bit when you basically have him taken and given to General Fordian and then in turn experimented on by General Fordian scientists. They literally dismember the Incredible Hulk, right? Like they use adamantium knives and various weapons and things like that, and they basically like dissect him, chop him into pieces, but Immortal Hulk is still alive. And so again, we're seeing like higher levels of durability, we're seeing like a higher level of healing factor when it ends up turning out that the only reason why the Immortal Hulk wanted to be captured was for the sole purpose of being able to see what his own feats were, right? Because what this is Al Ewing kind of saying, even when the Immortal Hulk was resurrected and came back to life, even he himself realized he was able to do things he wasn't able to do before. How far does this go? And so in this instance where, really like this doctor kind of realizes, hey, you just wanted to see what you're capable of, Immortal Hulk shatters the glass and all his pieces start reconstituting themselves and then in turn like reconstitute themselves around this doctor who just kind of gets like smashed, meshed inside Immortal Hulk, which is a pretty gruesome way to die. And then in turn, like Immortal Hulk just kind of breaks his way out. But what we're seeing here is again, higher levels of durability. We're seeing like an enhanced healing factor because we'd never seen the Incredible Hulk dismembered before and then in turn kind of restored. We'd never really seen that take place. So it's a whole new kettle of beans with regards to the powers that he possesses here. But probably the most damning little piece of evidence here when it comes to the Immortal Hulk is when he kind of like stumbles across when Bruce Banner in his normal human form kind of makes his way through and steals like from an old man's clothing line or whatever it is, probably some crazy guy in Texas, and of course he ends up shooting Bruce Banner, and then like the Incredible Hulk kind of is like, hey look, I'm gonna punch you a little bit, but like I'm not gonna kill you, and then just kind of storms off. That's it. But the introduction of Crusher Creel really kind of seems to be like the damning piece of evidence in terms of Immortal Hulk versus Worldbreaker Hulk and why Worldbreaker Hulk comes out on top. And the reason why I say this is, remember, Crusher Creel is the absorbing man, and he's kind of given this sort of Banner gene package as it's explained in the sense that like it's injected in him, and basically he kind of gets like the ability to absorb gamma radiation. That's really what this kind of goes into. Now, for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with Crusher Creel, he's really one of the more underrated but supremely capable characters in Marvel Comics. Crusher Creel is a guy who can basically absorb the properties of any kind of material and then turn his body into that material, right? Like Crusher Creel can touch steel and then become steel. He can touch brick and become brick. He can touch iron and become iron. And so he's wildly capable. And so if you were to fight him in like a construction area, oh, he'd be almost indestructible. And so with Crusher Creel showing up and fighting the Incredible Hulk with this kind of enhancement package, what ends up going on here is something that we've never really seen before. The Absorbing Man literally starts fighting Immortal Hulk and then in turn starts absorbing bits of his gamma radiation as they fight. But the fact that the Absorbing Man, the fact that Crusher Creel can go toe-to-toe with the Immortal Hulk is an indication Immortal Hulk is not on par with Worldbreaker Hulk, because if he was, this fight would have ended like that. But again, we never saw Immortal Hulk face off against Absorbing Man, so we don't really know how the two translate to each other. Not only that, there's a few variables here. The fact that the Absorbing Man can absorb bits of gamma radiation now changes everything, because as this goes through, it's one of the things where Absorbing Man gets stronger as the Incredible Hulk gets weaker, so he's literally siphoning off the Incredible Hulk's power. Now, it's kind of a cool thing here, because there's something going on behind the scenes that was not readily apparent before. When the Incredible Hulk essentially fought Sasquatch, because Sasquatch was possessed, whatever had possessed him had been passed to Immortal Hulk when Immortal Hulk had absorbed the gamma radiation of Sasquatch. And so what this meant was that this kind of dark evil persona, which had been manifesting as Brian Banner once it passed to the Incredible Hulk, is now passing itself directly to Crusher Creel. We didn't really know what it was. Initially, it was, oh my god, the father of Bruce Banner's back and, whatever, Peter David. And it was very easy to dismiss, which admittedly, I was guilty of doing. The fact remains that what we end up finding out here is that this persona is not Brian Banner. It was masquerading as Brian Banner. Instead, this is a being referred referred to as the one below all. And this requires some explanation, as most of you have been dying for, and it seemed like nobody really did explain it. Because I watched a lot of the videos on this and they were just kind of like, it's a thing that's happening. Moving on, I guess that's why I'm Comics Explained. So, in Marvel Comics, Satan is not an absolute construct. And the reason why I say this is that in Marvel Comics, the concept of hell is multifaceted, right? So like having our discussion on Hela from Asgardian mythos, for example, we've talked about her multiple times, that when Stan Lee and Jack Kirby first created the concept of Hela within Marvel, kind of adapted and then modified traditional Norwegian mythos, that hell was just the afterlife for everyone who died. Those who died in honorable battle went to Valhalla, those who didn't went to hell, and that was basically it. When Mistress Death was created, then that started introducing and really kind of spawned out all these different iterations of hell. And then different writers started bringing in the concept of like how this kind of relates to humanity. And so over the years in Marvel Comics, not so much by editorial decree, but because it just kind of worked out that way through various stories, you've had the creation of what are called Hell Lords. And these are basically beings who kind of rule over hell, right? So for the most part, with the exception of Hela, who's kind of out there by herself, hell is a singular place. But it's like this massive realm, this kind of massive dimension that is overseen in certain little areas by different beings, and different people are sent there for various purposes, right? So like you've got hell, which belongs, like a part of hell, which belongs to Mephisto. And then you've got like Satanish, Blackheart, these different concepts that exist out there in relation to like what hell really is, how it actually functions, and so on and so forth. Hell is an actual place that exists, and there are different concepts with it. Now, in terms of what it is that Al Ewing's doing, because of the fact that the Incredible Hulk ends up going to hell, that Al Ewing may change that in its entirety. But that's one of the things that kind of goes on here, is Crusher Creel and this one below all popping up here kind of changes the landscape, because there's only ever been a one above all. Saying the one below all seems to introduce what is definitively the absolute Satan in Marvel Comics. But if that's true, then it would follow suit with like traditional Western Christian mythology in the sense that the one above all would be like the Marvel Comics stand in for like the God of Abraham, basically, and the one below all would be the actual Satan, like Lucifer, Morningstar, tried and true, that kind of thing, that ties into like Western traditional like Baptist Christianity, that kind of thing. So again, we don't really know exactly how this is going to play out. It's still a concept being fleshed out by Al Ewing. But because of the fact that Crusher Creel is now possessed by this one below all being, it literally manifests itself by like splitting Crusher Creel in half and just like talking through his skull. It's like the creepiest thing ever. But in the middle of this whole fight, where the Hulk US group that originally kidnapped the Incredible Hulk, or at least that Hulk was handed over to after the whole thing while he was being experimented on, they're still trying to track him down. Alpha Flight's still trying to track down the Incredible Hulk, so on and so forth. When this happens, while this whole event is going on, Immortal Hulk sees Crusher Creel running off into the distance and realizes what's happening. That what had essentially taken place when the Gamma Bomb originally went off and transformed Bruce Banner into the Incredible Hulk, what it did is it cracked open a door to another dimension. But that door never fully opened. With Crusher Creel being the absorbing man, what he can do is effectively absorb all this gamma radiation in New Mexico and then open the door all the way. And it's actually a really cool concept, because what this does is it moves Crusher Creel away from being a guy who can just absorb physical elements, and in turn like a guy who can absorb like abstract concepts, which would really move him into like god tier status, to be honest. But the Incredible Hulk sits down and says like, this door, this green door is now open, and literally Alpha Flight, the Immortal Hulk, they're all yanked in and to the other side of this green door, which is essentially the realm of the one below all. And so that's cool, because what's basically gone on here is the Incredible Hulk has been sent to hell. But let me know what you guys think about this, and I want to know your thoughts. How do you guys think the Immortal Hulk stands against Worldbreaker Hulk? Because Worldbreaker Hulk did not have the ability to absorb gamma radiation, but Immortal Hulk does. All right, FYI, just so you guys know, the next 2 weeks are going to be a little hectic for me, so videos might be a little like scattered in terms of when they come out. But this coming weekend, I'm going to the Ultra Music Festival. Then the weekend after that, I'm going to WrestleMania. And after that is clear sailing. But until then, it's going to be kind of crazy. But in the last video, the really kind of what we picked up last when it came to the Incredible Hulk is the Incredible Hulk ended up in hell. Now, if you're curious how that happened, go check out the video. It's kind of a lengthy explanation, but the general gist here is that what Al Ewing kind of established is that in Marvel Comics, there's what's called the one below all. And the one below all is kind of like the opposite of the one above all, right? Which is kind of what you would expect given the name. But where the one above all is the creator of all things, Al Ewing kind of runs with like this sort of Judeo-Christian mythos, which is to say that like the one below all is essentially like Satan, and the one above all is like the God of Abraham, is really kind of what's being hit at here. And it's kind of a bold move to sort of adopt like the DC comic stance on like gods and so on and so forth and throw it into Marvel Comics. But the idea here was that somewhere along the line, and we'll actually find out in this story when that was, but somewhere along the line, the one below all basically intended to like gain access to the main universe by virtue of a door that was open during the original Gamma Bomb explosion of Bruce Banner, you know, when he basically became the Incredible Hulk. And so where he essentially kind of like entered in, where we're really kind of like pulled into hell when the door was opened by like the Absorbing Man, since he was being used by the one below all. What this means is that at the moment, they're basically walking around hell. Now, the cool thing about this is that no matter what you guys see in this story, all of this basically takes place in hell. But at the time, you know, as this is kind of going on, Al Ewing kind of writes in that these really cool series of questions where it's things like, what is hell supposed to be? What it does is it kind of plays into the notion of the worst kind of hell is your own personal hell. One that like you can't share with anybody else, where it's just you by yourself enduring torment like for all eternity. And so it's kind of crazy, you know, how this sort of unfolds. But what it also does is it basically switches over to the Absorbing Man. Now remember, the Absorbing Man Crusher Creel used to be a guy who could only absorb like tangible materials, right? So like metals and rock and, you know, plastics and water, different things like he could absorb all different kinds of things and then like become that thing. But one of the things Al Ewing kind of built on here is that Absorbing Man has the ability to basically absorb gamma radiation. And that's one of the things that Bruce Banner kind of picked up as a byproduct of like their fight, or at least, you know, kind of a kind of a change on his character. But because of the fact that Absorbing Man had basically been used by the one below all for the purpose of like opening the gamma ray door, again, we didn't exactly know what that motivation was. Now, if this seems kind of ambiguous and confusing to you, don't worry, because it'll all get cleared up by the end of the story. We can't really explain it yet. But it is kind of a cool little thing because he's basically met by the arrival of Puck. Now, we have no idea why Puck's here. Puck's one of the guys from Alpha Flight, but one of the things that ends up going on as they basically go through this version of hell, they kind of end up running into these characters who have essentially like passed away. But the difference is that like they've been sent to hell for some reason or another, and what they're basically running into are kind of like these copies of them. The difference here is that like the various people with the Incredible Hulk, while they do kind of know where they're at, the thing they struggle with is like letting go. But it's one of the things that they're really kind of failing to realize here. But at the same time, it kind of makes sense, because historically speaking in Marvel Comics, when somebody enters into the afterlife, which is to say like when someone dies and passes on, it's possible to retrieve them. But it's kind of Al Ewing toying with that idea, something that's like potentially possible here. The other part of this is that of course with General Thunderbolt Ross dying, the Incredible Hulk didn't know this. And in fact, we don't really know exactly how Thunderbolt Ross died. We know that he's dead. We know that like in Captain America he's dead. We know in this he's dead. And it's kind of cool to see the whole thing happen, but what it does is it creates like a Hell Red Hulk, right? Like a Red Hell Hulk. It's like this really twisted, mutated version of the Red Hulk that's just like rampaging and facing off against the Incredible Hulk himself. Now, again, one of the things that happens here is because they fought a multitude of times before, and because this is not really the Red Hulk, he's not as powerful as he normally is. And so for the most part, the Incredible Hulk overpowers him and literally like shuts him down quick, fast, and in a hurry, and like tears his body in half. So for the most part, it ends pretty quickly. And so from here, what we do is we switch over to Brian Banner and Bruce Banner kind of being kept in like a stasis of sorts. What's kind of been shown here consistently is that like Brian Banner, the father of Bruce, his abusive father, is like the ghost that torments him that just won't go away. But that's actually not the case. But with this conversation between the two, what it does is it basically kind of explains what's going on with the nature of Brian Banner in terms of like how he functions and so on. And that's one of the big differences here, is that this is in a way Brian Banner, but not truly. It's Brian Banner in terms of his forms and memories, but it's also Brian Banner in the sense that like he's possessed by the one below all. But what Brian Banner basically says is that he was one of the world's leading scientists when it came to gamma radiation, and that in studying gamma radiation and in studying like what it was possible and what all could be done, what he ended up doing was having this dream where he basically witnessed like this green door and what laid beyond it. And what laid beyond it was basically this kind of like this demon entity that nobody had ever seen or heard of before. But with Brian Banner kind of having this sort of torment, you know, having this fear based out of it, the other part that came with that is his anger towards Bruce. And what it almost kind of seems to do is create a corollary when the two were entirely separate. That when it came to Brian Banner, he was raised in a household where he was abused all the time. He never knew anything but just like hate and torment and abuse. And so when his wife came along, suddenly like he knew what it was like to be loved. The fear was that when his child was born, that like he would take the love away from him. Like his wife would love the child more than she would love him. So it's sort of Al Ewing's way of coming along and just saying like, yeah, like Brian Banner was like literally hated his son because he was afraid his wife wouldn't love him anymore. And how did he do that? By literally beating the crap out of his wife and pushing her away. It was kind of a screwed up, tormented perspective of himself. But that's kind of what he looks at. When he looks at Bruce, he's kind of like, that's the nature of things. Like I'm screwed up, you're screwed up, the whole 9 yards. And so what we end up finding out here is that as they're kind of climbing their way up to the top of this tower, basically where this green light emits from, that the one below all is waiting for them, that the one below all basically intends to use and intends to like enter into the main Marvel universe using the body of Bruce Banner. Now, it's kind of cool here. The reason why the one below all intends to do this with Bruce Banner specifically is that when Bruce and the Incredible Hulk entered into hell, they split. Basically, they split into two different beings, which of course we've seen happen before. But for Bruce, it works because of the fact that Bruce Banner's body is the only one that can really withstand that much gamma irradiated power that the one below all uses. Now, in terms of how Crusher Creel tied into this, the idea was that with Crusher Creel, there needed to be a means to essentially open the door. That with Crusher Creel, he was really nothing more than just somebody running around and siphoning off gamma radiation from people, and then in turn, like siphoning it off the Hulk, and then being taken to like the original launch site for the Incredible Hulk gamma bomb, and then in turn, opening the door. That's really kind of how that played out. Like that was the whole basis behind the actions of Absorbing Man. Go around, absorb everybody's gamma radiation, and then open the door. That way the Incredible Hulk will inevitably follow you in because he's going to want to know what's going on. When he arrives here, him and Bruce Banner will split. I'll take the body of Banner, and then I'll go into the main Marvel universe. Now, the question is, what would happen if the one below all did that? Well, we have to assume if the one below all is the antithesis of the one above all, then it has to be equally powerful, which of course begs the question, why can it not escape its own dimension? So again, there's a few caveats here in terms of, some questions that we still need to have answered by Al Ewing himself. But that's really what kind of goes on, is that in order to basically deal with kind of keep the Incredible Hulk at bay while the one below all does its whole thing, what it does is send like a veritable army of demons facing off against the Incredible Hulk. Now, of course, Rick Jones kind of regains himself to a degree and then like fights off against these demons with the Incredible Hulk, and then of course Rick Jones basically dies. But in the process, the Absorbing Man essentially absorbs like all the gamma radiation he can, like all the gamma radiation that was put in there, and then in turn like blows it back into the Incredible Hulk. And so what this means is the Incredible Hulk is supercharged. The Incredible Hulk is back to where it was before, but also more powerful and amped up because of all this gamma radiation that he's essentially siphoned off from like everybody else, right? Like that was the basis behind the Incredible Hulk. He was a guy who was a byproduct of gamma rays. But what the Incredible Hulk is doing now is he's running around with the gamma rays of like everybody who's ever been an Incredible Hulk. It's an amped up Incredible Hulk. And when that happens, like when the Incredible Hulk gets that amped up, he fights the devil. Like he literally fights Satan. Like he just unleashes like this massive clack and like dissipates this cloud that makes up the one below all. And then in turn, like he just kind of, vanishes for a little bit. Now, one of the things that Al Ewing hits on is that like the Incredible Hulk did not actually kill the one below all. There's no way he could, because the one below all is just so astronomically powerful that all the Incredible Hulk's done is just kind of dissipate him and buy them a few minutes, enough to be able to basically like travel through the doorway and return back to Earth. But that's basically exactly what happens. Like the two of them just kind of, them alongside like Sasquatch and Puck and everybody else, just basically like travel through this barrier back in the main Marvel universe. But again, it wraps up pretty fast. Not a whole lot doing here. I mean, it's a cool little story, but it's more of one of those things where it just kind of wraps up quick, fast, and in a hurry. But the overall gist here, really kind of the big takeaway from what it is that Al Ewing's done, is he's created a whole nother cosmic entity. You've got a being who presumably is on some level equal to the one above all, but it's absolute opposite. And so that begs the question, if the one below all can only jump into the bodies of those who can basically house gamma radiation and can withstand its power, basically being Bruce Banner, then what would happen if the one below all traveled into the main Marvel universe, successfully arrived? Would it be like Dormammu, where like everybody's gonna die and there's no two ways about it? Is that how it's gonna play out? Is that how it's gonna go down? We don't really know here. But it is cool and it is pretty interesting. Okay, so continuing on with the Immortal Hulk, man, here is the thing. I've been reading the Incredible Hulk for years, right? Like even before Greg Pak's run, like I've been reading the Incredible Hulk for years, and for the most part, the stories always just kind of seem to be rehashed. That's why Greg Pak's run was so cool. Like Greg Pak's run basically did things that we hadn't seen before. Like you had Bill Mantlo, you had Peter David. It was like, okay, the psychological torment of Bruce Banner's father on Bruce himself, and the reason why we have the Hulk and all that kind of stuff. And then for something like 20 years, it was basically just sort of like fill-in stories, right? Like the Incredible Hulk smashing things now, and so on. And then Greg Pak's run brings in like Planet Hulk and World War Hulk and, World War Hulk After Smash, all that kind of stuff. You get like these really cool stories. And then like Al Ewing comes along and turns the entire thing on its head, because the way this ends is nuts. It's one of the coolest things ever. I don't really even think most of you guys know who it is that shows up at the end. And it kind of makes sense because he's only ever really appeared like once. But what this does is it initially kind of picks up with like Rick Jones, right? Because that's one of the things that really kind of came in with the stories that we saw, was that Rick Jones's body was taken and Betty Ross was shot in the head, right? And it was really a way for like Al Ewing to kind of thin the herd, so to speak, of like the Incredible Hulk mythos, or at least that seemed to be the case. But what it does is it kind of switches over to Jackie McGee. Now remember, Jackie McGee is the reporter that we've seen over the course of Al Ewing's run on the Immortal Hulk. So it works in terms of her just kind of being here, and really ever since the events of like the Incredible Hulk in Hell, which she was part of, she's like, okay, I kind of need to like sit back and just not be a part of anything right now, because what I've seen was crazy. And so I need to kind of regain my bearings, get back to a state of normalcy and try to figure it out. And her boss is like, but like, no, you're not either. Cause like, we need you to go, we need you to go figure out what's going on with the fact that a giant hole was smashed in the house of Betty Ross, and like something's going on here, right? So it's basically like, get back into the Incredible Hulk investigation and that kind of stuff, which is kind of wild. And so from here, you end up picking up with Bruce Banner and with Doc Samson. Now, Doc Samson is a character that we haven't really talked about much before, and in all honesty, there's not really been a reason to. I mean, Leonard Samson's okay, but basically he's infected with gamma radiation, but he never really turns into a tried and true Hulk, right? Like the green skin and all that kind of stuff. Instead, his hair just turns green whenever he taps into his super strength. Now, he's not infinitely strong, right? Like there is a finite level to his strength, but in reality, he's always kind of been more of an outlier in the Hulk family than anything else, right? I've always kind of considered him to be that way. It's one of these things where he's a guy that Bruce usually always goes to whenever he needs help, right? I mean, it was Doc Samson who was working with Bruce Banner when we got Professor Hulk, when we ended up getting Grey Hulk merging with Savage Hulk and then creating like a whole new personality. Doc Samson's usually always been kind of like the psychologist behind what's going on with Bruce, but he also works with him outside of that stuff too. So it's kind of cool for what it is, but again, he's just sort of here, and Bruce essentially says, hey, look, there's things going on here, but my memory is in little blocks. I can't really fit in all the pieces. We need the Incredible Hulk to do the rest. Now, this is one of the things that Al Ewing has really kind of touched on when it's come to the Incredible Hulk, and really kind of established that wasn't really there before. Whenever it came to the Incredible Hulk, he would just manifest. There have been times over the years when Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk have kind of worked together, and Bruce can bring the Hulk out and say, hey man, we need you, buddy, and the Hulk will be like, okay, and then he'll pop up and do his thing. But more often than not, they've been conflicting personalities, and when that happens, basically Bruce doesn't really remember anything the Incredible Hulk does. Again, there have been instances where he does, but it's not normally part of the mythos. But one of the things that Al Ewing has really kind of established here is an almost werewolf kind of situation where the Incredible Hulk comes out at night and Bruce Banner comes out during the day. It's kind of a cool thing. Now, Al Ewing does not dismiss the notion of the Incredible Hulk popping up when he needs to, but one of the things that he focuses on is that if Bruce Banner's in the presence of like UV rays of sunlight, then the Incredible Hulk's not going to be able to pop up. It's kind of cool. The fact remains, the Incredible Hulk's able to kind of fill in the missing pieces, and so when him and Doc Samson break into the shadow-based facility that Bruce Banner was previously held at, this in turn leads to like all these gamma irradiated animals, right? And this is kind of cool because what this does, if those of you guys who've been reading Marvel for a long time, this really hints hard with different notes of like Weapons Plus, right? Like that's what it feels like. Weapons Plus was like Weapon 1 was Captain America, right? Like if you go back and you read Grant Morrison's X-Men, I think it was, Captain America was Weapon 1. Nobody knew how to duplicate the super soldier serum. So what you got under Weapons Plus is you got Weapon 1 with Captain America, then you got 2 through 9, which is just random experiments trying to create super soldiers. Then you got Weapon 10, which was Wolverine, and then you got characters after that. You got Deadpool, you got Phantom X, you got the Stepford Cuckoos, you got like all these different versions, but this is what this feels like. And so what they've been doing is like irradiating animals with gamma radiation to see what happens. So you've got like gamma irradiated bats, you've got a gamma irradiated dog is what it looks like. You've got a gamma irradiated gorilla, which actually looks awesome. But what they're also doing is they're basically wrapping someone or something in a cocoon with the intention of like creating another gamma irradiated beast. And it's kind of an interesting thing because when that happens, what we end up finding out, at least once all these animals are destroyed, is that basically this was a trap that had been set. These were basically a distraction. And when that whole thing pops off, it'll basically lead to like the defeat of the Hulk, or at least the attempted defeat. What they didn't account for was the sudden emission of solar rays, like ultraviolet rays. And when that happens, the Incredible Hulk is forced back into Bruce Banner's form, and then they're met by the arrival of Bushwhacker. Now, Bushwhacker's been here since really like the beginning for the most part of Al Ewing's run, but Bushwhacker is an old school character. He was created back in 1987. It was a Daredevil comic. I don't remember which one, but it was Ann Senti and Rick Leonardi, I think is who it was. But basically he was just like this guy who was not really a contract killer. Well, kind of, I mean, he really kind of was, right? Like the idea was he built on mutant hysteria. Originally when he was created, he built on mutant hysteria and started taking out mutants. Wolverine figured it out, and then his wife thought he was crazy. And so the result was that Wolverine started tracking down Bushwhacker, and then his wife basically went to Matt Murdock and was like, we got to get this guy committed. And ultimately it led to like the two of them coming into conflict in an effort to catch Bushwhacker. They didn't. And ultimately like Carl ended up going to work for Kingpin, I think it was. And then after that, he just kind of free floated Marvel Comics for years. But it's kind of a cool thing because with Bushwhacker getting the upper hand on Bruce, what Bushwhacker didn't account for is the arrival of Joe Fixit, right? Like the return of Joe Fixit Hulk. Now, Now, Joe Fixit Hulk, and in fact, it's kind of cool because Al Ewing sort of covers this in the story, but we can explain it here. Joe Fixit Hulk is really more of like mobster Hulk. And in truth, he's the original Hulk. So in terms of like real world publications, the Incredible Hulk was originally gray. Most all of you guys probably know that in the 6-issue miniseries. Marvel had to change him to green because of printing issues. But what Marvel never explained in the comics is why the Incredible Hulk originally showed up gray and then turned green. It wasn't until later on down the line that Joe Fixit was introduced that what Marvel said is that in terms of the Incredible Hulk continuity appearances, which is to say inside the comics, in the Marvel universe, which Hulk came first, it was Joe Fixit. That when Bruce Banner was first blasted by the gamma radiation, he turned into Joe Fixit, then Joe Fixit went dormant, and then the Savage Hulk came out, and he'd been that way ever since. But one of the things that goes on here is he can't actually transform into the gray Hulk persona because of these solar rays. So it's basically Bruce Banner with the strength of Joe Fixit, or at least part of the strength of Joe Fixit, but then he doesn't have the ability to like heal from anything. And so when you have someone like Bushwhacker who's got cybernetic enhancements, what it does is it gives Bushwhacker the upper hand over Bruce Banner himself. And so when that happens, Joe Fixit has to basically rely on like ingenuity and intelligence in order to be able to pull it off. And that's kind of the cool thing, because with these enhancements, again, Bushwhacker does stuff like make his hand into like a gun, different things like that. But when he goes through, he basically manages to like hack the lighting system. And when that happens, he starts sorting through all these different wavelengths, ultimately reaching gamma radiation. And when that happens, like it just starts like, because it's so much gamma radiation at one time, it kind of overwhelms his body. He turns into like this giant, crazy looking Hulk form and then like smashes Bushwhacker and actually just ends up killing him. But then we end up finding out that what Shadowbase has been working on here is creating a new version of Abomination. And this new Abomination that they've been working on is actually Rick Jones. So it's kind of a way to kind of bring the Rick Jones concept back and then just sort of go forward from there. But what this does is it switches over to Jackie McGee, and then it jumps into the character of Betty Ross, and we find out she's not actually dead. What really seems to have happened is she seems to have evolved. This is one of the things that no one's ever really seemed to hit on when it comes to the Incredible Hulk mythos, and it's actually a new concept as far as I'm aware. When it comes to the Incredible Hulk, one of the things to bear in mind is that it really is a mutation of genes, but the gene mutation is unstable, right? That's the reason why Bruce Banner can go from like the Incredible Hulk and back again. His genes literally change from one form to another. But it would make sense that there would be like a next stage of evolution that like any one of the Hulks could reach and turn into something else. With the mutant population, it was like that for years, right? Like the mutants were just like a singular power, right? Like a mutant pops up, their powers manifest, and then they have those powers forevermore. It wasn't until Grant Morrison's run on New X-Men that suddenly we got secondary mutations. It doesn't happen all the time, but it can. That's how Emma Frost got her diamond form. And that seems to be what's going on here with Betty Ross. So like she's basically mutated and transformed into like a new version of like a new kind of Hulk that we haven't seen before. Now, the reason why this matters and the reason why this is important is not because Betty Ross is a new version of Hulk, because it sets a precedent. Because what it means is that from this point going forward, Al Ewing can at any point change the Incredible Hulk into something else. The status quo is maintained and it makes sense. And so from here, like you literally have Bruce Banner who goes to essentially like Vegas, basically like goes to this really shoddy looking hotel and then starts talking to the Incredible Hulk through a mirror, right? And what he says is there's these versions of ourselves that we haven't really accounted for, or at least that are out there somewhere, right? So like Savage Hulk, Child Hulk is a really good one. Devil Hulk, this is the first time we've seen it referenced in quite some time. Joe Fixit Hulk, we have Bruce himself. Then you've got Professor Greenscar Hulk, who we have not seen since Jonathan Hickman's run on Avengers and New Avengers when the Incredible Hulk was running around. So there are these versions of Bruce, these versions of Hulk that Bruce cannot account for and doesn't know where they are. But then we've also got this new Immortal Hulk. And so it's kind of cool because Bruce is basically sitting down and reconciling all these versions of himself. Really kind of Al Ewing saying, here are the versions of Hulk that I care about, and here are the ones that you'll most likely see over the course of the Immortal Hulk story. But then of course, they're met by the arrival of the new Abomination in the form of Rick Jones. Now, Abomination, when it was Emil Blonsky, was just like this violent guy who destroyed things. That was really all it was. With this version, it's actually kind of got a mutation in the sense that what it does is it basically consumes other people, right? I mean, it really seems to consume their heads more than anything else. But what it also has the ability to do is spew this kind of stomach acid that really seems to like negate the healing factor of the Incredible Hulk, right? And we know this because when that happens, the Incredible Hulk's hand is basically like dissolved and destroyed. It doesn't come back. And so what this does is create a kind of final weakness for the Incredible Hulk, which is to say this version of Abomination is the deadliest one we've seen before. And the reason why is because, again, unlike Emil Blonsky, this one can emit an acid that will take away from the healing factor of the Hulk, right? So it's like the Muramasa blade of Wolverine, or like carbonadium when it comes to anybody with a healing factor. It's a cool little way for Al Ewing to kind of reach out into the mythos of what Marvel's done so far and then grab these small little tidbits and roll them in. But these forces of Shadowbase, which basically kind of destroy these loose ends, these folks who witnessed what happened and are running out of the hotel, when they take them out, now they're met by the arrival of Betty Ross as like this giant bird Hulk looking thing, which is actually incredibly violent. She's like ripping people's heads off and like tearing off their legs and like gutting them. And it's just, dude, it's like the most violent thing ever. And it's amazing. Dude, Al Ewing, I love this. I love this. It's actually pretty awesome. But nonetheless, this version of Betty, she is still coherent to a degree, but she's not like her former self, right? She's actually seems to be a little more simple in terms of her function. When she was Red She-Hulk, she was a lot more in control of herself and able to function like a normal, coherent human being. And this one, she's almost kind of reverted to like a very base form. And while Shadowbase is watching all this unfold, and the Abomination is like, seems to be like tearing up the Incredible Hulk, and really like it has done a number on him, taking his eyes and so on and so forth, and left him for dead. Betty Ross, where it would seem that she was going to go save or going to go fight Abomination, instead, she turns on the Incredible Hulk, rips his heart out, and then eats it. And so it's kind of like, okay, so like basically the Incredible Hulk's dead now, and everyone's turned on him. And so what this does is it switches to Bruce Banner being sent back to hell, right? Like being sent back to the realm of the One Below All, where again, he basically meets with the One Below All in the form of his father. But then we get this sort of information drop that we didn't have before, that Al Ewing is really, again, kind of interjecting and changing things up. So when it came to gamma radiation in Marvel Comics, for years, it was just one of the various forms of light wavelengths, right? Like that was really it. It was just an energy that was out there. You could blast somebody with gamma radiation or whatever, but it was basically just a form of a form of light ray. What's established here by Al Ewing is what he says is that in this instance, that's not all of it. Like it is a light ray, that's true, but it's also like the other half of it is also like energy that basically is emitted from like the realm of the One Below All. Bruce Banner exists partly because the One Below All allowed him to, right? Like the One Below All was always looking for a way to kind of escape his realm and enter into like the main Marvel universe, essentially like being Satan, more or less, right? Like Satan's desire to escape hell and then show up in Earth and wreak havoc among, all kinds of crazy stuff. That kind of seems to be the case here. And it's cool because what it says is that like Bruce Banner, like you are essentially part and parcel to the realm of hell. This is where you belong. By virtue of everything that's happened, the energy you need to become the Incredible Hulk is here. What triggers it is the gamma radiation light that exists out there in the main Marvel universe. The Incredible Hulk couldn't exist if the One Below All didn't exist. It's kind of a crazy thing because the response of Bruce is like, there's no way that's true. That can't be the case. But the response of the One Below All is, no, but it is though. Like it's an absolute truth. But here's the issue. And this is why I like what it is that Al Ewing does. We don't know if he's telling the truth. We don't know if he's being honest. Like you could kind of assume he is, but there's no reason to believe he is, right? Because of the One Below All is kind of like this prime version of evil, right? Like this absolute evil in which all other forms of evil stem from, all other demons and things like that, like Mephisto and so on and so forth. If all that's the case, then like there's no reason to believe that it would be telling the truth if being deceptive and being duplicitous would basically lead to his goals being achieved. So again, it's a cool little moment here because in the middle of all this, what suddenly happens is Bruce Banner wakes back up again, right? Like he pops back up, the Incredible Hulk manifests again and starts tearing into Abomination and actually seems to rip him apart pretty easy, right? The fight's over like that. I mean, it's over in the blink of an eye. And so from there, like, of course, Jackie McGee shows up and she's like, what the heck's going on? Like, I thought you were dead. And it's kind of a cool explanation here. What Al Ewing says is that the Incredible Hulk having his heart ripped out jump-started his healing factor because remember, the Incredible Hulk exists as self-preservation. That's the most important charter of the Incredible Hulk. That's why it is in the comics, whenever Bruce Banner was like fatally wounded and the Incredible Hulk popping up would save him, that's exactly what would happen. The Hulk exists to save himself. And the only way the Hulk can really exist is if Bruce Banner's physical form exists, right? There have been a few instances where that's not been the case, where they've been separated from each other, but that's not the status quo. That's not the norm. They always end up merging back into a singular being again. The only other exception to that is during the Doc Green run, I think it was, when Dr. Doom created a new host body and basically put Banner in this new body, and then the Incredible Hulk went forward in Banner's body and then just kind of stayed that way, right? So you had like Bruce Banner walking around, then you had the Incredible Hulk walking around, and then they eventually, merged back into a singular being again. But again, it's kind of cool here. I mean, literally, the Incredible Hulk just like rips open what's basically this shell surrounding Rick Jones, and then you have Rick Jones' physical form back again. So it seems to have kind of been a way for Al Ewing to bring back Rick Jones, right? Because he'd been dead, more or less. It seems to have been a way for him to bring him back by saying, hey, look, Rick Jones was physically dead. He was in the ground. That was the end of it. And then you have his body taken by the Shadowbase Initiative, by the Hulk Initiative. They cover him in this basically like a shell that essentially is the new Abomination. And then once that shell is ripped off and that version of Abomination is destroyed, all you have left is Rick Jones's body. And so it's kind of a cool thing because we don't know if Rick Jones is actually going to come back or if he's just going to be left to be buried and that's going to be the end of it. But it is kind of a cool little moment, a small little thing for his character. We don't really know where things go from here. And so what ends up happening is that in the midst of all this, you basically have like Bruce Banner, who seems to have kind of been whisked away. We don't know exactly when this takes place. All we know is he's essentially kind of yanked away into this dark void surrounded by a few stars. He's hanging out with like Mr. Immortal, which is really weird. And then like this kind of, bright figure approaches him and says like, do you know who I am? Do you know what this is? All the things you've ever done over the course of your life, do you truly know what you are? Do you know what you're meant to be and what you are to become? Do you have any real idea what it is that's going on here? And it's kind of crazy because Bruce Banner here is met by the arrival, or really met by like Metatron. I don't know if any of you guys know who Metatron is. I feel like most people don't because he's so obscure, but Metatron is basically the voice of the One Above All. And it's cool because what this means is the One One Above All is paying particular attention to everything going on with Bruce Banner. Whether or not the One Above All chooses to act, we don't know. We assume he will. Like, we assume the One Above All will act. But basically, like, everything that's been going on here with the Immortal Hulk with regards to the One Below All and everything that's been happening on Earth has all gone noticed by the One Above All. And presumably it will act, it will intervene, or it will do something. And I don't know, maybe it'll make him to like Angel Hulk or something like that. Okay, so we are getting into the Immortal Hulk tie-in for the King in Black. Now, for those of you guys who are not following Immortal Hulk, and I think we're about one story arc behind, there's a lot that's happening in there, right? So what's really happened more recently is that the leader had basically found out or figured out a way to essentially tap into and remove, in essence, the personalities of the Incredible Hulk, right? So like Devil Hulk and all those different versions. So Devil Hulk, that personality has been killed off. The mind of Bruce Banner, so like his consciousness, was extracted from the body of the Incredible Hulk. And so all we really have right now in the Immortal Hulk line of stories is the Savage Hulk, who's been drained of a ton of gamma radiation, so he's really emaciated. And whenever the Savage Hulk turns back into Banner, it's basically Joe Fixit Hulk who can essentially controls the body of Banner, right? So Bruce Banner's mind isn't actually there. So whenever we see Bruce Banner in this story, it's essentially Joe Fixit who's walking around pretending to be Banner, right? But the funny thing about this is one of those comics that we rarely ever get to see where we don't have any words whatsoever. Instead, it's all just art. And it's an awesome idea. See, these are the kind of comics that I love, right? It's one of the reasons why you guys, like for King in Black, one, it's definitely a story you should be buying. But two, comics like this are comics that I would personally buy. For those of you guys who don't really know how I deal with comics, for the most part, I only really buy digitally. The only time I ever buy a physical copy of a comic is if it's of significance. So like I have a physical copy of Giant Size X-Men #1, Fantastic Four Annual #2, which is the original origin of Doctor Doom. I've got, I think X Factor issue #5, which is the first appearance of Apocalypse. But I only really buy comics that are like super significant. I only really buy physical versions of that. Beyond that, I just buy them digitally, right? Because it's infinitely easier to read all my comics on an iPad than it is to carry around like 15 physical comic books, right? I mean, after all, this is 2020. Digital is the name of the game, at least for me anyway. So one of the cool things about this is that what you have here is essentially like Christmas Eve, more or less, right? Now this takes place, of course, after Null has basically descended onto New York and presumably the rest of the world. But one of the funny things that's shown here is that when we initially saw the King in Black one-shot, it basically looked like all was lost, right? That like all humanity was conquered, all was lost. It was the end of the day for everybody. What this really points to is the idea that it's not necessarily all is lost, that a lot of people are in hiding, right? A lot of people are kind of retreating and trying to stay hidden away from being attacked by Null, but that New York in and of itself, in terms of the heroes that we know, have more or less fallen, right? And a lot of this comes by way of a guy who's just making his way through the street, right? Taking some presents, some different things that he has, and trying to leave. But when he drops one of these gifts, he's suddenly met by the arrival of the Immortal Hulk. Now again, the Immortal Hulk is drained of a ton of gamma radiation, and that's why he's not nearly as huge as he normally is. He's still strong as all get out. Like, make no mistake, he's by no means like on par with like the average guy, right? It's not like, you know, Immortal Hulk versus Captain America, who's gonna win an arm wrestling contest. It's not really like that. He's still super strong, just not necessarily where he used to be in terms of all his abilities and all that kind of stuff. But this guy basically sees him and is scared out of his wits, right? He's just like, what in the heck? So he takes off running. Now, when this present drops, the Immortal Hulk, because of the fact that he's basically a childlike savage beast, reacts the way a child would, right? Like, presents, you know, and then just goes to grab it. But then suddenly he's met by the arrival of one of the Grendels of Null. And this is where things get interesting. Now, the funny thing about this is that when it comes to Savage Hulk in Marvel Comics, over the years, he's largely been displayed in a few different ways, but those ways have essentially been limited, right? So either you see what is in essence a childlike persona, not in so far as like he acts like a kid, but in the sense that he thinks like a kid, right? He thinks in simple terms, that he's not by any means the sharpest tool in the shed. The idea that the Savage Hulk always wanted to be left alone, right? He just wanted to live in peace. There was a time, and I think it was either doing Roy Thomas or Bill Mantlo or Peter David's run, or maybe all three, where he basically just kind of wanted to live out in the wilderness on his own and just be left alone, right? And people just kept running up on him and causing him problems. I want to say that was Roy Thomas, because that was when the whole arcs about General Thunderbolt Ross really started to take off in terms of him being a villain for the Immortal Hulk. But in terms of how he's shown here, which is a very, very childlike person, right? So the Incredible Hulk operating and thinking on the level of like a 4 or a 5-year-old is not really something that we've seen before. We haven't really seen him depicted exactly in that way. And so one of the things that happens here is, of course, the Immortal Hulk basically ends up grabbing, you know, this streetlight post and then just like beats the crap out of the Grendel symbiote with it. Now, of course, this is by no means going to stop this thing, right? I mean, it's not going to work. But what happens in all of this, and this is really a really cool moment. What happens in all this is that when the Grendel symbiote goes to seize control of the Immortal Hulk to take him over and then bring him into the fold as being a servant of Null, the Immortal Hulk grabs the stub where the light post used to be, and because of the electricity coursing through it, it goes through him and then into the Grendel, which basically fries the thing to, like, it totally incinerates it. And so that's kind of a cool thing, because I like this idea that the Savage Hulk is kind of this childlike lumbering beast that kind of bumps his way into success, because it still kind of maintains the nature of the Hulk. That by and large, the Incredible Hulk was just brute strength. That's all he really was. And there was a kind of element to there that, like, the Incredible Hulk did whatever the sort he needed him to do in order to win. But a lot of really classic and great writers, you know, Steve Englehart, even people like that, focused on the idea that the Incredible Hulk, despite being childlike and stupid, still had this sort of understanding of how to utilize the things around him. Right now, I'm not saying this childlike Hulk is like, okay, Hulk grab electric post shock Grendel, Hulk escape. Like, I doubt it was that line of logic. We're not really given any kind of thought pattern here. And that's what's really cool, is it gives us the ability to kind of make it up on our own, or at least reference the Immortal Hulk as we go through it. But what ends up happening is that when he opens this you know, little present, that it's basically just this small little, you know, keychain type device that looks like a whistle of sorts. But because of all the pandemonium and the chaos, that you end up having these cops that show up. Right now, the Incredible Hulk consistently wanted. The Incredible Hulk consistently untrusted, you know, not trusted. Now, even, you know, especially now in the aftermath of really everything going on with the leader, the aftermath of the events of Shadowbase and all that kind of stuff, the Hulk's like public enemy number one, right? Like, everybody's hunting for this guy. And so where he points down to the ground to where the symbiote was, but it's no longer there, then, like, one, they don't really know what to make of it. And two, if there was something there to see, it's not there anymore. So as far as they're aware, the Hulk's just being crazy like he always is, and they immediately open fire. Now, of course, this leads to the Immortal Hulk basically jumping away, but both of these cops are seized upon by the Grendel symbiote. Now, as the Immortal Hulk kind of makes his way through, he ends up coming across a place called Mantlow's. Now, of course, this is an obvious reference to Bill Mantlo. Kudos to you, Al Ewing, for doing this. Al Ewing's the one who's writing Immortal Hulk right now. Kudos to you, man. It's like one of the most prolific Incredible Hulk writers in the history of the comic. If you care about the, you know, character dissection, right? If all you want to do is see the Hulk smash, then Greg Pak's the writer for you. But if you care more about, like, the interpersonal relationships of the Hulk, why he does what he does, the whole idea of, like, psychological trauma and all that kind of stuff, then Bill Mantlo is kind of the writer for you from back in the day, right? Bill Mantlo, and then Peter David, who just kind of continued a lot of the writing that Bill Mantlo did. Now, the reality is this story is basically a stand-in for, like, FAO Schwartz, just a ridiculously overpriced and expensive toy store. You'd only ever buy, like, 2 things there, right? Like, it's ridiculous. Kind of a funny story. Myself, Mariah, Sal, and Tiffany, and I think Ben and Ethan over at Comic Pop, and maybe Danielle, we all met up during the weekend that myself and Mariah were going to WrestleMania, and we all went to, like we went to eat and went to go shop in New York, and we went to, like, FAO Schwartz, and it really is just that expensive, right? They're really selling products based on their name. That's really all it is. But when the Incredible Hulk sees this kind of toy set here, something akin to, like, Connects, right? Which is just mechanics is what it's called here. But when it's something akin to Connects, that he kind of has this flashback to when he was younger and he enjoyed science, studying things like that, and the abusive nature of his father. Now, this is a really great moment. And this is one of the things that I really praised Al Ewing for with his handling of Immortal Hulk, because it would have been very easy for Al Ewing to be like, okay guys, I'm writing Immortal Hulk and all he's going to do is just beat stuff up. But it's not really that way, right? In the early stories, in the early run of Al Ewing, a lot of it really was like the Bill Mantlo, Peter David style of storytelling, which was like psychological trauma, different things like that. The One Below All basically appearing as like Bruce Banner's father, Brian Banner, kind of tormenting him in that way. It was kind of wild. But the whole theme when it comes to the Immortal Hulk is that the psychological trauma he experienced at the hands of his abusive father still reigns supreme, right? It's still like the one thing that Bruce Banner is the most terrified of. And so that's what makes it kind of intriguing, because when he sees that, he immediately starts lashing out, right? Like a child, he doesn't really understand his emotions. He doesn't understand what he's feeling. And so all he does is take that lack of understanding and turn it into rage, right? And that's kind of how we as people are. Whenever we feel a certain way, but we don't really know how to interpret our emotions effectively by using our words, we turn to the most basic primal instinct, which is rage. It's the fight or flight, right? Like our emotions literally put us in a fight or flight mode, right? Like it's just, you know, I don't know how to handle it, so just fight, just attack, you know, just be angry. And that's kind of how, that's how you sort of differentiate between a rational thinking human being and a person who really is childlike in nature, right? A rational human being would kind of be like, okay, this is how I'm feeling, how do I interpret this? And then go forward accordingly. A childlike human being would just immediately devolve to like rage and anger and just lash out at people, right? It's what kids do. And so because of that, the Immortal Hulk basically kind of transitions transitions back into Banner again. Now remember, this is not technically Bruce Banner. It's the body of Bruce Banner, but the mind of Bruce Banner is occupied by Joe Fixit, right? The actual mind of Bruce Banner is just kind of out there in the ether somewhere. And it's just kind of out there, you know, taken away by the leader and doing its thing. And so with that being the case, of course, the Grendel manifests. Now this is something kind of twisted and something we don't really normally see, that the Grendel has actually merged both cops into one entity, right? So they're like a Cenobite from like the Hellraiser movies. The Hellraiser books from Clive Barker. Damn you, Clive Barker, for writing those books. The world is now a darker place because of the fact that Hellraiser was created. But this, of course, leads to really Joe Fixit Banner. We're just gonna call him Banner for the sake of it. Oh, you know, it leads to him just kind of making an escape and trying to figure out a way to come out on top. Now, this is one of the big differences between Joe Fixit and almost any other version of the Incredible Hulk. Almost all the other personalities of the Hulk, whether he was the Horseman War for Apocalypse or Savage Hulk or like, you know, World War Hulk or something like that. World War Hulk probably would have done this too. But one of the big differences is that Joe Fixit was a thinker. He was a guy who thought. He was by no means on the same level as Banner, but he would basically reason and rationalize his way out of different situations. That's what made him so dangerous, is it was a man who was exceedingly strong, but was also a guy capable of intelligent, rational thought. And so as the Grendel basically follows him into this toy store, he kind of starts making his way through, right? This Grendel's kind of slinking along and it's really twisted and morbid and really, you know, really macabre, to be honest with you guys. But Joe Fixit, you know, really Banner's just kind of like, okay, so like we bide our time here, right? Like I know how to take this kind of guy out. Something else that's really awesome here is he's wearing bunny slippers, and those slippers look amazing. I would love to have some of those bunny slippers. I'd walk around those things like, hell yeah. Like, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I've got my bunny slippers on my feet. It'd be pretty awesome. But what he basically ends up doing, and this is what's so smart, what's so cool about Fixit, is he plots and he schemes, and he basically lures these guys into in front of like a giant speaker system, and then immediately sets the volume to 100 and puts it on blast. And like the sheer just impact of sound, right? Because remember, Grendels, just like any other symbiote out there, have an inherent weakness to sound. The sheer impact of sound literally scatters the Grendel symbiote almost all over the place, right? It certainly like takes away from these guys who have basically been dissolved and absorbed and that kind of a thing. But where it tries to begin reconstituting itself, he walks around, or he literally walks up on him with the stereotypical makeshift flamethrower, a candle and an aerosol can, and literally just sprays these guys down, right? Just sprays them down. It's like, yep, business is done. Like that's pretty much how we do it. When you mess with Joe Fixit, you mess with the best. Right? I love phrases like that, right? Like it would have been cool if we got like just that one line at the end of the comic where he just looks at him and he's like, when you mess with the bull, you get the horns, right? Like it would have been amazing. But of course, this allows, you know, the Incredible Hulk to kind of revert back into his childlike form and literally just start having fun inside of this toy store. In all reality, I know it's probably not exactly what you guys were expecting, but if I'm being honest, I loved it. Like I loved this comic, right? Because one, the Immortal Hulk stories are already incredibly dark, and then two, we kind of get like the King in Black being an exceedingly dark story. It's kind of nice to see this almost sort of dark humor going on here. I like it. I really enjoyed it. Okay, so in the last video we did on the Immortal Hulk, we had done technically only like 4 of the 5 issues that we were supposed to, right? And the whole reason why was because this issue is going to be double-sized, right? So it was like, okay, we don't really have enough time to fit it all into a reasonable time frame. I know some of you guys would love it if I made videos that were like 45 minutes long, but the reality is that we just can't really do that in a feasible way, right? You know, for most of the people on the channel, they would just kind of be like, all right, that's a little nuts. The fact remains here, I'm glad I waited, right? Because this double-sized issue is kind of crazy, right? It's not really a descent into madness, but it's certainly wildly intriguing, right? And it definitely is one of those that's going to take us a little bit of time to get through. But this particular comic, and this is something that I didn't notice right off the bat, and in fact, I read this when it came out and then waited a day, and now I'm recording it. I actually had to read it like 2 or 3 times to really understand everything that was going on here because it was just so far away from what I'm normally used to. But this actually takes place in the 9th multiverse, right? It takes place in the next multiverse. And the reason why is because at the end of one of the more recent stories, the Immortal Hulk had basically ended up at the very end of all reality, right? Like the end of the entire time stream when everything comes to an end. And I still stick by the idea that it was possessed by the One Below All, right? The One Below All had totally taken control of the Immortal Hulk. And in fact, this actually confirms it, but the One Below All had basically taken complete and total control of the Immortal Hulk and had kind of gone on a rampage. And what it had done was made it to the very end of time. We didn't know what all it had done. We simply known it had just made it to the very end of time and then consumed the sentience of that universe, right? The idea that was essentially
essentially kind of a repeat of Galactus, right? Galen was the last survivor of his own universe, and in fact the multiverse, and ultimately was reborn into the newest iteration of the multiverse as Galactus, basically. It was really seeming like it was going to be the same thing, that in some form or fashion, the Incredible Hulk would become like what was basically the new Galactus. But the Immortal Hulk consumed the sentience of the universe, like literally ate it, took all of its energy, and basically the new multiverse was given form. We're not really given a time frame here. All we're told is at some point between when the new multiverse came into existence and this moment here, the Immortal Hulk has destroyed everything. And it's kind of nuts, right? It's kind of crazy here, because what we end up getting are what are called basically like these post-humans. They're not really a race. And in reality, it's kind of interesting because Al Ewing gives us like a man and a woman insofar as you can, just because of the fact that the way these creatures are designed and the way they look, aside from their colors, you know, blue and pink, are really not traditionally a man or a woman, right? But this picks up with a being whose name is actually spelled interestingly. It's P-A-R%L, right? So I'm going to say like parcel or parl, you know, something along those lines. We'll say parcel just because, you know, percent and then L, so, you know, parcel or something along those lines. But regardless, this being is basically tasked with like perusing the cosmos, and has been for some time, perusing the entirety of either the universe or the multiverse itself, and then trying to basically figure out if there's anything left. And what is basically realized is that there isn't, that basically all the worlds in the entirety of this universe are all totally broken. There's nothing left. All the worlds are completely eradicated and completely destroyed, and there's nothing left here. It's just a giant expanse of what's basically blackness and like some planets that have been torn to rubble and so on and so forth. Like it literally looks like a massive explosion went off in the universe. And so what this does is it leads to Parcel coming to encounter another being by the name of, we're gonna call it Danielle, you know, just for the sake of it. But with the two of them communicating, we get a couple cool things here. The first is that they don't use traditional speech, right? They don't use words. Hence the reason why we can consider them post-human, because of the fact that they seem to have evolved beyond that. There's no real indication that they were human at one point in time, right? It's just kind of the best description I can come to, with the exception of the fact that there's a wholly different race that existed out there. But regardless of the situation, they use these kind of plants, you know, devices more or less to communicate. And what they basically discuss here is the existence of things. And what Parcel basically says is there's nothing left. There's no life, no nothing. We're it. Like we're the only things left in this universal space. Everything else has been destroyed by the creature. And that's all they really describe it as, is the creature. And it really kind of presents a scenario of hopelessness here, because what this does and the way this is depicted, it almost seems like this universe is coming to an end. And in a lot of ways it is. It's being done prematurely, but it's coming to an end. And it begs a lot of questions here. When this new universe was created, how did it look? Were there similarities there? Was it this universe came into existence and then right off the bat, the Immortal Hulk started killing everything? The reality is from what we've seen in the timelines, when a universe comes into existence, you basically get this explosion, this kind of big bang that leads to, you know, really like the formation of the Celestials, which leads to the Aspirants and the war between the two of them that always breaks out. The Celestials start creating life and different things like that. But the overall gist here is that time passes, right? Like it takes some time. Even with Galactus lay dormant for billions of years before he emerged and consumed his first world. Time passes from one point to the next, from the beginning of the universe to when life starts popping up. So it's not like this universe was created and then all life sprung into existence. Maybe it did. Again, we don't really know the origins of this place. All we know is that between the time it came into existence and now, the Immortal Hulk has destroyed everything. But notice this, the Immortal Hulk is almost depicted as like this mythical figure, right? Like these guys, they know it as the creature, but it's like they've never encountered it before. Like they've never actually met it before. All they know, all they've done is like witness, you know, the destruction that's been brought here. So there's a lot of ambiguity here. But what you also end up learning here is that there are these things called tiding flies that this particular group were able to create. And tiding flies are a means of communication, but they're a means of communication that spans both time and space, right? So think of it like a telephone where you could call somebody in the past. And that's basically what this is. These organisms that are created that are normally supposed to be bred under regular circumstances or have been engineered here, because what this is designed to do is show a moment of panic. Now, again, because there's so much that's unexplained with regards to this race, how its culture functions and how it operates and so on and so forth, the only thing we know is that the means by which these tide flies were, or I guess these tiding flies were created, is considered to be heresy, that they were artificially created as opposed to basically being born, so to speak, you know, for lack of a better word. But the result here is that Parcel is basically tasked with taking this tiding fly and sending it to the past. Now, here's the funny thing about this, is Parcel's response is, well, that's ridiculous though, because like it would lead to the destruction of all things because we don't know how it would change the past. And the response of Danielle is, but like everything's screwed up anyway though. So like who cares? Like it doesn't matter. It can't get any worse than it is right now. The only direction from here is up. And so as a result of that, Parcel takes a tiding fly and leaves, right? Ends up departing here. And that's when we start to get into like this appearance of the Immortal Hulk and things popping off. And this is when it all really gets cool, because what you end up getting is Parcel basically showing up to the home world of their planet, right? The home world of their people. And again, we're not given a whole lot lot of information here outside of what it looks like, outside of how the tribe functions, and it doesn't really matter anyway. And the reason why is because Parcel notices off in the distance this green light and realizes that the Immortal Hulk is coming for them. And so the result of this is that when the Immortal Hulk gets there, this guy is colossal, right? And this is the funny thing about it, is when you think of the Incredible Hulk as a being that can basically transcend and go into like the universal space, that you think of that and you're like, okay, so this is cool, this is interesting, but like the Incredible Hulk would still for the most part be the same size, right? Because you think of the Incredible Hulk and you say, okay, the biggest he's ever really been was Heart of the Monster, right? When he was just colossal in size because he'd just been feeding off of so much energy. So you kind of chalk that up and you say, okay, he might be about that big, but that's basically it. But when you're talking about a version of the Immortal Hulk that's really just kind of like a vector for the force of the One Below All, basically this is an ultra powerful entity, right? We'll talk more about this here in a second once we actually get into how the One Below All is involved in all this, and so far as how it's, you know, how it's functioning here. But basically you're talking about a cosmic level Hulk is really what you're talking about here. A cosmic level of the Immortal Hulk that's as big as a planet, because literally he's flying through this system, flying through moons and so on and so forth, and these moons look like they're about the size of like grapefruits in comparison to the size of the Incredible Hulk. So it literally just shows up and just punches the planet. Like, it's the craziest thing. It shows up and just like punches the planet, shatters it, destroys it, and basically all things are pretty much dead now. Like all forms of life in the universe are dead, save for Parcel, who manages to send this tiding fly out back through time to the modern day in order to keep this from happening. But one of the things that Parcel does is it basically communes and mentally bonds with the Immortal Hulk, simply asking the question, why are you doing all this? And this is when we start to get into what's going on with the One Below All. That what ends up happening here is that when this communication takes place, that it's not simply the Immortal Hulk being controlled by the One Below All tearing everything up. That what it's been doing is, as it's been going through and killing all these various races and in these groups out there, that it's been in turn consuming their souls, right? So like all these souls, all these forms of life are confined within the Immortal Hulk, which essentially is really appearing to help bolster its power. And then all of that in turn is being controlled by the One Below All. That somewhere along the line, the Immortal Hulk, as we know him in the moment right now, in the present day in Marvel Comics, has been totally taken over, controlled, and dominated by the One Below All, who now uses the body of the Immortal Hulk as a vector, right? Like uses it as a means for it to take control, right? So it's like removing the Immortal Hulk from the shell that is its physical body, and then the One Below All stepping in its place. But here was the big question that I had here, right? Because what the One Below All basically says is like, I am the One Below All. Like with the power that I have, all I want to do is destroy things. Like I am a being powered by hate. All I want to do is destroy and eradicate all things, which I've basically succeeded in doing. The question we would ask here is, where is the one above all? Where's like the living tribunal, different things like that. Now for a lot of those cosmic entities, for the living tribunal, for like the Phoenix Force, and for, you know, the other entities like Eternity and so on and so forth, we can basically go on what the One Below All is, right? It's the antithesis to the One Above All, meaning that they would have to basically be equal in power, or at the very least with the purpose that they serve. The fact that the One Below All was cast down by the One Above All indicates the One Above All is, even if only marginally, more powerful than the One Below All. But regardless of the situation, the fact remains that you're talking about a being that's more than enough to destroy the living tribunal, any one of those guys who are out there, right? So assuming the living tribunal even intervened and even stepped in, it never stood a chance in the first place, right? It never had a chance to basically win. But as far as the One Above All goes, this is where Al Ewing is being a little bit ambiguous here. Now, in truth, we can kind of run on the position of the One Above All historically in Marvel Comics, right? For those of you guys who are familiar with it, the One Above All almost never appears and never acts. And in fact, there's only ever really been a couple of times where it has. 3 times where the One Above All has actually acted or done something that allowed it to interact with the larger various superheroes who were out there, right? The first real instance of that came when the One Above All interacted with the Fantastic Four and took on the form of Jack Kirby. The second instance of that came when the One Above All took on the form of a homeless man and interacted with Peter Parker in order to basically say, hey, look, sometimes folks die. You know, it sucks that Aunt May's dying, but that's just kind of the way that it goes, right? It's just the nature of things. It's all part of the plan. You don't have to understand it. You just have to accept it. The final time that I'm aware of with the One Above All actually interacting was during Jim Starlin's conclusion for his whole Infinity Saga after the events of Secret Wars when the Living Tribunal had died. And the result was that Adam Warlock of that alternate reality was tasked with becoming the new Living Tribunal and was appointed to that position after encountering and speaking directly with the One Above All. And that's it. The One Above All almost never really acts. And Marvel really kind of takes the stance of saying, well, if it happened in the Marvel Universe, it happened because it's part of the plan of the One Above All, right? Like the One Above All allows it to basically happen. In reality, based on what we've seen, the One Above All is an absentee landlord, right? Like he never does anything. Like it's kind of crazy. It's like, why do you even exist if you don't do anything at all? It's really kind of crazy there. But what seems to be going on here is it's one of those things, because it's like kind of like events are being set in motion, and the One Above All only ever really seems to act under the circumstance whereby its counsel is basically needed in the case of like when it spoke to Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four and said, hey, look, you know, here's basically the cycle of life and death, when it spoke to Peter Parker about the same thing, or when it was a case of the Living Tribunal and somebody had to take the Living Tribunal's place and only the one above all can appoint someone to that position. Aside from that, it's the only time that it ever really seems to act. And so we can kind of look at this and we could say, okay, so the reason why the one above all never really decided to take a stance here is because of this very action of this tiding fly being sent back to the past. It was a way out, right? The one above all didn't need to act. It's really indirectly Al Ewing essentially saying, this is all going to be averted. This is all going to be stopped. And so the one below all will basically be stopped before this future can come into existence in the first place, and it successfully destroys everything, right? So it's kind of interesting there. It's sort of a way where Marvel kind of answers its own question. They sort of answer that question by virtue of the story, or they leave it to us. But it is intriguing, albeit a little bit sad, to basically know that one below all, using its power through the Immortal Hulk, killed everybody, right? It killed Thanos, and it killed like all the Avengers and the X-Men and everybody, assuming they all even existed in this timeline in the first place. And so as a result of that, what we basically get is this kind of last little tidbit that everything is broken, that everything is gone here, that in this future where the one above or where the one below all, you know, basically uses the Immortal Hulk, that the one below all wins, right? Like it basically comes out on top here, that everything will continue to be destroyed, all things will basically come to an end here, and there will be nothing left, right? Because if the sentience of the universe was essentially eradicated by the one below all, and in turn the one below all created this new, you know, universe and then destroyed everything in it, then the buck stops here. There is nothing else. There's no more universes coming after this. There's no more life here. There's no sentience of the universe to die and recreate everything. That's it. There's no going forward. This is where it ends, right? Which is something that we've never seen before. You know, even if you look at the what if stories, Jean Grey becomes a Dark Phoenix and she wipes out the universe would be reborn again because all that life existed. Therefore, the sentience of the universe had existed, but that sentience of the universe was never destroyed. It was one of those things where like it would basically die of its own volition insofar as it would kind of coalesce in on itself and then be reborn into a new universe. It doesn't happen here. There is no sentience of the universe. There's no nothing. Everything is gone here because what you basically have is the most powerful form of the Incredible Hulk ever created in the history of Marvel going on a warpath and consuming and destroying everything. So it's kind of nuts, right? Like the one below all Hulk. Like it's crazy in terms of this level of power. We've never really seen this from anyone. Like it's kind of nuts here. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. I know this one was pretty abstract, relatively speaking to the stories that we're kind of used to. It's one of the things that Al Ewing acknowledged. He was kind of like, hey guys, so when you read this story, you're going to see some crazy stuff and it's going to look pretty bonkers. Don't let that turn you off to it. I doubt that the rest of this is going to look that way. It's really just designed to show what the universe would look like in the far-flung future when everything comes crashing down. Okay, so we are getting back into the Immortal Hulk, and a lot of you guys have been asking for this, but this is because we really kind of let this most recent volume finish before we went back and covered it. So we're kind of covering the whole volume now, right? So this, the traditional volume type stories that we do kind of off and on. You know, sometimes we do single issues, sometimes we do whole volumes. It kind of depends on how I feel about it. But this story is particularly interesting, right? Because I wouldn't say that this takes a break away from the kind of angels and demons, devil, you know, one below all sort of situation that we've had before. This really shines a light more on the direction that the Immortal Hulk is going in, at least for right now anyway, right? Like really focuses more on Banner and focuses on the Immortal Hulk. And the reason why that's important is because Al Ewing really likes to kind of start his stories off with a bang, right? For example, for those of you guys who read Ultimates by Al Ewing, the first story arc was turning Galactus into the Lifebringer, right? So it was like totally shifting Galactus up, and it was like, okay, that's cool, right? And then you start to go into the more of like the meat and potatoes. Let's build this up. Let's kind of focus on the character. With the Ultimates, I would go as far as to say that was a series of comics that was only ever going to be short-lived, right? Because when you look at it, a lot of people weren't really buying it, so it wasn't really like it was going to be lasting for like 100 issues or something along those lines. And the other thing is to kind of build on stuff, right? So with the Incredible Hulk, really with the Hulk himself, he's like a timeless character, right? So Al Ewing's run would last a lot longer than it would with the Ultimates, and so that's why you see him really delving a little more into the human side of things. But to kind of get into this, right, to kind of have this discussion, what this does is it initially focuses on essentially Bruce Banner inciting revolution, and it's kind of cool, right? You know, because what he does here is he kind of makes this speech to humanity, more or less, kind of like this sort of pirate speech where he basically is in a location. Of course, we know it's in Shadow Base, and he even says he's in Shadow Base, but doesn't really tell anybody where he is, right? He's just kind of like, this is a place that I'm at, and then kind of broadcast this message. Now, the overall message is sort of peppered in over the course of this story, but we can kind of consolidate it all at the beginning of this video, and it's one of the coolest things, right? Because basically what he says is the world that we live in, the human world, as you guys call it, basically sucks. And this is kind of a big moment because what it is this Bruce Banner kind of walking
walking away from like the human side of himself and kind of focusing on the fact that he is in fact a Hulk, right? That's what he is. You know, he and the Incredible Hulk are part and parcel. And it's interesting to see that because we've always kind of seen this scenario where Bruce Banner hates the Incredible Hulk side of himself, right? But in this instance, he's kind of welcoming it in, right? He's kind of, you know, being like, this is who I am now. But what he does is he really kind of illustrates this is an organization that was funded by the federal government with a budget of $1.2 billion. And that money could have gone to education. That money could have gone to any number of things that could have made the world a better place. But instead, the government decided to use that money to basically track me down and track down people like me and then try to harvest me and make other versions of me for their own personal use, right? To basically use gamma radiation to make their own personal army. And he starts to go into these interesting scenarios, right? He starts to talk about how what you have in the United States at the moment is basically a kind of system that exists where you have exceedingly powerful people amassing great quantities of wealth for themselves and then just kind of leaving everybody else out there to, you know, sort of high and dry. But the funny thing about this is he doesn't really let the American people get away with playing the victim, right? You know, where the American people would look at this and they would nod their head and say, yeah, he's right, man. They really are letting us, you know, they really are screwing us over. Instead, he kind of turns the table on them and then says, okay, so like, what have you done about it, right? Like, if this is the kind of country you live in, then what have you done to fix it? And then that's when you hear crickets, right? That's when you see empty pockets, because it's kind of like, well, I mean, you know, like, you guys have all these complaints about how like Amazon never pays taxes, so why are you still buying products off the website, right? Like, it's one of these things where he kind of points the finger at people and says, you know, look, like the issue that you have is doing things changes things. Doing nothing keeps things exactly as they are, but you're lazy, you're comfortable, right? And because you're comfortable, you don't really see a reason to change things. You don't want to change the status quo because it means life would be uncomfortable. So all you're going to do is reduce yourself to posting on Reddit forums or, you know, making Reddit posts and doing Twitter hashtags. And that's the extent of your involvement. Now from there, it jumps into a conversation he has with Amadeus Cho. And the response to this is what's kind of cool about this is while the message of Bruce Banner is one where it's kind of like, okay, this is a little heavy-handed, basically telling the American people, if you want to change things, then quit being lazy and do something about it. They do, right? They start to respond. And that's really kind of what you needed, right? You kind of needed a scenario where you needed somebody to get out there and give people a swift kick in the ass, right? And just be like, you're the source of your own problems. Everything wrong with the country comes down to you, right? You're the one that votes for people. You're the one that buys companies' products. It really is all your fault. So if you want to change things, do something about it. And people are responding, right? And it's kind of a cool thing because, you know, initially Amadeus Cho is kind of like, okay, I'm on the fence about this a little bit, right? Like I'm on the fence about this whole thing because I don't really know how I feel about this. One, what you're doing is resonating with people, but two, you're inciting revolution. And usually whenever people revolt, people get stupid, right? Because people revolt based on their emotions in the moment, right? Like this is bad, so let's do something about it. Okay, cool. Let's execute the kings. He's kind of like, people are highly emotional individuals, right? When people get highly emotional, logic goes out the window. And so yes, you're getting people to act, but you're getting them to act emotionally. You're not getting them to act logically and reasonably. But at the end of the day, that doesn't really seem to be a concern, right? You basically have people who are just kind of spray painting on walls. We believe in Bruce Banner. You have this idea of people who are basically using these outfits, you know, that basically helps them to kind of deal with tear gas, who are yelling like, you know, like Hulk smash, you know, and then just like grabbing tear gas canisters, throwing them back at the governments that launched them at them in the first place. You have like a full scale revolt on your hands. But one of the things that you see here, you know, in addition to rioting, is you also see what's called Rox News. Now, Rox News is where we start to really get into the kind of meat and potatoes of this, right? Because you've got like DJs, right? These sort of political pundits who are like, hey everyone, we should all do something. And by all of us, I mean you. I'm just gonna stay here behind my radio and just talk. You know, that's what I'm going to do. You know, and it's interesting because you kind of keep getting like these Rox News blips, right? You know, these Roxxon news corporations, these Roxxon things, where it's always this idea of like, the country's going to pot, things are going to pieces, the Hulk is bad, you know, so on and so forth. Everything's kind of going nuts. And so what you end up having is you end up having Amadeus Cho, who kind of almost sort of washes his hands and says, look, man, I get where you're coming from. I get what you're trying to do, but this kind of situation never really ends well. And then Namor the Submariner steps in, right? Who was just kind of there overhearing things. And Bruce Banner was aware of his presence and was really kind of like, thanks, man, for not stepping up here while Amadeus Cho is here, because he would assume that we're working together. And you end up getting, you know, Namor, who kind of offers a couple bits of wisdom, but we don't really get an exact specification for what that is. Basically, what we get is we end up getting Bruce Banner basically saying, like, you know, if these companies and this world around us doesn't really want to change, right? If these companies can do what they can do because there's no consequences, right? Because they've purchased politicians, they kind of, you know, pay those politicians to ensure nothing really happens, because you guys aren't going to do anything, then we will, right? Like, then basically I'm going to start like the first strike in a war, right? It's basically the Hulk revolution. You know, the Incredible Hulk initiates a revolt in the United States. And it's kind of crazy because when all that happens, then suddenly you switch over to Dario Agger. Now, the reason why Dario Agger is doing this, and this is kind of an important thing, Dario Agger was introduced as part of Jason Aaron Byrne's run basically on Thor, right? Thor God of Thunder, issue number 19, I think it was. And Dario Agger is the head of, he's the CEO of Roxxon Oil, Roxxon Corporation, really. Technically it's Roxxon Energy Corp, but they're a multinational company, right? And they're about as crooked as it gets. If it's slavery, if it's drugs, if it's anything illegal, right? Buying politicians, if it's anything illegal, Roxxon likely has their hand in it. And so what you get here is this sort of coalescing of themes, right? You basically got the shadow-based group who are essentially like, okay, look, we're gonna send Bruce Banner in, but one of the things to understand about translocation, essentially teleportation, is that it's a very risky maneuver, right? Like, it might be easy for Reed Richards because he's super smart, but for the rest of us, it can be kind of difficult, right? So the fear is that when Bruce Banner teleports to this location, this Roxxon location where he's gonna launch his first strike, that he could end up being teleported there is just a giant amorphous blob of like bones and organs and blood and veins and muscle and all that kind of stuff. Or he might make it there in one piece. There's no way to really know. We just gotta give it a shot and find out, and hopefully you make it there. Now, because of the fact that the Immortal Hulk is immortal, he would come back, right? He would be fine. But like at the end of the day, even if you could heal from all that, you don't want to go through it because it would suck. At the same time, you have Dario Agger really sort of putting off what's really is this overconfidence, right? This idea that we don't really need to worry about whatever strike Bruce Banner is going to do because the forces we have, the Berserkers, are more than capable of being able to withstand a Hulk. Now, where you have Dario Agger who's talking to his guy, one of his guys, Higgins, and he's kind of like, I'm not really worried about this. I'm not really worried about whatever it is a Hulk's going to do. Whatever attack he launches, it's not going to matter. Everything's going to be fine. The Immortal Hulk shows up here and just starts crushing all these Berserkers. And I don't even mean by like a little bit. I mean by like a lot. Like he's just absolutely, decimating these guys, out there in Oregon. And the reason why that matters is because once Dario Agger is being told what's going on, his response is, what did you say? And that's when we end up learning the significance of all this. That in Oregon, that when it comes to Roxxon Oil Corporation, in order for them to kind of maintain the image that they have, which is a positive one, they essentially influence all forms of media, right? They influence television, they influence newspapers, the whole 9 yards, in terms of their own newspapers they release, their own television shows, their radio jockeys that are kind of bought and paid for, different things like that. Now, at the end of the day, it still doesn't really matter, right? Like the job of the average person is to consider multiple sources of information, not just one. But it is kind of a cool thing because it means that Roxxon has their hands in a lot of propaganda out there. And really the strike or the center in Oregon is really kind of the main hub of it all. That's where all the servers are. That's where all the information gets sent out there from. And so because of that, it's a terrifying prospect for Roxxon, because what it means is that Bruce Banner is true to his word, that he's basically bringing the entire institution crashing down, right? That's the whole idea. It's to kind of incite revolt among people and bring the entire institution crashing down around all of them. And so with that being the case, well, it doesn't really mean like a full and total, destruction of the United States, right? He's not really saying like, let's tear down the government, let's do those kind of, so on and so forth. But the result is that it's kind of leading to, the American people in a lot of ways sort of kind of coming out and saying, yes, we're tired of everything being the way that it is. And so with that being the case, Dario Agger in turn takes the smart approach. And this is the smartest thing that he could have done, right? If the entire idea behind this revolt more or less rests on the shoulders of how people perceive Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk, that he's kind of a rallying point, then take away their reason to believe that, right? Like at the end of the day, people believe what they want to believe, but people are also easily swayed and they're easily manipulated, right? That's kind of how people are. Not to sound too cynical about it, but people aren't very intelligent when they operate in groups. And so because of that, it's one of these things where he's like, well, then let's shift the whole thing and turn it into a smear campaign against the Immortal Hulk. That's what we need to do, is basically tarnish the guy's name so nobody will really believe in him, right? If people, if people don't believe in him, then nobody will have a reason to follow him. And so this comes in a multitude of different ways. One of the first people to get hit is Jackie McGee. Now, if you guys recall, Jackie McGee was the one who was really following the Immortal Hulk around in terms of all the events that were going on and kind of documenting them, right? So she could write a paper on it. And what's happening here is when she's writing writing about this kind of revolt that's going on, that she writes it, not from a neutral perspective of like, this is a thing that's happening, the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Instead, she's doing what most members of the media do, which is writing it from a perspective where it's how I see it, right? So she's writing it like, we are being affected and this is bothering us and we should, should we revolt and different things like that. When in reality, the media is not supposed to really be part of society. It's supposed to be removed from society in that way of here's an objective depiction of what's going on, not a, hey guys, look at what's happening that's affecting all of us, right? It's not really supposed to tie into the emotional element of people. Now, tying it into people's emotions makes them want to read about you and watch you, which is why you see things unfolding that way. But with regards to what Jackie's doing, it's kind of flying in the face of what the News Corporation, what they're supposed to be doing. So it's not really Dario Agger kind of intervening. It is, but not necessarily. The other way in which he intervenes is by basically stepping up and releasing these kind of monsters into the city of Phoenix, Arizona. And the reason why is because when this happens, of course, he knows that right off the bat, as soon as that takes place, the Immortal Hulk and all of them are going to respond. And the reason why he knows that is that because when you have Shadowbase who runs up on Bruce Banner and says, hey man, like there's these monsters that showed up in Phoenix, we have to respond. Then his question is why? And it's like, well, because the Avengers are off planet, which they are. They were dealing with Starbrand at the time. The Fantastic Four are off doing their thing, right? The X-Men are totally tied up in Krakoa. They're really not going to worry about it too much. The Champions are currently on the East Coast with no real fast mode of travel to get there, right? So it would take them hours to arrive on the scene, and the Agents of Atlas suck. And so because of that, it's kind of like, all right, like no one can respond except for us. Dario Agger knew this, right? Because he had people in different locations that were feeding him this information. And so launching this attack in Phoenix, Arizona, instead of like San Francisco or Seattle or New York or something along those lines, or even in the middle of the United States, right? So like Kansas or in Missouri or something like that. What this basically meant is that it presents a scenario where they're the only ones that can really get there in time. Enter the actual main campaign itself, that when the Immortal Hulk teleports in, suddenly he's swallowed by one of the monsters. Now, this is where you end up getting the really smart played by Dario. This is where you really kind of learn that as a CEO, he's exceedingly effective, right? Because when this goes down, he's basically swallowed by this monster. The Immortal Hulk is swallowed by this monster and set upon by like all these, different things in there, these bugs and different, organisms and so on and so forth and what have you. But while that's also going on, you've got the rest of the Immortal Hulk team who are essentially showing up and facing off against these various forces and so on. And it's cool to see, right? You've got Rick Jones, who really is more of like a gamma level god now. I don't really know what's going on with him. He's kind of resurrected from the dead, so I guess he's partially alive, but partially dead. I'm not really sure. But he's like floating around, right? Like he looks like Molecule Man or like the Beyonder or like Dr. Manhattan is kind of what he looks like, right? Like just showing up using like telekinetic and telepathic gamma powers and like destroying things and so on and so forth. It looks kind of cool. You've also got Doc Samson, you've got Red Harpy or Betty Ross here. But the other thing about this is, again, you get the absorbing Crusher Creel. And that's one of the things that I've been talking about, guys. Crusher Creel, and it's important you guys understand, Crusher Creel is underrated. And it's so good to see somebody using him, right? Like it's so good to see somebody using Crusher Creel in an interesting way. He doesn't really get a whole lot of screen time here, which is fine. The story kind of revolves around a lot of different characters, not just him. But Crusher Creel is probably one of the most underappreciated and most dangerous characters in all of Marvel Comics, right? Like let Wolverine's let his skin get blown off his bones, and then let Crusher Creel walk up to him and just touch him, and then absorb adamantium and become adamantium. Regardless, you basically get Alpha Flight showing up here, right? Like you get the forces of Puck and Titania, you get absorbing Man, Crusher Creel, and so it's kind of cool to see here. But at the end of the day, Dario Agger's not super concerned about all this. He is insofar as it's like, okay, like this can kind of be a little bit of a struggle for us, but at the end of the day, he's not super freaking out about it. And the reason why is because where you end up having, all these forces who were, taking out these monsters, and they're all done in pretty fast, the Immortal Hulk rips himself out of one of the monsters. And when he does, he unleashes all these smaller monsters all over the entire city of Phoenix, Arizona. And that's exactly what Dario Agger was waiting for. That's exactly what he was hoping for. That by releasing all these monsters who in turn are going to start ripping up, and killing people throughout Phoenix, then it's basically the news which breaks in. Oh my God, man, look at all this stuff that's going on. The Immortal Hulk has unleashed all these monsters across the city of Phoenix. This is his fault. We don't know exactly what's going on here, but it's definitely his fault, right? And people will usually always believe the news if it's what they want to hear. And so because of that, it feeds right into what it is that Dario Agger's shooting for. And then he basically says, we have our final person coming in to discredit the Immortal Hulk, kind of going towards this idea of getting rid of the Immortal Hulk and replacing the Hulk with basically an agent of their own. We end up getting Xemnu or Zenmu or whatever it is. People call him the original Hulk. He's not. He's just like a criminal from his own world who like was called a Hulk at one point, right? But like not really. That's like saying the original Human Torch, Jim Hammond, is like the Human Torch. Not really. It's Johnny Storm. That's really kind of what it is. But nonetheless, it's interesting. We're gonna see like a giant furry guy who's got hypnotic eyes and he's really smart. We're gonna see him fight, face off against the Immortal Hulk. It's cool, I guess. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and it's been a little while since we covered the Immortal Hulk. It's been quite some time, and I figured, why not kind of get back into it a little bit, right? Especially because these most recent stories have been really, really good. The reality is Al Ewing's run kind of lost me for a little bit. I was like, it was kind of tough to stay a part of it and to kind of stay into it, but he's recently gotten me back into it, right? So what this does here is this is basically the return of Worldbreaker Hulk, right? So we get to see Worldbreaker Hulk come back, which is awesome. But this basically picks up initially with McGowan. Now, for those of you guys who don't really recall from a lot of the videos that we've done, McGowan was originally part of what was called Shadow Base, which was led by General Fordian. And the idea behind this was that General Fordian was a guy who had a personal vendetta against the Hulk, and Shadow Base was designed to be this kind of government-sanctioned organization that operated underground, and it was by all standards of measurement a Black Ops group that would essentially try to either capture or kill the Incredible Hulk, along with anybody else who was mutated through gamma radiation, right? So anybody associated with the Hulk family, more or less. McGowan ended up becoming the lead scientist, and then ultimately when General Fordian was destroyed, McGowan ended up siding with the Incredible Hulk, and she's basically been an ally ever since. What we didn't really know about McGowan's history is kind of how she got there, and so this isn't really the most important thing by any standard of measurement, but there is a moment that happens in the comics later that is important for this segment. The thing about her character is she initially started out working at, really working in a research lab, and was ultimately given the boot due to drug use. Now, the argument she created was that she did drugs in order to kind of cope with her gender transition, but regardless, she was fired for drug use and ultimately hired by the Kingpin. And that's when she started getting involved in MGH. Now, MGH is what we call mutant growth hormone, and that's been around for a long time in Marvel Comics, but it really rose to prominence in the events of Civil War, right? That's really where it blew up, where you had Nitro, who basically detonated, destroyed Stamford, Connecticut, and led to the deaths of 600 some odd people, and led to the Superhuman Registration Act. Ever since then, mutant growth hormone has kind of gone back to being sort of a background concept that's never really seen or used all that often, but it can be repurposed for a variety of effects, right? Some people use it to get high, some people use it to kind of amplify their existing abilities. There's all kinds of different applications for this thing. But what she also had was this idea that because she herself was transitioning, and because the cost of gene therapy and hormone therapy was so incredibly expensive, that she actually ended up, really as a direct employee of Kingpin, approaching him and her superiors and saying, like, we should essentially create a black market for like hormone therapy. Now, this is highly unethical and could probably get you killed if it's done by somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. But because of the fact that she's already knee deep, right? Might as well dig a little deeper into the criminal underbelly. Ultimately, Kingpin and those guys sanctioned it, and so when she ended up starting a lab for the purpose of really kind of building up this kind of hormone therapy process, she was suddenly and really met by the arrival of Daredevil. Right now, this is particularly important because one of the things that she says here is that she says she remembers thinking that she'd never seen a superhero so close before, and she remembered thinking how much she always wanted to meet Daredevil. That's incredibly important, and the reason why is because what we do is we transition to the present moment when you basically have Xemnu. Now, Xemnu was given to us originally as like the original Hulk, kind of like the Hulk before the Incredible Hulk. We've got a video on it, so you guys are welcome to check it out if you want to. In fact, I'll link the whole Incredible Hulk playlist down in the description, so you guys can kind of go through all the Hulk videos we have. I want to say, and we might kind of combine those all into like a full story video once we're done with once Al Ewing's finished. I want to say that the Incredible Hulk series is the longest full story series we have at something like 18 hours or something stupid like that. I can't remember off the top of my head. We have one that's over 12 hours, right? It's insane. Regardless, Xemnu being here, we don't really know a whole lot about him, right? We knew a little bit about him, but not a whole lot about him. He's one of these mysterious characters that's kind of appeared in and out through Al Ewing's run. But the overall gist here is that while the Incredible Hulk and Xemnu are fighting, that you've got Dario Agger who's watching the whole thing unfold. Now, Dario Agger is also called the Minotaur, and he's basically the CEO of Roxxon Oil. The important thing to understand about him, whenever you see Dario Agger, it means some nefarious stuff is going down. So it's like whenever you see Mark Zuckerberg doing anything, right? The owner of Facebook, right? Like no matter what he's doing, whether he's buying groceries or shopping at IKEA, you can assume something bad is about to happen, right? There's some kind of criminal element tied to it because Mark Zuckerberg sucks. But the important thing here is that where you end up having the Hulk kind of overpowering Xemnu and getting the upper hand, one of the things to understand, Xemnu in terms of his physical strength, he's not really on the same level as the Hulk, but he does possess a couple of abilities. Now, one of the things that kicks off here is that there really is just, seemingly a giant monster that was kind of unleashed in the city of Phoenix, Arizona. And then once you had Xemnu show up there, he kind of fought it off. The Incredible Hulk stepped in, and the Incredible Hulk kind of keeps talking about how, like, White Hulk or white monster is always lying, that kind of a thing. And Xemnu kind of reaches out to the staff, I guess the Roxxon Network guys or news network who are kind of recording the whole thing, and kind of like beseeching them, and almost puts off this air of like he's just trying to do the right thing, but he's exceedingly helpless. There's nothing he can do to fight the Hulk. And so it's very much a kind of victim thing going on here. And everybody who's watching this is influenced by it. And they even go as far as to talk about how they recognize Xemnu. Even the Gamma team is sent in, right? Which is kind of like, it's really Gamma Flight. It's kind of like Alpha Flight's anti-Hulk kind of group organization, whatever it is. But essentially you have like Crusher Creel, right? The absorbing man, the guy that can turn himself into essentially any material. Like he shows up as well. And one of the things he comments about is how like he remembers Xemnu from like a show when he was younger, right? The Magic Planet. He's like, I watched you when I was a little kid. And it's one of these things where people kind of recognize Xemnu as somebody from a long time ago, almost like this long forgotten hero that for whatever reason, people just don't really remember anymore. And him showing back up here and facing off against the Hulk is pretty intriguing because it puts off this air that it's like, okay, the Incredible Hulk is essentially the bad guy here, right? He's literally showing up and he's kind of getting into a fight in, with what is basically everybody's favorite cartoon show or, childhood TV host. And it's just bad PR, right? Bad publicity. So when the Hulk is yanked back by McGowan, she kind of tells him like, what are you doing, right? Like, why are you attacking Xemnu, right? He had the children's show. He's trying to do the right thing. He's trying to perform heroic acts. You're making yourself look like the bad guy. But all the Hulk really keeps saying here is like, he has to be destroyed. He has to be smashed. And one of the things that's interesting about this is when it comes to the Immortal Hulk, he's not necessarily childlike. The Immortal Hulk was perfectly capable of having normal and rational conversation. But a lot of his discussion here, really, as far as McGowan is hearing it, is just Hulk is Hulk. That's all he's really saying, right? Hulk is Hulk. That's all she really gets out of what he's saying. And then ultimately he's like, the Hulk will go. And then ultimately the Immortal Hulk kind of pops back up again, right? So effectively it was Savage Hulk that was facing off against Xemnu instead of Immortal Hulk. But when Immortal Hulk kind of reemerges, then it's a clear and concise conversation. And one of the things he talks about is like, this is a little weird, right? Like even for the Savage Hulk and all this stuff, none of this really makes any sense. Like there hasn't been an instance where I faced a foe that had that kind of effect on me mentally, right? So like something else is going on here. And initially you have McGowan who's like, okay, well, we should have like Doc Samson look into it. But the reality is that Hulk doesn't like Doc Samson, right? He considers him to be kind of nonsensical. Now, Doc Samson is more or less the answer to the question, what if like a psychiatrist got the powers of the Hulk? He's not on the same level as the Incredible Hulk is. Nobody ever is in Marvel Comics. But with regards to Samson, like Hulk just always struggled with him and never really took him seriously for a variety of different reasons, right? But regardless of the circumstance, he's kind of like, no, like somebody impartial needs to be able to look at this, somebody competent. So he kind of tasks McGowan with going through this, right? And just kind of like looking through all this, right? Kind of going through all this different stuff and figuring out what's going on. And that's when McGowan, where she's talking to the Hulk and she keeps talking about things like well, the Hulk and he just kind of keeps saying over again, Hulk is Hulk, Hulk is Hulk. Then like Immortal Hulk kind of wonders to himself, like, who the hell is Hulk? Like he doesn't really know who the Hulk is, almost as if he's kind of lost himself. And McGowan starts to kind of flash back and she says she starts to remember the situation with Daredevil as it really was. And it wasn't Daredevil who showed up, it was Xemnu who showed up, right? So Xemnu basically has the ability to manipulate the minds of others. And that's what she starts to pick up on, right? Like she literally goes directly to Doc Samson and starts having this conversation with him. And it's like, something's going on, man, right? Like there's this instance, right? There's a TV show, right? There's a TV show, like, did you ever watch a TV show called The Magic Planet when you were younger? And the response of Samson is, I'm pretty sure I did. I don't really know with an absolute, but I'm pretty sure I did. And so she asks him, like, have you ever heard of something called the Mandela effect? Now, the Mandela effect is a real world phenomenon, right? It actually exists. And it's basically where collective groups of people remember a thing that didn't actually happen. The most notable example, and the reason why it's called the Mandela effect, is because there are huge portions of society that will tell you, if they were alive at the time, that they remember Nelson Mandela's funeral in the 1980s, but it never happened in the 1980s. He was in jail in the 1980s, right? Like, oh, well, I don't know if he was really in jail in the 1980s. I'm a little fuzzy on the timeline of Mandela, but he was basically alive, right? He died more recently, but like he didn't die. But there are huge portions of people who remember that. Either we're all living in the Matrix and the machines are screwing with our minds, or there's basically just huge portions of people remembering a thing that didn't actually happen. And so it's one of the things where McGowan having this conversation with Samson, where he kind of confirms that he knows what the Mandela effect is. What she says is like, the Magic Planet, a show that nobody remembers but nobody ever watched, it never existed, right? It's all basically in our heads. So essentially Xemnu's like just putting this idea in their heads that he's basically a good guy here, right? Like he's kind of putting all that stuff inside their head. And one of the things that really begins to kind of set the panic into everybody is when McGowan says that like this guy is essentially targeting people in particular, basically those individuals who are watching through TV or those individuals in the immediate vicinity, that it's entirely possible that like the Incredible Hulk's being impacted as well. Now here's where things get a little finicky when it comes to the Incredible Hulk and telepathy. By and large, over the years, it's been established that a person can take over the mind of the Incredible Hulk, but they have to be an incredibly high-level telepath. And when I say take over the mind, I don't really mean like planting memories. That's kind of the big difference between like Xemnu and somebody like Professor X of the X-Men, right? I know Jean Grey has in the past, but in terms of being able to full on dominate the mind of the Hulk and be able to force him to do whatever it is that you want him to do, it doesn't really work that way. Like whether it's the Incredible Hulk's rage or his healing factor, even when you're dealing with somebody like the Purple Man, Marvel's kind of consistently established over the years that telepathy doesn't necessarily work on the Hulk the same way it does with pretty much anybody else. And that's one of the reasons why it's kind of given to us here that with Xemnu kind of using his abilities, at least attempting to use them on the Incredible Hulk, it didn't really work because the Incredible Hulk's mind doesn't really work that way. That whenever Xemnu or even a telepath or somebody like that is using their powers on someone, that they're basically using them in their current form, right? How they think and feel as a human being, as a normal adult. But the Incredible Hulk is more childlike than anything else. And so one of the things that kind of goes on here is you basically have Rick Jones, right? Now, Rick Jones had died at a previous point in time and had essentially been resurrected, kind of brought back to life by McGowan when she was part of Shadowbase, and has essentially kind of been part of the Hulk team ever since. But it's one of these things where like Banner kind of freaks out and smashes a mirror and then just kind of starts talking about how rational it is and how important it is, how the Incredible Hulk was trying to get the upper hand. But one of the things that the Hulk tells us here is that, at least the persona stuck inside the mind of Banner is that in reality, like Banner's under the control of like Xemnu, right? His mind is being manipulated by Xemnu. And so that's kind of the big difference here. That's one of the big caveats is Marvel oftentimes, despite the fact that they're in effect the same person, Marvel treats the Incredible Hulk and Bruce Banner as two distinctly different people in terms of how their brains function, their drive, their motivation. And so it's almost as if the Immortal Hulk is like a separate physical manifestation of Banner, which technically he has been in the past, but being able to telepathically control Banner is pretty easy in comparison to being able to telepathically control the Hulk. Now, what usually ends up happening in a circumstance like that is if somebody goes to telepathically control Banner and the Hulk realizes it, the Hulk will manifest, right? And the Hulk will keep that from happening. But sometimes it doesn't really work that way. And that more or less seems to be what was happening with Xemnu, is that he's manipulating Banner and kind of, Banner's operating under his control. The Incredible Hulk is seemingly the only one who knows what it is that Xemnu is doing, right? And so in his frustration where he's kind of stuck in, on the inside, which is basically the inside of Banner's mind, right? This kind of internal persona, again, kind of smashing against this glass, trying to get out in order to kind of retake control of himself away from Xemnu. Then suddenly like this kind of voice comes out of nowhere, right? And literally it tells him like Xemnu's rewritten Banner, right? That's not something that you can punch. It's stronger than you are. And where Immortal Hulk doesn't really know who that is, then like you basically end up having Worldbreaker who appears and is like, but regardless of the power of Xemnu, he's not stronger than we are, right? Like after all, I'm the strongest one there is, which is true, right? Like Worldbreaker Hulk, well, I would really say Heart of the Monster Hulk is the strongest version of the Hulk, but Worldbreaker Hulk, as he's presented here, is super strong, right? It's astronomically strong. And so it gets kind of nuts because it's one of these instances where you have McGowan and you have Samson who kind of try to explain to Banner exactly what's happening in the sense that he's more or less being manipulated by Xemnu. Now, this next little segment takes place over the span of about a couple minutes, right? So basically the span of the conversation that McGowan and Samson are having, or really McGowan, Rick Jones, and Samson are having with Banner. But you basically kind of switch over to sort of the internal mind of Bruce himself, at least with regards to where all the Hulk personalities reside, right? And what you have here is you literally have like Worldbreaker Hulk, you've got Immortal Hulk, who are just kind of traveling through this whole, huge different area and kind of understanding what all is going on here. And it's very much like a journey, right? Like it's a great big huge journey and experience. And it's kind of interesting and kind of wild the way that it unfolds. But ultimately, the effort taking place inside of Banner with regards to the Immortal Hulk, dealing with like Worldbreaker Hulk, the conversation they're having, this idea that it's not as simple as just punching his way out, that they have to essentially get to the source of Banner's mind where Xemnu is kind of orchestrating his control, it causes a little bit of turmoil with regards to Bruce, but more in terms of a mental state. One of the things we also end up finding out too is that like Joe Fixit Hulk has just kind of been locked away. The Xemnu managed to get a hold of him. So in essence, it's almost kind of like having a physical Xemnu in the mind of Banner who kind of went through and started locking away different versions of the Hulk. But once they get to like the source or the main area, that you literally have Banner as a little kid who's just watching like Magic Planet with Xemnu. And Xemnu's just kind of manipulating him, right? Like Magic Planet, they're singing the song and all that kind of stuff. And Banner bought into it, subconsciously bought into it because it was the childhood he always wanted. The childhood that he got was a childhood that they received from his father, Brian Banner, who just beat him all the time and beat his mom all the time, right? Like that's the childhood he got. But this is the escape. This is the way for him to basically get away. And the fact that there's so much trauma and so much destruction and really so many issues in Banner's life made it infinitely easier for Xemnu to get in. And that's one of the reasons why Banner is such an intriguing character and really relatable for a lot of people. I mean, none of us can relate to the idea of turning into a giant green rage monster and like trashing a town, but we can relate to the idea of like struggle and strife and going through just like the thick of it in our lives, and how easy it is, or how easy that we've been manipulated by other people due to their desire to essentially, you know, achieve whatever it is they're looking to achieve by preying on our weaknesses. And so at the end of the day, the important kind of takeaway here is that Banner really is just a little kid inside his own head who just wanted his childhood to be better. He wanted his life to be better. Instead, he's stuck with the life that he has. And so what you get is the Immortal Hulk who kind of goes through and starts trashing everything, right? Like destroying, quote unquote, the method by which Xemnu is controlling Banner. But in doing so, once it's all trashed, he realizes there's kind of an access point there, right? A way by which he can crawl through and then effectively get out, right? And that's exactly what he does. And it's done in a pretty gruesome way. Like he literally claws himself out of Banner's body and just like rips himself out. And so physically becomes like his own manifestation, which more or less is kind of how that happens, just not really in such a gruesome way. Under normal circumstances, I mean, it's happened before, and under normal circumstances, he'll just revert back into Banner is really all that'll happen. But the important thing here is that he kind of tells everybody, look, like, yeah, Xemnu is manipulating everybody and he was controlling you and all that kind of stuff. That's why all you heard me saying was Hulk. You couldn't understand what I was saying because Xemnu was screwing up your head you wouldn't basically know what was actually going on when it was me trying to talk to you. And so it's kind of a crazy thing because then you have Rick Jones kind of examining this corpse, which is really weird. He's like, man, like, you know, isn't it fascinating all the permutations? It's kind of weird and kind of wonky. But at the end of the day, Hulk has essentially come to the realization that that basically Xemnu's working on behalf of Roxxon, right? Working on behalf of Dario Agger. And so ultimately they take the fight directly to Roxxon Oil. Now, one of the things that goes on here, and one of the things that kind of happened behind the scenes, is that Xemnu had kind of been going through and more or less transforming all the staff into like his own kind of screwed up, twisted looking henchmen, right? But they all are more or less like beholden to him. The Hulks go through and kind of start trashing everything, but then you get to Dario Agger himself, who's having a conversation with Xemnu. And one of the things that he's talking about is like, why is any of this happening, right? Like I thought we had an agreement, right? We had some kind of system set up where basically we would destroy the Incredible Hulk's public image. The general public would turn against him since they're in favor of him at the moment, and then we replace him with you. And you are essentially a person masquerading as a hero in the world, but doing things to our whim, right? To what it is that we want. But ultimately, Xemnu doesn't really care, right? He's still like going through and converting people. He had managed to kind of internalize the conversion process. And so literally like because he's like part machine, like he just kind of bends over and then like his whole back opens up and then just pulls things in. And that's exactly what he did with Dario Agger, right? Like he literally just bends over, his back opens up, and then it just snatches up Dario Agger and then just drags him down inside to convert him into like one of these crazy looking weird things. It's pretty dark, right? Not gonna lie. It's pretty crazy. And it's cool, but it's pretty crazy. Now, ultimately, the Immortal Hulk and them managed to smash their way directly into Dario's office, only to find that he's all messed up, right? I mean, this guy he's all, I mean, just look at that, man. Like this dude's just a bloody pulp, right? That's all this guy is. Even the Immortal Hulk is like, my God, man. And then that's when you basically end up having Xemnu kind of pops up, right? And initially kind of goes to control the Immortal Hulk. Now, one of the funny things that's kind of revealed here is that with Xemnu having his control over Banner, having control of Banner is only having control of one facet of the Incredible Hulk or the Immortal Hulk, because there's so many different permutations of his personality there. Not only that, Worldbreaker Hulk managed to kind of slice off a section of Banner's mind that was basically kept safe and hidden away from Xemnu. And so the result of this is that when Xemnu goes to essentially take over the Hulk's mind, and he successfully manages to take over him while at the same time talking to everybody on TV, using his hypnotic powers to kind of manipulate everybody on TV, the Immortal Hulk starts to succumb. And that's when you have Rick Jones who shows up and is like, that's enough, right? Like, you're making a really bad mistake if you keep doing this. You don't really know who you're dealing with. And at the end of the day, like, Xemnu's like whatever, man, it's the Immortal Hulk, right? Like, your little green light isn't going to do anything to me. You're going to feed him gamma radiation. Like, I mean, that's cool, but like, none of that really matters. And ultimately, you know, Xemnu's kind of like, I mean, you can take his body if you want, but like, I have his mind, right? So give his body all the gamma radiation you want to. I don't really care. I've got control of this guy's mind. And that's when Rick Jones reveals only what was available, right? Look deeper and look who's coming up for you. And that's when you have like literally Worldbreaker Hulk, who just looks directly at Zemo through the Hulk's eye, and it's just like welcome to the magic planet? No. Welcome to my planet. And literally Worldbreaker Hulk emerges and just bam, one-shots Xemnu. Just like that, right? Just like one-shots this guy. And that's it, right? That's it. It's one shot, right? Like, literally the Worldbreaker Hulk manifests, one-shots, and then goes back. Now here's the thing about this, right? This is one of the reasons why this is so cool. Under normal circumstances, I would look at this and I would say, okay, you know, whatever, it's a thing that exists, you know, and it's cool to kind of see him for a moment. The reason why this is so important is this is Al Ewing effectively establishing that at any point in time, the Immortal Hulk can and will pull out the Worldbreaker persona, right? That's going to happen somewhere along the line. Worldbreaker Hulk will full on come back. He'll make a return. But that's kind of the nature of Banner, and that's kind of the nature of the Hulk, is that it's like drawing index cards, right? And sometimes it's done arbitrarily, sometimes it's random. So like the Immortal Hulk will turn into Savage Hulk, who'll turn into like Joe Fixit, who will turn back to Savage Hulk and then into Banner. Sometimes it's just done indiscriminately. Other times, depending on the circumstances, a particular Hulk will emerge because Banner wants them to. And that kind of feels like one of the directions that Al Ewing is moving in, where Banner can, in a lot of ways, control which version of the Hulk comes out. It's kind of nuts. And it's a really, really cool concept to bring in to the Incredible Hulk mythos, because outside of Professor Hulk, there wasn't really very many instances where that actually happened. But the big takeaway from this, and one of the big moments from this, is that where the Immortal Hulk's just like done, right? Walks away, kind of goes back to his base, calls it a day, that Rick Jones stays behind. And Rick kind of starts talking to Dario Agger, right? This giant corpse thing, and says like, you know, the crass little billionaire who thought the four winds would forever bow to him. So you summoned them, and in they have blown. But you couldn't control Zenmo, so you certainly can't control me. Not now and not ever. And so what he basically reveals is that in this circumstance, like this Rick Jones that we see here is not actually Rick Jones, right? Instead, like it's basically somebody impersonating Rick Jones. And the person who's impersonating Rick Jones is actually the leader. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are picking back up with the Immortal Hulk. We're getting caught back up again. I know we were kind of dropping off from this. So this is one of those weird stories, not really even weird. Well, it is weird, right? It's Immortal Hulk. Like, Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk is so wonky, but it's so cool at the same time. Like, it's so different from any other Incredible Hulk story that I think I've ever read in my entire life. But this one kind of picks up seemingly in the middle of everything. And what you basically have here is this instance where something popped off, and the Incredible Hulk basically let off, or Immortal Hulk basically let off like this gamma explosion, right? Basically detonated like a gamma bomb. And the result is that no one really knows how to handle it, right? All you really have is Rick Jones, and you've got the Incredible Hulk. And so it's kind of like, okay, like what's happening here? Now you do have Jackie. For those of you guys who don't remember, Jackie's basically the friend of the Immortal Hulk. She was a member of the press and still kind of is, but she's the one who's kind of become an ally of the Hulk family, which was kind of a way for Al Ewing to have this situation, or to write these kind of stories where you would at least have some story out there that wouldn't shine a negative light on the Incredible Hulk or on the Immortal Hulk, and kind of just like show him as he is, as opposed to how the public generally perceives him. Whether or not it's popular among the public is something that Al Ewing's never particularly explored, but it is kind of cool to see. The important thing is that because of all this, Gamma Flight ultimately responds, right? Now, Gamma Flight is, by all standards of measurement, basically an anti-Hulk force, right? I mean, Gamma Flight has had different histories and different rosters over the course of Marvel Comics, but in its current form, like it has been over the course of the entire Immortal Hulk run, it's an anti-Hulk force. And that's why you have guys here who are some pretty heavy hitters, right? You've got Titania, who we've talked about in the original Secret Wars story from 1984 because she's been around for so long, who's basically just a super strong chick. You've got the Absorbing Man Crusher Creel, who was one of the most criminally underrated characters in all of Marvel Comics, really until Immortal Hulk. That's the reason why this story is so awesome for Crusher Creel. It is a story that focuses on the Hulk, right? This is Al Ewing's Hulk run, but he's done so much work to expand on Crusher Creel that it's amazing. And then you have Puck. I never really understood why Puck was on this team. But you have Puck, right? Just this really short guy. But the result here is that, of course, they basically kind of go after the Incredible Hulk with the intention of taking him out. Now, the entirety, like Jackie herself is like trying to keep this from happening. But at the end of the day, Gamma Flight's their main prerogative, right? Their number one goal here is to incapacitate the Hulk, to essentially take the Hulk out. And so in this conflict, he basically rips off the arm of Crusher Creel, which he's never going to lose his arm forever, right? All he has to do is just bond himself to metal, and then his arm will regrow, or any substance out there. It doesn't really matter. Titania gets pissed off because her and Crusher Creel have been banging for a long time, and so ultimately she goes after the Immortal Hulk. Now, while all that's happening, Jackie notices something. Jackie notices that Rick Jones is smiling the whole time. Now, one of the things that we learned in the last video is that this is not actually Rick Jones, right? Rick Jones is possessed by the leader, by Samuel Stearns, one of the main enemies of the Immortal Hulk, but we don't really know how that happened, right? We don't really know exactly how it is that the leader managed to take control and basically possess Rick Jones. this. But then you also have Crusher Creel, who comes with this like amazing idea, right? He's like, okay, he's like, think about it, Home Slice. He's like, you're the absorbing man. You can absorb and turn into essentially any material out there. The one thing we've never seen him absorb and turn into is adamantium. I guarantee we will at some point along the line, just because of all the work that's being done here. But he's like, I can absorb and turn into anything. And then he realizes I can also do it with gamma radiation, right? If it exists, I can turn into it. And so literally he just absorbs all this gamma radiation like he's done before, and then just emerges as like this giant, huge mountain of a man. Now from there, we switch back over to Shadow Base, where the main Hulk family is kind of residing, right? Doc Samson and so on. And then suddenly you have like basically this guy, Del Fry, who's currently sitting in a giant tank. Now, Del Fry was a character we were previously introduced to in the early launch of Immortal Hulk, right? And it's been a little while, so kind of a refresher here. Del Fry was basically a kid who, or really a high school kid who was playing football, and his dad essentially injected him with gamma radiation under the idea that it would basically enhance him a little bit, but it would prevent any of the major injuries that he would likely sustain while playing football, right? So ligament tears, broken bones, different things like that, and it would give him the best opportunity for success. The problem with this is that he died. Like immediately, right? He died like immediately when that happened. And so what ends up going on here is that the Immortal Hulk and his allies had essentially stumbled across this kind of gamma radiation signal, and then came across the grave of Del Fry, dug him up, and they've just kind of been, I guess, experimenting on him to a degree, or trying to get a better understanding of him, since they don't really know anything about him. But by and large, he's just kind of been in the background. Well, suddenly he pops up, right? He just emerges, like literally emerges from his tank, disintegrates one of the scientists, and then immediately goes after the whole group. Now, one of the things that we find out here, kind of a little bit of a flashback, is that when you do get this origin where he was exposed to gamma radiation by his dad and then ultimately died, that the reality is the green door opened behind him. And instead of the one below all passing through, it was the leader. So somehow or another, the leader managed to find his way to the realm of the one below all. And we'll actually find out how that happened. But basically, Del Fry has been reliving the same moment over and over and over again that was essentially his death. And so the leader kind of steps in and then basically possesses Del Fry. And that's how Del Fry is coming to life at the moment right now. The leader is literally going through and just attacking him. Right now, initially, like Leonard Samson, like Doc Samson, doesn't know who this is, right? He just thinks it's like, you know, Del Fry who's just kind of popped up. And maybe like Del Fry's been listening, quote unquote, that he wasn't actually dead, right? He was really alive the whole time and just kind of in a form of stasis. But then as soon as leader starts talking about things like, remember how I made you who you are, right? Because he's the one that more or less made Doc Samson, that the result is that Doc Samson realizes it's the leader. And that's when he kind of starts to panic a little bit. Of course, he ends up going after him, but the reality is there's not much Doc Samson can do in the face of the leader, especially with a guy like this, because he immediately seizes Samson and says, okay, now it's time to play the game. And then basically snatches him and takes him to the below place, right? To the realm of the one below all, where the one below all just kind of resides there. And for the most part, it's a little bit of you know, some exposition, but not a whole lot here, right? Instead, it's more of just kind of playing mind games and just basically saying that, like, you know, the leader has managed to reach the realm of the one below all by passing through a green door. And again, not a whole lot there. There's not much in the way of explanation, but one of the things that he does kind of hit on here is he introduces this idea of what's called the red door. Now, again, this is kind of a big deal. And the reason why is because if you guys recall what's been going on with the Immortal Hulk so far, that whenever a person who's exposed to gamma radiation dies, that they basically end up being taken to the realm of the one below all. There's this kind of connection that exists between the one below all and gamma radiation itself. And it all kind of goes back to the formation of the Hulk. But the long and short of this is that when a person with gamma radiation dies, quote unquote, they go to the realm of the one below all and a green door opens, which is basically a means for them to pass into the real world. This is why being possessed by the one below all is such a big deal, because if a person like Doc Samson were to arrive there and then become possessed by the one below all, they could pass through the green door and enter into the real world and then have this virtually nigh omnipotent level of power. The result of this is that with the door being changed to red, what it essentially means is that if Doc Samson were to pass through it, what it basically means is that either Doc Samson cannot pass through the red door, meaning he can't come back. And that seems to be the case because, you know, the way that Samuel Stearns describes it is he says red for danger, red for stop, from this side at least. So basically mean that like no magic can return him to life, that he's basically stuck here, or the possibility exists that if he does pass through the green door, he would actually die and go on to the realm of Mistress Death. That more or less seems to be the case. We're not given an actual explanation here. All we really have to go by is what, you know, the leader says, which is the red door means you can't pass through it, right? It'd be like walking into a wall. You can't go back to the realm of the living. You're essentially stuck here. The result of this is that the Incredible Hulk, kind of going back to Immortal Hulk facing off against Absorbing Man, it's a cool bit of a conflict here. It's interesting, right? I mean, you see the Immortal Hulk literally fighting a giant, you know, form of like gamma gamma energy. But one of the things that happens is that with the leader in possession of both Rick Jones as well as Del Fry, when one of them is talking, the other one is as well. So you literally have Rick Jones who's just kind of talking to somebody who's not there because of the fact that Del Fry is talking to like the people who are there, right, in the gamma base. And so ultimately Charlene, who again is kind of the science, like the head science group of the Hulk family, ends up kind of initiating this teleportation, right? There's this kind of thing where she basically ends up ripping Del Fry away, literally like translocating him. At the same time, you end up having Doc Samson, who basically cracks the One Below All version of the leader over the head. And so what it does is it creates a kind of energy effect, right? Where basically the leader, as he's in possession of Del Fry, as well as him being in possession of Rick Jones, kind of reflects this pain, right? This anguish. Because if you consider these guys to be like facsimiles, then the leader, as he exists in the realm of the One Below All right now, is like the leader prime, right? So it's like if the leader duplicated himself and then you attacked the main leader, the other duplicates would feel the same pain, right? I don't know if that really makes any sense, but that's basically what's happening here. And so ultimately they're kind of teleported away. And then one of the things that kind of goes on, and this is all really kind of the plan of the leader, the idea of counting on what Gamma Flight would do with the Incredible Hulk being pushed continually over and over again, and the rest of the team being distracted. Nobody really being there in order to talk him down. Jackie tries to, but the leader knows Gamma Flight and he knows the history of the Immortal Hulk well enough to know that Gamma Flight is not going to listen, right? Their main goal here is to destroy, or at least to kill Immortal Hulk, which is really just kind of incapacitating them, which they're aware of, and that nobody's really going to bring this to a peaceful end. And that's exactly what happens. Gamma Flight basically kills the Immortal Hulk, and then the Immortal Hulk is teleported to the realm of the One Below All when the green door opens. And so again, that's kind of his bit of a situation here. Now, what you also have is this really interesting concept where you have this being that's effectively chained up, right? Like literally chained up in this giant steel container and essentially held there. And kind of talks about how like they can feel everything that's going on, right? They can feel everything taking place. It's kind of called the inner world, which is basically the mindscape of Bruce Banner, right inside the mind of Banner himself. And that this individual was essentially captured by the leader and chained up in this location and basically kept there, right? Indicating whoever this person is, their power is far beyond anything the leader can really pull off here, right? And so what you end up getting is kind of the leader in the form of Worldbreaker Hulk, which is pretty nuts. And by all standards of measurement, we'd have to assume he contains the same level of power as the Worldbreaker Hulk does, right? Otherwise, why give us this form of the leader? Why would Al Ewing make him look this way? And it's one of these things where, again, the Immortal Hulk is kind of experiencing these dreams or this kind of memory series in his mind and speaking outright as he's experiencing that, right? But ultimately, he's taken to where Joe Fixit and Bruce Banner are chained up inside of Banner's own mindscape. Now, this is kind of the crazy thing, and this is an important thing to understand here when it comes to the Immortal Hulk. I know it seems a little strange, but what's basically going on here is a foreign entity has infiltrated the mind of Bruce Banner, and then in turn is controlling it. That's not uncommon for the Incredible Hulk mythos, not insofar as some foreign entity taking over the mind of Banner, but in the sense of one of the personalities in Banner's mind essentially taking over all the others, right? And we've seen that happen in different forms. We've even seen these personalities merge into a singular personality, which is Professor Hulk, right? We've seen what happens when these kind of things calm down, right? When these kind of things take place in the Incredible Hulk's mind. And so basically, Joe Fixit is chained up here, Bruce Banner is chained up here, and now the Immortal Hulk is chained up here. And the whole idea here of the leader is to take Bruce Banner and send him through the green door and into the realm of the One Below All. Why it is he's doing this, again, we don't fully understand. We'll find out here in a minute or two. But in that moment, Bruce Banner cries out for help, right? Cries out for help from anybody who will listen. And then in comes this guy who was chained up, who's basically revealed to be the Devil Hulk. Now, here's the crazy thing about this. The Devil Hulk is one of the more interesting concepts or interesting versions of the Incredible Hulk in Marvel Comics, but you don't really see a whole lot about him. The way it's kind of given to us here, because the mindscape is one of these things where the personifications of the different versions of the Hulk are directly tied to the emotional state of the Immortal Hulk and really just the experiences of Banner over the course of his life, that the Devil Hulk in a lot of ways represents all the torment and suffering he's experienced over the course of his life kind of manifested. In a lot of ways, it's almost given to us as this idea that the Devil Hulk was the first version of the Hulk to manifest in the mind of Banner when he was being abused by his father. And then once he actually was exposed to gamma radiation because of the gamma bomb, the Incredible Hulk manifested. Then you got things like Joe Fixit and so on and so forth. But the Devil Hulk is the most emotionally powerful of all the versions of the Hulk that exist out there. And so that's why you essentially see this kind of fight breaking down between what is basically Worldbreaker Hulk, who's more or less possessed by the leader, and then Devil Hulk. And Devil Hulk literally crushes Worldbreaker Hulk. I mean, just pummels this guy, absolutely pummels this guy. It's not even close, right? Because it's it's just sheer raw emotion here. And that's one of the big differences, is that with Worldbreaker Hulk, it was technically the Incredible Hulk at his angriest, but he had also achieved this just kind of pure form, right? In the sense that it seemed like the Incredible Hulk at his angriest, but also his most calm at the same time. And I know it sounds like an oxymoron to say that, but that's why, like, when you go and you read, you know, Worldbreaker or World War Hulk by Greg Pak, that the Worldbreaker Hulk is basically like, I wouldn't really say like peaceful, but he's methodical. Like, it's just one of these things where it's like, okay, like I'm so pissed off that I'm rational now. And that's like a whole nother level of being angry. But nonetheless, you know, it's one of these kind of crazy things here where you basically switch over to the leader and we kind of find out how all this popped off with him. Now, the idea behind this is that those individuals who are able to access the realm of the One Below All through gamma radiation, that it is most usually only allowed by those individuals who are of pure gamma radiation, right? Meaning that they are rooted in the Incredible Hulk and the gamma radiation he contains. The leader is a little bit different here. The way it's explained here is that the leader essentially synthesized a means by which to basically create a green door and enter the realm of the One Below All. But when he got there, he met Brian Banner. And one of the things about this is that Brian Banner kind of depicts this idea that when he was doing all these crappy things and when he was kind of tormenting the Immortal Hulk, you know, during at the beginning of Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk run, that is because he was possessed by the One Below All, which we know that was the case, right? We know that to be the case. But one of the things that Leader doesn't really understand is what is it that the One Below All is looking for, right? And how is it that a person can kind of reach into the real world and then manipulate the Immortal Hulk from here? Because the leader wants to just destroy, like he's always wanted to destroy the Immortal Hulk, right? That's kind of his main goal. And that's you know, as basic as that ideology is here, the way he goes about it is genius. Given the fact that the way that Brian Banner explains it, the One Below All needs a physical body. That the One Below All doesn't actually have a physical form itself. Instead, it's just raw desire and exceedingly terrible desires, right? But it's just more or less raw emotion. What it needs to do is bond itself to a host and then in turn use that host to enter into the real world. That the One Below All in its current form cannot pass through a green door and then just enter into the real world and then just take on some kind of a physical form and conquer all of the multiverse. It doesn't work that way. And so that's when Leader realizes, I can get behind this. And so literally Leader basically tricks Brian Banner and then completely absorbs him. And so the idea is that in some of these instances when Brian Banner appeared in the Immortal Hulk run, that it was actually the leader in possession or appearing to look like Brian Banner. Not only that, now that he's consumed Brian, he has what's called the mark of the One Below All. And then in turn, he reveals his goal is to actually achieve a means by which the One Below All can enter into the real world and then conquer all of reality. Kind of harkening back to the story that we did where the Immortal Hulk was on a cosmic level and basically destroyed the entirety of the multiverse when the multiverse is reborn in its 9th iteration. That basically Leader realizes the only way for the One Below All to achieve its full totality of power is if it is in possession of the Immortal Hulk. And that's the whole goal behind this, that the leader wants to help the One Below All succeed. The only way to do that is to mess with, to basically end up snatching the Immortal Hulk and Banner, bring them to the realm of the One Below All, and then allow the One Below All to essentially possess them and then go into the multiverse and destroy everything in existence, right? He literally wants to help the end of creation. And so again, kind of jumping back to the current moment, that when you have the Devil Hulk just absolutely pummeling Immortal Hulk, the big fear that kind of pops up here is you end up having the arrival of the leader manifest into the form of Brian Banner. Now, it's not one of these things where it terrifies the Devil Hulk to the point where he starts crying or anything like that, but the Devil Hulk was born out of the abuse of Brian Banner. And really, in a lot of ways, it's part and parcel to Brian Banner. And so that's when he's kind of like where do you think, like, all this rage and everything that you are me, right? You are my rage incarnate, right? You're my wrath. You're a reflection of me and as abusive as I was. Where do you think you got your personality from? How do you think you became the person that you are? You know, where is the lie in all of this, right? If you tell me that I'm not you, you know, or you're not me, and that I'm lying to you, where's the lie? Look at yourself, look at me, right? Look at the abuse that I put you through, and look at who you are. Look at the things that you've done, right? You are a reflection of me. And Bruce Banner kind of refuses to accept that, and then immediately goes after the leader. Now, of course, this leads to the Immortal Hulk kind of watching all this unfold and desiring to kind of end the conflict, right? And it's not because of the fact that he doesn't want to fight for the sake of wanting a fight. It's because of the fact that in seeing Brian Banner's persona, the Immortal Hulk, or really kind of, I guess it's really just the baseline Incredible Hulk at this point, is not the sharpest tool in the shed. And so ultimately, he kind of comes to this idea that all I want my father to do is tell me that he loves me, right? That's the only thing that I want. I just want my dad to say like I love you, right? I love you, I care about you. And in doing this, he stops the Devil Hulk from destroying the leader, who he's kind of seeing as Brian Banner. And because of the fact that Brian Banner has been absorbed by the leader. So to destroy the leader is to destroy Brian Banner. Banner. And to destroy Brian Banner is to ruin the Immortal Hulk's chances of getting his father's approval and his father's love. And so in that moment, it basically allows the leader to kill the Devil Hulk, right? To basically decapitate him. And that was their one shot at success. That was their one shot to come out on top. There's no real conceivable way for them to win anymore. And so what you have is the leader who snatches up Bruce Banner, takes him through the green door, and disappears. And all you're left with is basically the Hulk and Joe Fixit. And Joe Fixit is pissed, right? Joe Fixit is mad as hell because he's kind of like, okay, this is a problem, right? Like, this is a major issue. Like, why would you do this, right? Why would you do any of this? Like, you've literally just destroyed our chances of saving Banner and quite possibly doomed all of creation, right? And so from there, you end up jumping to the base of Gamma Flight, right? To really the Alpha Flight space station, but you end up jumping to the Gamma Flight team. And you have, of course, Walter, also known as Sasquatch, who's still dead after being shot in the head, who's just kind of in a kind of, not really, I guess, a coffin, if that's what you want to call it. But basically, he ends up popping back to life, right? Now, you also have Jackie, who kind of introduces this idea that where Gamma Flight's operating under the guise that, like, the Immortal Hulk just for whatever reason went crazy and destroyed an entire town in a gamma explosion. Her response is, it doesn't actually seem to be that way, right? That the Immortal Hulk was pissed off, like exceedingly mad for a second or two, and then calmed down due to whatever it was that was going on. And then Rick Jones showed up, and Rick Jones touched him, and then something happened, and then, like, literally the Immortal Hulk just snapped and just let off this massive explosion. And so looking at the facts, because of the fact that, you know, she's a journalist, her job, well, ideally her job's to look at the facts, that she kind of looks at this and says, from what I can tell, Rick Jones was the one who caused this, right? And that's when you basically have Leonard Samson, who is kind of the new Sasquatch, took over the body of Walter, and then just kind of popped back up again and says, yeah, basically it was Rick Jones that caused all of this. How he caused it and why he caused it, I don't fully know, but we know that he did. And so during this time, of course, while the Immortal Hulk is kind of held, kind of put in a holding facility, because again, he's more or less immortal, right? In the sense that, like, he'll always heal, and the injury he sustained, it didn't really kill him. His body would more or less heal and come back. That he's met by the arrival of Henry Peter Gyrick. Now, Henry Peter Gyrick is old school. This guy is OG. Technically, he is the head of the Alpha Flight program right now, but for those of you guys who aren't really familiar with his history, this is the guy who helped to spearhead Project Wide Awake, the Sentinels against the X-Men and all that kind of stuff. That was Henry Peter Gyrick, right? This guy is OG, right? I mean, this guy has worked against the superhero community in almost every conceivable way since he's been introduced in Marvel Comics, right? If you're a superhero team that exists out there, there's a good chance you've had a run-in with Henry Peter Gyrick, and so basically he's kind of held here. Now, one of the reason why I include this little tidbit here, because normally I would have skipped over it, but the reason why we included this little tidbit here is you have this moment where, again, like, everything that Henry Peter Gyrick says kind of echoes, so to speak, through the mindscape of Banner. So essentially, Joe Fixit hears everything that Henry Peter Gyrick is saying. And one of the things that Gyrick says is that you can't escape your bonds, right? If you decide to turn back into Banner and shrink down into your current form, your human form, which of course we know he can't do, that the bonds will shrink with him. And that's when it hits on Joe Fixit. Oh, I know exactly what to do, right? Like, apparently this guy hasn't kept up on things. We don't just shrink down back into our human forms anymore. Our human forms bust out of our physical forms, right? Just literally emerge from it, which leads me to believe there have to be like these Immortal Hulk corpses all over the world where instead of like the Immortal Hulk, quote unquote, shrinking back down into Banner, then instead Banner just like busts out of his Immortal Hulk form, and that's how Banner returns to normal. But that's when it hits on Joe Fixit, who's kind of like, okay, we can escape this. So literally he busts out of the form of the Immortal Hulk, right? Which is how he returns to his normal self, and then takes out Henry Peter Gyrick and the two guards, grabs a gun, and then basically starts to leave. Now, of course, he runs into Samson and the rest of Gamma Flight, and Samson realizes, okay, this is Joe Fixit, right? This is one of Bruce Banner's alternate personalities. That's why he looks like Banner, because it's just one of his other personalities that exists. But like, Joe Fixit's not as crazy as he used to be, right? Which, for any of you guys who know the history of Joe Fixit in Marvel Comics, this guy used to be intense, right? Like, Joe Fixit, I still say Joe Fixit, personality-wise, is the best version of the Hulk who's out there. I loved Joe Fixit. He was so cool, and he was so fun. He was literally the guy ran Vegas at one point. So it was just kind of like, damn, like, this is awesome. His personality is amazing. In any event, where Samson's kind of like, yeah, you know, Joe Fixit, he's a lot more reasonable than he used to be. He's like, yeah, that's me all over. Reasonable. And then fires a gun into the window of the space station, right? He gets sucked out into space. Now, the protocols immediately kick in, right? Which starts shutting down, shuts down this access hole. But like, literally, Joe Fixit's ripped into the vacuum of space. Now, you would normally expect that to kill him. It doesn't, because again, like, he turns back into the Immortal Hulk. And it's a genius strategy there, right? Emerge from the Immortal Hulk into your human form in order to escape your confines, jump into space. The danger of the situation will just force him to turn back into the Immortal Hulk. And that's exactly what happens. Ultimately, he ends up landing on the Coney Island Channel. The problem is that when he gets there, he's immediately met by the Thing, Ben Grimm, which you guys had good to know it was only a matter of time before we saw this conflict unfold. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are picking back up again with the Immortal Hulk, and this more or less gets us caught up, right? With the exception of a couple issues or so, like maybe 1 or 2 issues. But basically, we're caught up with the most recent run, right? And so what this does, it kind of comes out of what we had with the last story arc, right? Where things were kind of popping off and things were a bit crazy, but ultimately, the Immortal Hulk, and this is something that I actually didn't realize at first, and I'm glad you guys said something. It turns out that the Immortal Hulk, or I guess Devil Hulk more or less, has just kind of been defeated and almost seemingly temporarily destroyed. Instead, what you have in the body of the Immortal Hulk is kind of a combination. It's not really even Immortal Hulk per se. It's really just kind of like Savage Hulk and Joe Fixit Hulk, right? Which is actually kind of a cool way to sort of shuffle things around. But one of the things that had happened is that Hulk had essentially escaped the clutches of the government in the form of Henry Gyrick, and we'll talk more about him here in a second, and then crash landed in Coney Island, only to be met by the arrival of Ben Grimm. Now, there's a couple reasons why this happens. One, because it's just Al Ewing paying homage to Ben Grimm and the Incredible Hulk fighting. It's one of those age-old battles, right? It's like the Incredible Hulk versus Thor or something like that. It's not really a Hulk run unless somewhere along the line, the Thing and the Incredible Hulk get into a fight and then have some kind of a rematch, right? It's really the only way you can really call it an Incredible Hulk story. But one of the funny things about this is that you have Ben Grimm, who's kind of talking to the Fantastic Four as he's engaged in this fight and talking about how much weaker the Incredible Hulk is now than he has been in the past. Now, a lot of that's because so much gamma radiation has kind of been siphoned off of him, but the important thing to know here is that with the Incredible Hulk hearing it, he in turn gets pretty pissed off, right? Considering the fact, or really being told that he's consistently weak, until ultimately he actually ends up stopping the fight, right? And just kind of crying throughout the entire ordeal. Now, ultimately, he turns back into Joe Fixit, and that's kind of the crazy thing about this is one of the things to remember when it comes to the Savage Hulk is he's very much a child in terms of how he works and how he functions. He's very childlike in that way. And so, he kind of reacts the way a child would in the sense of like getting overly angry, not really knowing how to process their emotions, but at the same time also kind of lashing out or experiencing emotions they simply just don't know how to handle. And so with Joe Fixit kind of being the one to sort of take back on the form, there's a bit of a conversation that goes on here. In reality, it's not overly important. It is kind of cool to see Joe Fixit and Ben Grimm talking, but unless you're a big fan of either, it's not really relevant here. Instead, it's just one of these things where Joe Fixit kind of explains what's going on with regards to the Immortal Hulk and all that kind of good stuff, and Ben Grimm talks about having kind of like a moment of faith or something along those lines, and that's more or less it. The big takeaway from this little bit of a conversation here isn't really the conversation itself, but it's back at Shadow Base Site G, and we'll talk about, again, where that is here in a second. But in effect, the One Below All manages to kind of send a facsimile of himself into the main Marvel Universe. Now, I do want to specify, it's not the One Below All in its full totality invading the main Marvel Universe. If that were to happen, based on what little itty-bitty information we have, there'd be almost nobody who could stop him. But there is a facsimile of the One Below All here, which is in its own right exceedingly powerful. Now, one of the things that had also happened in the Immortal Hulk stories, if you guys recall, is that Dr. Lenkowski, the former Sasquatch, had basically been killed, right? And while that in and of itself was not the most significant thing ever, because the reality was he just hadn't been a significant character for a long time, when Doc Samson's physical body was seemingly destroyed, when he was basically killed, he was resurrected in the body of Sasquatch. Now, again, Sasquatch kind of has a bit of gamma radiation history with the Incredible Hulk. It's not really a whole lot to run home about, but it is a couple cool things that were there. But that's why you don't really see Lenkowski in the traditional sense. You end up seeing Doc Samson instead. But one of the other things that goes on here is Henry Peter Gyrick. Now, Henry Peter Gyrick, as we talked about in the last video, this guy has been around for a long time. He was originally a Chris Claremont character in Marvel Comics, but the idea is that he really made his claim to fame and it kind of made his bones in Marvel Comics is like the anti-mutant guy, right? Like him and Dr. Valerie Cooper, who Contessa, for the most part, seems to be based off of in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That he was basically a guy who was staunchly anti-mutant and led a litany of different organizations that were designed for the purpose of promoting Project Wide Awake, right, to contain and control the mutant threat. The result of this is that over the years in Marvel, his role is kind of expanded to become a threat to not just the mutant community, but really to the larger superhuman community. And that really kind of came out of his involvement with the Commission on Superhuman Activities. It was a way for Marvel to kind of segue his character into something beyond simply being an X-Men villain who exists out there. The big thing about this is that Gyrick is used to getting his way, and he's used to running a pretty tight ship and a pretty harsh ship. And that's why when he kind of starts talking to Gamma Flight and really starts talking about like threatening them and this whole idea of like, you know, Crusher Creel, for example, who's in the hospital, he sends a text message and now there's like warrants out in all 50 states for Crusher Creel, different things along those lines, really using more of fear tactics to get his job done, as opposed to working with the team or kind of managing the team that works under him. It ultimately leads to Gamma Flight basically bailing out. Now that in and of itself is not a huge thing, but that basically allows for the launch or the bringing in of the UFOs, and we'll talk about them here in a second. Instead, what we do here is we switch over for a second, and you basically pick up with Jackie. Now, one of the things that's kind of gone on here with Jackie's character, and it's a little wonky, is she's basically been picking up, not really an infection from gamma radiation, but she basically has been exposed to gamma radiation multiple times. And the result of this is that she's actually able to start seeing the world through gamma irradiated eyes. Now, one of the big things that Al Ewing doesn't really hit at here is whether or not she's wholly unique. It seems like she is, because we've never really seen exactly how the Incredible Hulk sees the world, right? Like, we've never really seen a comic book panel where it shows us the world through the Incredible Hulk's eyes. And if they have, it's simply just the way you would normally see the world. Instead, because there's so much gamma radiation out there, that you have all these kind of gamma irradiated ghosts. Now, we're not really told where they come from. They really just kind of seem to be, you know, forces out there that feed on gamma radiation, or in some form or fashion are inextricably tied into gamma radiation, potentially even victims of the Hulk due to his you know, assaults and attacks and campaigns and so on and so forth based on gamma radiation. That's kind of a little bit of an important thing that I want to talk about here, because Al Ewing looks like he's moving Jackie in a more interesting direction, as opposed to simply just kind of like this well, really former member of the press, and she recently quit, and just kind of being out there and just sort of recording and blogging and documenting the Incredible Hulk's experiences. One of the things that I want to talk about here also is kind of switch over to the One Below All. And the reason for this is because if you guys recall, the leader basically had been masquerading as Rick Jones all this time. So from the time that Rick Jones first showed up in this Immortal Hulk story up until now, it's been the leader the entire time. That what had happened was the leader had basically found a way to enter into the One Below All, into the realm of the One Below All, and then basically come back in the body of Rick Jones in order to get closer to the Incredible Hulk and then find a way to bring him down. With everything that had happened in the last story arc, Bruce Banner had more or less been taken to the realm of the One Below All, and he's kind of been hooked up to this really sadistic looking machine, so the One Below All can kind of siphon the gamma radiation off of him. The issue is it doesn't really seem to be working as intended. That Brian Banner, the father of Bruce, when he was in the realm of the One Below All, was able to get it to work somehow. And when the leader had taken over or really kind of absorbed the mind of Brian Banner and his essence into himself, all the knowledge came along with him. But nonetheless, the efforts of Brian Banner simply don't seem to work here. And he doesn't quite grasp why it is that it's not working the way that it's supposed to. And that's when the spirit of Brian Banner kind of pops up and says, remember, like, it needs a host personality. It needs someone to bond itself to in order to be able to utilize this machine. Initially, it was bonded to me, but now it's not bonded to anybody, and that's why it doesn't work. So it's going to bond to you. And the leader starts freaking out. The leader starts begging for his life, right? Not knowing what he was getting himself into. The whole time, Bruce Banner is just having these crazy visions with these weird things hooked up to his eyes and all kinds of stuff, hooked up to this weird tentacle machine. But nonetheless, like, it's kind of nuts, right? Because ultimately, the One Below All takes over the body of the leader. And that's what kind of allows the One Below All to leave its realm, or at least to send a facsimile of itself from its realm into the main Marvel universe. But again, you know, kind of jumping back to the idea that the Gamma Flight had more or less been removed from the equation, and then now you've got you know, UFOs in their place. The UFOs are not incredibly important. The only thing you really need to know here is that the UFOs were originally a handful of villains who wanted to essentially duplicate the powers of the Fantastic Four. So much so that they actually recreated the whole incident that led to the Fantastic Four getting their powers. But the other part of this is that with Joe Fixit kind of making his way following his encounter with Ben Grimm, that one of the things that he realized is that, you know, is really more or less like the hustler version of Bruce Banner, right? I mean, the hustler persona of Bruce, that he has to make some money. And so one of the things that he does here is he actually pickpockets a guy, and then he in turn uses his credit card to basically buy a whole bunch of jewelry and then pawns it. Now, this actually happens. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with the world. Most people out there are like, yeah, I mean, this definitely happens. It does, right? It happens quite frequently. And that's why when they say, like, if you're going to go to a foreign city even, or go to a foreign country, take like a fanny pack or put your wallet in a place where, one, you can constantly feel it on you. You can always touch your pocket to check and make sure it's there every minute or two. And then also put it in something like a fanny pack or something like that, to where it would be difficult for a person to access it without you knowing. Because what's going on here with Joe Fixit is he snatches this guy's credit card up and then makes a whole bunch of fraudulent purchases. So by the time this guy knows that his credit card's been stolen and reports it, basically Joe Fixit makes his money. He spent like $1,900 on all this jewelry, $1,900 that doesn't belong to him, and then he in turn pawns it for something like $650. And so it's a pretty raw deal for you know, I mean, that's the nature of pawn shops, right? They're designed to rip you off, but it's $650. That's entirely his money, right? And so again, that's kind of how he hustles in that way. But it's kind of going to be a kind of a funny thing, because for the most part, Joe Fixit is not going to be a main focal point of this story. Instead, you basically pick up with Doc Samson in the body of Sasquatch, along with Puck, the member of Alpha Flight, really a longtime friend of Wolverine's, to be honest. Well, friend, enemy, frenemy, more or less, and then Shaman. Now, the whole reason why they're here is to locate the body of Doc Samson and then essentially transfer his essence from the body of Sasquatch back into his regular body again. But one of the big issues that you kind of go on with here, this is kind of interesting. Shadow Site G is actually the original location where the gamma bomb radiation or gamma bomb incident happened. And it's one of the funny things that Puck kind of hits on, because he's like, this is the best place to hide, right? There's not really any gamma radiation here anymore. And it would largely be believed by Gamma Flight that as far as Bruce Banner's concerned, that Bruce Banner doesn't like being the Incredible Hulk. And this is kind of a reminder that of when he became the Hulk. It'd be like the last place he would want to visit, right? Why would you want to go back to the place that has the worst memories for you? And so ultimately, it's kind of this interesting little situation, but they're basically met with this kind of facsimile of the One Below All. Now, this is where I say things get a little wonky here, just because of the fact that when you're dealing with the One Below All and a being on this level of power, the way he's portrayed here is kind of intriguing, but it's also very, very, very important. I'll talk about why here in a second. But before I do that, I want to kind of jump over to what's happening with Joe Fixit real quick, in the sense that there's a guy who's wearing a Hulk smash jacket. Basically, the cops get pissed off because of the damage of the Hulk, and they go to basically, you know, tackle this guy to give him a hard time. And basically, Joe Fixit turns into the Incredible Hulk, and then in turn goes and you know, he's confronted by the UFOs. That'll matter here in a minute. The plot with the UFOs isn't exceedingly important. All that really happens, I mean, to really kind of sum that up real quick, is they kill him. Right, that's basically it. Like, they end up destroying the Incredible Hulk, which pleases them finally after all these years being able to pull it off. And we'll wrap back around to the conclusion of that here in a second. But one of the things that's, you know, kind of getting back to the One Below All here, because I imagine that's what you guys really care about. One of the things that's kind of interesting here is that under normal circumstances, when you have a being of this level of power that's able to take over the host body of somebody and then send a facsimile of himself into the universe, it's insanely powerful, right? That's the way the cosmic entities work. That in Marvel Comics, the cosmic entities like Eternity, Infinity, so on and so forth, the way you see them in the comics, that's not actually them, right? It's a facsimile of themselves. That if Eternity, it needs to show up and do something in the universe, he'll go to the dimension of manifestations. And this is occupied by a guy named Anthropomorpho. And Anthropomorpho will provide him with an M body, basically a body in which the cosmic entity of Eternity can put his essence into and then show up in the main Marvel universe. I mean, I guess technically he could just appear if he wanted to. He is a living embodiment of the universe, but he has to do it in such a way to where mortal beings would be able to understand and recognize his presence. Otherwise, it would likely just be a ball of light or a swirling mass of energy or something along those lines. Say, for example, Eternity wanted to possess someone, then essentially they would seem to have all the power of Eternity. But what you have here with the One Below All is not necessarily the same way. And this is a huge limitation. It's like the biggest weakness of the One Below All, in the sense that in order for the One Below All to reach its full power, it has to possess the Incredible Hulk, because there's essentially this bond that Al Ewing hasn't necessarily expanded on in its fullest form, but there more or less seems to be this irrevocable bond between gamma radiation and the One Below All. The One Below All is more or less the source of gamma radiation, but it seems to be that it can only really operate at its absolute peak when it possesses somebody who really has the most pure form of gamma radiation in their body. And despite all these irradiated individuals like Sasquatch or the Leader or different things like that, none of them have a quote-unquote pure strain the way the Incredible Hulk does. He's the perfect host. And that's why the One Below All is always searching for the Incredible Hulk, because he's so incredibly powerful. He gets stronger the angrier he gets. There's no limit to how strong he can get. He's perfect in seemingly every conceivable way. Now, why it is that the One Below All doesn't just possess somebody who can alter reality, right? Somebody like Franklin Richards or something like that, I would chalk that up to just the nature of the story, right? It's just storytelling. I mean, I would have to believe that the antithesis to the One Above All, right? This demonic, evil being that represents the sum total of all evil. It could possess seemingly anybody, and it would be fine. But the way that Al Ewing has crafted this story, it operates at its peak when it possesses somebody with gamma radiation. And so what ends up happening here, and that's kind of the crazy thing, is the one below all, or even seemingly like this leader facsimile, doesn't quite know exactly what it is, right? Doesn't quite know what's going on. And even the shaman who's kind of analyzing all this stuff is like, there's a whole bunch of host bodies that are all kind of bonded there. And I can try to like bring them together, but I can't separate them, right? I have no idea what would happen if I did. It could potentially kill the people who were a part of it, right? It's kind of like this twisted amalgamation. This more or less seems to be the form that the one below all would take on if it possesses a being that is not the Incredible Hulk, right? That is not the Immortal Hulk. Again, it really kind of seems to be a bit of a test here. Can it make it in that landscape? And seemingly not. But Sasquatch basically runs up on and attacks this facsimile of the one below all. Now, he doesn't kill him, right? He doesn't really have the power to do that. But again, it's a little wonky because it doesn't really know what it is. It's like, a leader? Like, what are you talking about, leader? You know, it's a little strange. And so what you get here is basically the Joe Fixit as the Incredible Hulk being destroyed by the UFOs, and then essentially waking up in the realm of the one below all. Remember, that's one of the things that we talked about, is that whenever anybody who has been exposed to gamma radiation on any measurable scale basically dies, that they are whisked away to the realm of the one below all, and that a green door will open, which will essentially allow them to resurrect themselves. That's how the Incredible Hulk basically always comes back. But the green door can become a red door, and the red door will keep a person from leaving. And that's exactly what happens, right? This version of the leader possessed by the one below all basically says, like, the red door is locked, and you will become my host. You will be the perfect host for my power. And using you, I will traverse across the universe, and I will wipe out everything in existence. And I'll do it in the next universe, and the next universe, and the next universe, across the entirety of the multiverse forevermore, right? This really kind of is essentially Al Ewing playing forward to that story arc that we saw, where in the next version of the multiverse, the Immortal Hulk is running through and just wiping everything out, right? Just destroying everything and essentially eliminating the entirety of the multiverse in and of itself. Now again, why the one above all doesn't step in, I don't know, right? I mean, it's sort of a MacGuffin, right? The one above all has all that power. Why doesn't it just stop the one below all? We don't have an answer to that question yet. We don't really know here. Instead, you get a couple really cool things that happen. The first is that you have Doc Samson, who basically goes into Shadow Base G proper, and when he gets down there, he basically ends up realizing, okay, the body's gone, right? Like, my physical body's gone, so somebody else has it now. I don't know who has it, but somebody else does. The other thing that goes on is that in order to subdue the really Incredible Hulk or Immortal Hulk, whatever you want to call him, along with Joe Fixit, that the one below all starts summoning all these different demon entities that exist down in its realm. And so ultimately, in the midst of all this, Joe Fixit begins to lose his mind, like begins to get angrier and angrier and angrier, starts to rage, and then does something that we've never seen before. He turns into the Red Hulk. Now, this is wholly new. For those of you guys who are new here, one, make sure you guys check out the entire Incredible Hulk playlist I have, which will make you an expert on the Incredible Hulk. But two, the Red Hulk is not Bruce Banner, right? That's Thunderbolt Ross. That is a wholly different person. Joe Fixit is the Gray Hulk, right? He's like a smart Hulk. He's weaker than your normal Savage Hulk, or really a lot of the Hulks that exist out there, a lot of the forms of Banner. But nonetheless, like, he's still pretty capable. But we've never seen the Incredible Hulk become the Red Hulk. That's nuts. That's a whole different thing. And it's kind of nuts because this is basically Cosmic Hulk is what it looks like, right? Like, this is God Hulk, because it's kind of nuts because this guy basically has the ability to shatter the red door. Now, to give you guys perspective here, the red door is created by the one below all, and seemingly the red door can only be opened or destroyed by the one below all. And so at this point, the Immortal Hulk has the power of God. And that's kind of the crazy thing, is because what ends up happening is with the body of Joe Fixit having been destroyed by the UFOs, it begins to remanifest. It begins to reemerge. This time, it's a wholly new version of the Incredible Hulk. It looks like Joe Fixit, but almost with a tint of green, and then like this almost just red veins pulsing throughout his body. It's nuts, right? Like, I really want to call this guy God Hulk. It's crazy, and it's really, really cool. You know, I gotta be honest with you guys, I'm a little sad that Al Ewing's run on the Incredible Hulk is gonna be ending relatively soon, because Al Ewing's run on the Hulk is one of these weird things, right? Like, if you're not a fan of Al Ewing's writing style, you're gonna hate the Hulk. But if you love Al Ewing's writing style, you're gonna love the Hulk. It's one of these things where there really isn't an in-between here. It's kind of divisive, right? It doesn't mean people hate it. It simply just means that it's not necessarily for them, right? So, what we're doing here is we're covering this kind of one-shot called Time of Monsters, right? Which is this kind of, one of these stories where it looks like it's introducing a new version of the Hulk, that seems to be the case, and it's really cool, right? So what this does is this whole story takes place about 9,500 years before the modern day, and what it looks like is it's the very first host of the One Below All, right? The very first person to ever really be exposed to his power and to really take it on in its full totality. Now, what you end up doing here is picking up with a kid by the name of Tammuz, and basically the leader of a local village. And the way this is kind of told is that at some point in their early days, like a lot of primitive cultures, they worshipped essentially a goddess, right? And this idea was that the land they lived in was lush and green, and it was beautiful, and there were all kinds of animals and plants and things for them to feed and feast and so on and so forth. But ultimately, all they did was consume, and they never gave anything back. And so as time passed, the land began to become barren. It began to lose its rich water deposits. The various animals that existed there were either completely consumed or fled. And this was interpreted by the tribe as being punishment by the goddess for the fact that they just never gave to her the way they were supposed to, that all they did was took and they never gave back. And so the result of this is you have what's kind of called the green light, right? And it's almost like this pit that exists down there. And what happens is seemingly people are sacrificed to it. Now, Tammuz seems like one of these kids, or really the part of the generation, and that usually happens with each passing generation. They fall less and less in line with the particular religious beliefs of the generation before them. And so this is no different. And what you end up having here is Tammuz who kind of comes forward, or not really comes forward, but word has reached the ears of the village elder that he doesn't really hold the faith the way other people do, right? His faith is as described as having faltered, right? That he believes that the village elder is essentially rattled, that he's losing his mind, that things need to change and things need to progress, but he's holding on to the way things used to be. And so the result of this is that Tammuz has basically been chosen as a sacrifice. Now, there's going to be a lot of duplicity that goes on here that'll actually be established later on, but ultimately, Tammuz is kicked inside this pit. And when he's sacrificed to this kind of green eye, which literally starts tearing his body apart, right? It's almost like it just kind of absorbs him in the sense that it's almost like a gravity well, right? It just kind of starts sucking him in and ripping the flesh from his bones in a pretty gruesome way. And then he's completely consumed by it, right? Kind of consumed by this green eye, as they call it. And when that happens, the green door opens. Now, for those of you guys who are just joining us with regards to the Incredible Hulk stuff, one, I highly suggest you check out the playlist down in the description to get caught up on everything related to the Immortal Hulk. But two, as a kind of quick run over here, the green door is essentially an access point, right? And it's almost like a door of the chosen. So when a particular individual out there dies and they've been exposed to gamma radiation, which is essentially the case here, right? If anything, this is probably more like a gamma meteorite, right? Or some kind of artifact that's been exposed to gamma radiation somewhere along the line, that when a person's been exposed to gamma and they basically die, the green door opens, which takes them to the realm of the One Below All if they choose to pass through it. And when that happens, Tammuz is essentially taken to the realm of the One Below All. Now, what we end up getting here is this kind of explanation, right? It's something that goes on with regards to his friend. Now, his friend is a kid by the name of Shalim, who's actually the son of the village elder himself. And the way this played out is that at some point in the past, Tammuz's mother actually died, and he was more or less adopted by the village elder, who kind of took him on as something akin to a son. It's not necessarily one of these exact things where he is a biological son, it's more just kind of an adoption process. But the important thing is that Shalim has kind of an uneasy feeling about what's going on with Tammuz, that he's kind of out and about, seemingly doesn't really know where he is, and the concern is almost kind of this ache in his stomach that something's happened to him. Now, when his father returns home, of course, he asks him, like, do you know where Tammuz is? And his answer is no. Like, why do you ask? And that's when Shalim picks up on the fact that he's done something to him. Now, when he goes to attack his dad immediately, just kind of knocks him down, refers to him as a milksop, basically a colloquial term for somebody who's weak or incapable of handling themselves in any real measurable way, that has to like rely on others for help and things like that. And so the result of this is that one of the hunters comes running back and talks of a beast that has appeared in the woods in an area near the tribe, and that it'll basically be enough, because of its size, it'll be enough to feed them for quite some time. And so what you end up doing is switching over to Tammuz, who's basically re-emerged as a Hulk-like monster. And it's one of these funny things, because even though he's here traditionally as what we would call a Hulk, he's not here with nefarious purposes. Instead, in being here, he's realized certain things. That one, there's actually water below ground, and if the water can be irrigated, then it'll be enough for the tribe to be able to sustain themselves, to grow crops, different things like that. Presumably, animals will return to this place, and it's a way to kind of turn it back into a lush environment. And that's what he starts doing, right? He literally starts tearing through the ground trying to get to this water. And so because of that, he looks pretty badass. I mean, to the average person who sees him, he looks wildly monstrous and almost like a demon entity. And that's how the village members treat him. That when he emerges, he's trying to talk to them, trying to have a conversation with him, but all that comes out are just garbled growls. And in his frustration, he lashes out, much like we've seen with the Incredible Hulk do with regards to people who are kind of moving against him. him. And so the result of this is that he's essentially killed by an arrow, which is fired by Shalim, not knowing that it's Tammuz. But ultimately, he ends up coming across the corpse, and then he sees a tattoo or a birthmark on his body and realizes that it's Tammuz, that he's somehow been changed or modified or altered. And so the result of this is that when he kind of dies and he falls back to the realm of the One Below All, that essentially he's kind of met by the One Below All himself. And when this happens, the One Below All kind of tells him, like, you bear my mark, right? Like, I turn my face towards you, I am the One Below All. And he says, with these hands I break, with this mouth I howl, my weapon is hate. And the reality is Tammuz felt betrayed by his own tribe. And so when that happens, he basically says, like, so is mine, right? He's basically bound by vengeance here. And so that's what's kind of crazy, is because following that, they actually end up feasting on the body of Tammuz in his Hulk form, you know, and just kind of like literally eating all parts of him. And that's when the village elder kind of stands up and says, like, this beast was brought here as a bounty to us, right? It was brought to us here by the goddess, right? She gave it to us, and that we destroyed it and we killed it. So it means that she still cares about us. It's a gift. She's simply just testing us, right? She's putting us through these paces with this harsh environment because she wants to make sure that we're worthy. Whatever excuse he chooses to use to, one, essentially maintain his own position, and two, to keep things as they are. The other thing that happens is that as they continue to go through and to consume this corpse, that Shalim does not, but he also begins to notice that one of the eyes is starting to open up, right? That it's just slightly open. And that's when he tells his father, like, no, like, do not eat this thing, but they consume it anyway, right? They're consuming the gift of the goddess that's been given to them in the hope that by consuming the gift that she's given, they're essentially offering, right? They're giving something back. They're showing appreciation. And then in turn, their realm will start to kind of grow back to the way that it was before, that, you know, life will return, so on and so forth. And they can go back to no longer living such a harsh and terrible life. The exact opposite happens, that as they consume this corpse, it literally starts to destroy them, right? It starts to kill them and break them all down until essentially the eye completely opens and Tammuz starts to reform, right? Because now he's essentially an Immortal Hulk, given that gift by the One Below All. Like, he literally starts to grow, starts to reform, and then turns his vengeance to Shalim. Now, for his part, Shalim really didn't know that it was Tammuz. Like, he really had no idea that it was his best friend that he had essentially killed, right? Even his brother, if we're being honest with ourselves, he didn't realize that he had fired the arrow in his own friend's eye and essentially brought him to an end. But ultimately, the response of Tammuz is, I don't care, right? Like, you know, in one of these instances, he kind of has essentially the voice of the One Below All kind of speaking into his mind, saying, like, you will never be rid of your vengeance, right? You'll never be rid of your anger and your wrath. That will always be a part of you, right? That's going to be who you are forevermore. And so the result of this is that he basically kills Shalim. Now, the reason why this matters, this is one of the reasons why this story is so cool, is because following that, he just goes forward out into the world. He doesn't die, right? He's not killed by Shalim. It's not like Shalim, you know, has to kill his own friend again and then kind of go forward from there. Like, it literally says Tammuz leaves the village alone, right? Like, he's the only person that emerges from this place. Presumably, he's going to show up and probably face off against the Immortal Hulk, which would be cool. I don't really know what name to give this guy. Maybe like the Demon Hulk or something like that, which is kind of a cool name because he looks like a demonic character, right? He looks like a demonic being. And unlike the Immortal Hulk, which is just kind of a manifestation from Bruce Banner and is still in a lot of ways a relative good guy depending on the circumstance, but doesn't really intend to cause harm to other people, Tammuz seems to be the exact same way, right? Like the Hate Hulk. That's basically what he is. Like, he's literally bound by hate and vengeance, and that's it, right? He's just going forward. It's kind of like this force of violence, this force of seemingly entropy. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with the Immortal Hulk. Yes, we are. Red God Hulk versus Thor or the Avengers. I'm not really sure what I'm going to call it yet, but this is basically like the most powerful version, or not, I wouldn't say the most powerful version, but it's a super powerful version of the Hulk. I think he's incredibly powerful. The biggest issue with this is we don't really get like a World War Hulk storyline with him, but it is really, really cool. What this does, those of you guys who recall, the Red God Hulk, if we want to call him that, it's like Savage Hulk just pulsing with Red Hulk energy, had essentially come up against the UFOs. Now, the UFOs, as we talked about in the previous video that we did, for those of you guys who were catching up, were basically longtime enemies of the Incredible Hulk, but had recently been contacted by Peter Gyrich. Of course, Gyrich basically being like a government agent who was a longtime foe of the X-Men and is now kind of being invoked here. So Marvel's obviously turning him into one of these guys where they just kind of circulate him around based on the nature of the story. I'm surprised to see him in here, but the UFOs have always proven to be pretty capable with regards to the Incredible Hulk. The biggest thing that always set the UFOs back is they would bicker amongst each other, and that would basically give Hulk the opportunity to take them out. And this instance, like literally Red God Hulk just crushes these guys, and it's not even a contest, and they do everything they can. Even Vapor's helpless, and Vapor's arguably the most powerful member of the UFOs. Now, as you guys have probably figured out, Vapor's ability is to basically turn into pretty much any gas, and it doesn't even have to be a gas that you find on Earth. It can be a gas from like extraterrestrial landscapes or anything like that. And it's kind of crazy because she literally turns into sulfuric acid gas, right? Which should be enough to like dissolve the Incredible Hulk. To give you guys perspective on what we're dealing with here, sulfuric acid can dissolve metals, right? It usually charges it, but it can dissolve metals, right? You just break them down. If you add like water or alcohol to it, it'll just create heat, right? It'll create like a violent reaction, just explode. But it's it's nuts. It should be more than enough to take out the Incredible Hulk. Having it in a gaseous form is a way for her to just kind of envelope the Hulk. The problem with this is he completely inhales her, right? Like, he completely inhales like this sulfuric acid gas and then just spits it back in the face of another member of the UFOs, right? And the problem is like Simon literally starts choking and dying on this stuff, right? Like, that's kind of the crazy thing. The overall gist of this is that because of the really the power of the Immortal Hulk here, he's able to overcome these guys quite readily. And the result of this is that they kind of just whisk him away, right? Literally, he just gets punched across across the sky, right across the land. And ultimately, the UFOs end up contacting Henry Gyrick. And it's just like, okay, look, we kind of had him on the ropes. They didn't. And it's like, if your guys hadn't screwed up, then like we would have ultimately gotten a hold of him. Like, we would have been able to bring him in. The problem with this is they're like, we're not a match for him now, right? Like, whatever form he's in now is not enough for us to be able to take this guy out. We need something more. And that's when Henry Peter Gyrick basically ends up getting a hold of the Avengers and has the Avengers respond. And so following that, you essentially pick up in Manhattan. And of course, Immortal Hulk's not too worried about the UFOs at the moment. It's just kind of like, you know, like whatever, right? I mean, if they're going to come after me, they come after me, and I'll give them more of the same, right? I mean, you know, that's kind of the crazy thing. And so in the midst of this kind of thing where he's just kind of standing in this bar, one of the things to remember when it comes to the Hulk is that society at large is still fearful of him. Even though the Immortal Hulk is really more intelligent and kind of wants to be left alone to a degree, different things like that, this version, not necessarily the Immortal Hulk, but a more intelligent version of the Hulk that's essentially powered by the mind of Joe Fixit. At the end of the day, people are still terrified of the Hulk, right? The fear still reigns supreme. And that's why you see this kind of crazy thing when it's just like, you know, people are horrified by this guy. The problem is that in the middle of all this, Thor shows up and immediately attacks the Immortal Hulk, right? Immediately goes after him. And this is one of those things where the response to the Avengers seems to be more or less containment, right? The idea that like the Immortal Hulk is probably going to go on a rampage again. And that's the overall assumption whenever it comes to the Hulk. Whenever the Hulk appears, unless it's some kind of a situation that, you know, with like the Onslaught saga where he's necessary and the Avengers like call the Hulk in, or some kind of situation like that, whenever he's just kind of out there, the assumption is he's about to go and you know, cause craziness and all kinds of stuff. So the Avengers respond accordingly. But there's actually something else sort of going on here. Something else is actually happening. But the funny thing is that Thor, despite the power that he possesses, is just not enough for the Immortal Hulk. Now, this is something that I want to point out here. What this looks like, and we can't definitively say this because they look a little bit different, but what this looks like is the version of Thor who currently rules Asgard. And if that's the case, Thor has his equivalent of the Odin Force. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to say this is like Immortal Hulk fighting Odin, and so like Immortal Hulk can beat Odin, but he's more powerful than your baseline version of Thor. And that's the whole significance behind this is the power boost that the Immortal Hulk got. Not only that, it's all the Avengers that are here. And this is why I say this is probably King Thor's, because you've got the current roster of the Avengers who are here. The reality of this is, even despite their best efforts, there's not a whole lot that they can do. To make things even more difficult, you've got the arrival of Red Harpy Betty who shows up here, which is basically like another gamma irradiated mutate. I mean, we had a discussion on her previously, so make sure you guys check the Immortal Hulk playlist down in the description so you can get caught up and you can find out more about who she is. But what you end up getting here is essentially like this Red God Hulk facing off against like the Avengers. And that's kind of the nuts thing, is because this whole situation is kind of looked at and really even narrated by like Jennifer Walters, by She-Hulk. Now, there really isn't a whole lot she could do anyway against this level of power. I mean, there's not really even anything like Thor or like Iron Man or Captain America, Black Panther, or even Captain Marvel could do against this. But at the end of the day, she's kind of narrating it, and she's just like, all the Incredible Hulk knows is rage and chaos, right? That's all this thing knows. That's all it's known over the course of its life. That ever since the Hulk came into existence, all it's known is being chased and tracked down down by various people. That it's like these small moments of reprieve when he finds a kind of ally in the Avengers, but for the most part, it's always somebody hunting him down, somebody attacking him, somebody coming against him. And really Jennifer Walters sees this version of the Hulk as kind of like the epitome, right? This idea of the Hulk's rage given form. Now, this almost kind of seems to fly in the face of Worldbreaker Hulk, but that's one of the funny things to keep in mind, is even though Worldbreaker Hulk was the strongest version of the Hulk that we'd seen, the reality was that his rage had reached a point where it was almost a kind of inner calm, right? It was almost a point where he was just kind of, had reached like a stillness. Like, you ever had that where you get so pissed off that you're just calm, right? And that's almost like the scariest version of a person being mad, where they just kind of stop and calm down. And it's like, oh my God, right? Like, it's about to pop off, man. Like, that's kind of the crazy thing. And that's why you even see references to like Worldbreaker Hulk, where you kind of have this scenario where Blade is basically like thrown into the sky by Hulk. And then the response of Captain America, he tells Iron Man, go get him. And Iron Man's like, well, I mean, no, like, I mean, you guys can't stand against a Hulk on your own. And at the end of the day, like, Black Panther's like, no, we retain the advantage of numbers, right? Like, a single warrior is, you know, that's disciplined enough can handle the Hulk on their own. And that's when Hulk kind of comments and says, like, you know, like, you're disciplined enough. Like, if you're disciplined, how'd that work out for you last time? You know, and that's when Black Panther is like, I offered you mercy, right? Like, I attempted dialogue. You taught me a lesson when you crushed us all so badly. That's what's so kind of crazy about this, right? It's literally learning lessons from their experiences facing off against the Hulk. And so what you end up getting in the middle of this huge fight where the Avengers are quite literally just getting it handed to them is you have the arrival of Gamma Flight. Now remember, Gamma Flight is really trying to reel the Hulk back in, but get a better understanding of what's going on, because behind the veil of all of this, and that's the thing that Jennifer Walters does not initially pick up on here, but then starts to realize is kind of going on. Behind the veil of all of this is the one below all. There's a kind of rage that's permeating everybody, a kind of wrath that's even permeating Thor, right? Something behind the scenes that's kind of tugging and almost instigating, right? Almost increasing this kind of violence that each of these heroes have towards the Incredible Hulk and the kind of rage he has towards them. And there's this kind of comment, this kind of moment where you have Titania who approaches She-Hulk with the intention of trying to take her out. And the response of Titania, right, with Gamma Flight working alongside the Hulk group more or less, is, do we take out the She-Hulk chick or like, do we just let her stay? And the response of Betty is no, like, she's with us, right? Like, you've seen the door, haven't you? And the response of She-Hulk is, yes, I've seen the green door. So she's aware that the green door exists. Now, whether or not she knows what lies beyond it isn't really explained here. We assume that maybe she does, but at the end of the day, the effects of the one below all kind of permeate out into everything. So much so that there's actually a point where Thor like smashes the hand of the Immortal Hulk with Mjolnir, and then doing that literally just like destroys his arm, right? Like literally just fractures his arm. And then following that, like Immortal Hulk just takes the tentacles or the little bits of his arm that are there and starts to suffocate Thor. And it's one of the things that Jennifer Walters kind of hits on, is that like Thor's not normally like this, right? He's not normally this extreme and aggressive. That's not usually how he is, right? He can be if he needs to be, but it's almost like Thor's in a berserker state, but not in a berserker state. That the response of Thor would be one of containment and control, not like assault and almost like an attempt to kill. And that's the whole thing behind the Avengers, is understanding the Immortal Hulk as he exists, in the sense that he can always kind of be resurrected and always come back, and their experiences facing off against him in the past in his most powerful forms really leads them to the position of, we got to take him out. Black Panther literally cuts his arm off. I mean, it's things like that, right? It's really extreme in a lot of ways, the fight that's going on here. But that's when Jennifer Walters even looks at Black Panther and realizes, okay, so Black Panther is not necessarily governed by rage here, but the steps he's taking are even a little extreme for him, right? Where he just kind of looks at Hulk and it's just like, we have to kill him, right? Like, we have to kill this guy. And that's usually not the response of Black Panther. Like, the only time Black Panther really takes a response like that is if like somebody invades Wakanda, or they're like an imminent threat to Wakanda, or even like the world or something like that. Then Black Panther will take that approach of like, we need to kill them. And while there is recognition here that Black Panther is operating in a more calculated form, he's operating in a more methodical form, even then it just seems chaos, right? It seems like chaos and pandemonium. And so ultimately you end up having Betty, who approaches She-Hulk, and she doesn't go to attack. She just kind of looks at her with this expectation of, are you going to do anything about this? And that's when She-Hulk seemingly has to choose her allegiance. She's at this point where she kind of has to choose the Hulk family, or she has to choose the Avengers. And the reality is that it makes sense here because of the fact that she was really the last holdout. And that's what makes things kind of intriguing, because one thing to bear in mind, we're like 3 issues out from the conclusion of Al Ewing's run. So who knows what form this is going to take. But the reality is she's part of the Hulk family. Whether she wants to admit it or not, whether she sees herself that way or not, she definitively is. And so she basically quells the entirety of the conflict with just one of those sonic claps and sends the Avengers all flying. And so in response to that, a kind of teleportation gun is ultimately fired, and that basically allows Gamma Flight and the Hulks to essentially take off, right, to basically bail out. And that's when She-Hulk ends up going with them. And so in essence, She-Hulk has now stood against the Avengers, and she's now currently operating alongside the Incredible Hulk family, more or less. That's kind of nuts, because basically everybody who's irradiated with gamma mutation is now aligned on a particular side, right? This is probably the most true statement, if there's ever been one, of really an entire Hulk family, right? That's really what it is here. But I'm kind of curious, like, what direction this is going to go in. Like, I'm curious where we're going to end up seeing this kind of conclude. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are picking back up with the Immortal Hulk. Now, one thing to know, we are only a handful of issues out until this thing ends, right? I think we have, what is this? This is technically July, so I think we have August, September, and October. So we got 3 issues left until this whole thing is finished, and it's all wrapped up and done. So I'm really excited to see where this ends, because I'm let me know down in the comments. I'm curious what your all's take is on the Immortal Hulk run up to this point. But in this video, we're covering what is basically the secret origin of Joe Fixit Hulk. Now, one of the things to keep in mind when it comes to Joe Fixit is that what you had originally in Marvel Comics, as most of you guys know, is you had the Incredible Hulk who was gray. And a lot of that was because they just didn't want him to tie into any kind of racial ethnicity or anything like that. But the difficulties that came with making the Incredible Hulk gray in color basically couldn't be overcome. So they ended up making him green. Now, years later, under Peter David's run with the Incredible Hulk 347, they brought the gray Hulk back, but called him Joe Fixit. And the in-continuity explanation is that technically the very first variation of the Incredible Hulk we saw was actually Joe Fixit Hulk, hence the reason why he was gray. But the Joe Fixit persona took a back seat to the Savage Hulk persona, which is why he turned to green. And so it was a pretty neat way to kind of wrap those things up. But the reality is we never really seem to get a tried and true explanation of Joe Fixit. And so a lot of this really seems to cope with that. Now, one of the things this does here is it kind of does a bit of a flashback with regards to Betty Ross and all that kind of stuff, the bit of the history there between her and Bruce. And anybody who's been reading the Incredible Hulk for any measure of time will tell you their relationship is tumultuous at best. Right? They have been lovers and they have been head over heels for each other. And there's been times where they've been at each other's throats, right? They just absolutely want to kill each other. Really good example of that was Red She-Hulk versus the Incredible Hulk, right? But the whole thing behind this is that a lot of what happened with Betty Ross, the struggle she went through, a lot of even the death of her character was all based on her experiences with the Incredible Hulk. If Bruce Banner had not become the Hulk, she wouldn't have endured all those different things. And a lot of this is designed to kind of juxtapose things, right? The idea that in the early days when she was talking to her dad, oh, don't be unfair to Bruce Banner, he's a cool guy, everything's gonna be fine, no matter what happens, I'm sure he knows what he's doing, all the while kind of giving us this these kind of panels that show us that yes, they got married and then their life basically went to crap and she ended up dying, then came back as Red She-Hulk, and then all this kind of crazy stuff, right? He basically turned her life upside down. And all this really kind of segues into what is one of the most weird moments of probably any Incredible Hulk series ever, when you've basically got Red Harpy, right, Betty Ross, in bed with Joe Fixit Hulk, imbued with the power of the Red Hulk. It's weird. It's a little strange, but it's kind of cool, right? Because there's a little bit of banter that kind of goes back and forth between the two. But one of the other funny things that really goes on here is that when Betty turns back into herself, there's a big conversation about the nature of Bruce Banner, about how she sees Bruce, how she's seen him for quite some time, and how she sees Joe Fixit. And the way this works is that Bruce has, in a lot of ways, kind of pushed Betty away. That it's one of these things where he's come to her for aid, but he's also pushed her away. And a lot of it's subject to whatever it is that he happens to be going through at the time. And it really all kind of boiled down to this mentality of Bruce doesn't want Betty exposed to the life that he lives in, but he doesn't want to live without her. And so how do you square that circle, right? How do you keep somebody safe from this life that you live, but at the same time, keep them close by you? And in a lot of ways you can't. And that's one of the reasons why you saw a lot of these instances over the course of the Incredible Hulk mythos, right? Bill Mantlo, Peter David, Greg Pak, Jason Aaron, all these guys, where it was basically Bruce Banner in a lot of ways pushing Betty Ross away, but at the same time also trying to keep her close, right? This kind of tug of war that went on. And for her, it was exceedingly frustrating and exceedingly irritating. More so than that, she hasn't seen Bruce Banner for quite some time, that he hasn't appeared to her and had any real kind of conversation with her. Now, a lot of what's gone on recently, if you guys have been following our coverage of the Immortal Hulk, is that Bruce Banner's in hell. So he can't. He can't hang out with her. He can't spend time with her. But even when that wasn't the case, he just didn't really like her. And the reason why was because she was a mirror for Bruce. When you look at it, if we kind of go the route of like Bill Mantlo and Peter David and look at it as a more introspective philosophical approach to the reason why Bruce was this way, it's because when Betty Ross was just Betty Ross, she was a normal human. She represented everything that made Bruce Banner's life pure and great and perfect. This idea that he could return to a state of normalcy in this chaotic life that he led. But when the time came when Betty Ross died, suddenly Bruce Banner lost everything that was pure and great in his life. When she returned as the Red She-Hulk, any chance he had of normalcy was stripped away when she didn't want to have anything to do with him and seemed to outright hate him. And then when she ended up becoming the Red Harpy, or at least returning back to the Red Harpy and taking on this kind of, Red She-Hulk, Red Harpy approach, then suddenly she was a mirror of all the things that Bruce Banner hated about himself, i.e. gamma radiation and the Hulk. And so then he was basically avoiding her. And so it was one of these things where consistently any possibility he had with a great life with Betty, returning to that kind of pure time when everything was perfect, was gone. And Betty Ross, looking at Joe Fixit, came to this realization that where Bruce Banner shied away from that, Joe Fixit embraced it. And so in her mind, Joe Fixit basically saw her for who she really was and accepted it. That in reality, with everything that she had gone through, as Betty Ross interprets it, this harpy form is who she really is, right? That's who she really is as a person on the inside that's physically manifested. And Joe Fixit embraced that. And so in a lot of ways, that kind of acceptance led to what she believed to be the process of falling in love. The problem with this is that Joe Fixit reveals his true colors here. We all know that Joe Fixit was not a very good guy, and that while he does talk a big game, in a lot of ways, he was kind of a coward. And that's what he reveals to her, that in this moment when he was whisked away to hell, and then everything was popping off, all Joe Fixit cared about was trying to find a way out, right? Getting himself out of there. All the while, he knew Bruce Banner was there, but made absolutely no effort to get Bruce Banner out of hell. And he tells her that. He's like, look, I mean, the reason why Bruce hasn't been talking to you is because he's in hell. And yes, I was there, and I could have saved him, but at the end of the day, I just wanted to find a way out. And she freaks. She's like, you left Bruce in hell? And immediately starts going off on it, right? Immediately starts losing it and attacking him. Now, you do kind of switch over for a second between Jennifer Walters and Jackie McGee. Of course, as you guys recall in the last video that we did, Jennifer Walters essentially defected from the Avengers and joined the Immortal Hulk's team, which was really kind of Al Ewing essentially consolidating all the members of the gamma radiated community into one place. But what she of course does is take the phone of Jackie McGee, and then she basically hops on the old Fantastic Four line. Now, the reason why this happens, and this is a great reference by Al Ewing, I love that he did this. Jennifer Walters was a member of the Fantastic Four at one point in Marvel Comics. A lot of you guys may not know that, but there was a point when different characters shifted around. And so you had characters that would stand in for these guys. Jennifer Walters was one of them. And so because of the fact that that was the case, she has access to the kind of Fantastic Four back channels, right? Their communication lines. And she basically sends off an encrypted message to Ben Grimm, which says like, the Incredible Hulk's cool, everything's okay, I'm safe, I got everything under control. The question he asks to what is in effect an entire assembly of all the biggest heavy hitters in the Marvel Universe, right? So all the members of the Fantastic Four and all the members of the Avengers is, are we gonna do the same thing? Are we gonna tell her that we're all basically mustering our forces to launch an attack on the Immortal Hulk and the entirety of the Hulk family? Or do we keep that to ourselves, right? Now, we don't really get an answer to that. Instead, what we get is basically the aftermath of Joe Fixit Hulk revealing to Jennifer Walters that he left Bruce Banner in hell. And essentially, she lets him have it, right? That she's kind of like, so I've been operating under this false pretense this whole time. This whole time, I thought you were a guy who saw me for who I really was and all that kind of stuff. Instead, it turns out you're just a coward and a dick. Like, really? And just like lays into this guy. And where he apologizes, her response is, no, you don't know how to be sorry, right? You want to look sorry, but that's just a camouflage to hide the real you, that you only care about yourself. And at that point, she writes him off. And in the end, he tries to make up for this by kind of offering an explanation and saying, look, there's something that you need to understand about who I am, right? There's something that you need to understand about who I am as a person and where I came from, right? That I am simply just a version of the Incredible Hulk that you ran across one day, just one of Bruce Banner's alters, right? His alternate personalities. But there's another thing that you need to know here. There was a kid, like when Bruce Banner was a little kid, he was, beaten by his father, his mother was beaten by his father, but his life was absolute turmoil and absolute hell. And that while his father was sleeping it off one night, while his mom wasn't there, he watched a black and white movie through both of his black eyes that had just been made that way by his father. And somewhere in there was an idea of what a grown-up is, somebody who could take the pain. And he says, that's where I started from. Now, this is not a lengthy secret origin here, but it's tragic as hell. Because one of the things to know, especially when it came to the Incredible Hulk mythos, for a lot of you guys who were new to the Incredible Hulk, new to this channel, don't really know about a lot of this stuff, the old stories with Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were straightforward Incredible Hulk stories, right? Hulk just smashing things, he fights some people, the story ends, and then you do it again in the next issue. When it got to Bill Mantlo and Peter David, especially really it started with Bill Mantlo and continued through Peter David, it was very much an introspective philosophical run on what makes the Incredible Hulk the Incredible Hulk. How did Banner become the person that he was? Did the Incredible Hulk just manifest randomly because of gamma radiation? Or is there something deeper than that? And one of the things that they really built on there is that everything the Incredible Hulk represents is essentially the rage that Bruce Banner feels towards his father, Brian Banner. And that being left alone is one part, whenever the Incredible Hulk says that, it's one part telling the people who were there, leave me alone. And two, crying out to when he was a little kid, begging his father to leave him alone. The run of Bill Mantlo and Peter David, you talk to anybody who knows anything about the Incredible Hulk and they'll tell you it's one of the most significant runs in the history of the character, because everything that you've seen with the Incredible Hulk following those runs is built on those runs, right? Every concept that you've seen is predicated on that, right? Just because of the work that was done and the things that went into it. And so Al Ewing doing this ties into that old stuff, where it basically really takes a page out of the stories of Bill Mantlo and Peter David. And it says that like the notion of Bruce Banner, sure, the Savage Hulk is a reflection of the rage that he feels towards his father, Joe Fixit. The reason why he's so hardcore, the reason why he's, the guy you don't mess around with, why he has this kind of intelligence, but at the same time is what you would define as kind of being a man's man, is because it's predicated on a movie. That Bruce Banner in his younger years developed this alternate personality because he wanted to be the kind of person that could withstand the pain that his father dished out to him. And that's why when things get really, 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 really bad, sometimes Joe Fixit will manifest. The personality that takes over needs to be the personality that can cast everything aside, emotional ties, the whole 9 yards, and do what needs to be done. And that's what Joe Fixit is, right? He is a kind of romanticized perception of what Bruce Banner thinks a man is based on the movies that he's seen. So it's a great concept, right? It's a really, really cool idea. But at the end of the day, in saying all that, he says like, it's not really me that I'm in love with anymore. I don't want to be that person anymore. And when she's like, so what does any of that mean? He says, I love you, right? He's like, that's what that means, is that I'm in love with you, right? Like I, Joe Fixit, am in love with you, Betty Ross, which I mean, like the whole motivation behind this, it's beautiful. Looking at it is weird. Joe Fixit Hulk, like Joe Fixit Hulk with the power of the Red Hulk, is saying this to a red harpy. It's a little wonky, but if you can look past that and kind of look at it as two personalities saying this, then it makes sense. But at the end of the day, Betty Ross is like, I don't know what to do with this, right? I don't know how to respond to this. And so she does the only thing that she can do, the only thing that she really knows how to do, is that when he's spilling his heart and saying like, you make me want to be a better man. Like, I know it was dumb to leave Bruce there, but this time that I spend with you, this time that I'm around you, makes me realize all my shortcomings, all my mistakes, and it makes me want to be better. Betty Ross does what she always does. She runs, she flees, right? She basically ends up taking off. And so when Joe Fixit, kind of continues this conversation, not realizing that Betty Ross has taken off, and he's saying things like, now that I've come out during the day and I'm around people more, I've learned to understand people better, I've learned to grasp people better, so on and so forth. And I've kind of learned the error of my ways. Once he asks her what she thinks, she's gone, right? She's totally taken off. And so he's like, okay, well then I guess that kind of answers that question to a degree. And so ultimately he ends up kind of stepping out of the room, because this whole thing took place just in an apartment room, which is pretty cool. I love the idea when you have comic book stories where the whole story takes place in like a room, right? It just takes place in like a singular location, because it's a real testament to whether or not a writer can write characters in a way that people can find receptive, right? Can they really understand those characters if they can write them in what is in effect a static location without a whole bunch of action sequences and things to mask the poor handling of the characters? But nonetheless, Al Ewing, of course, as you guys know, writes Immortal Hulk just stupidly well. It's ridiculous how good it is. But when the question's asked, like, what's the plan? Like, what are we doing here, right? I mean, like, is there some goal that we have? Because right now we're just hiding out from the Avengers and the Fantastic Four. What are we doing? What's the next step? And the answer that Joe Fixit has is, I'm going to go to hell. I'm going to go to hell. I'm going to face the one below all, and I'm going to save Bruce Banner, whether I'm ready to do this or not. It's cool. This is obviously leading up to something massive. Man, son, man, let me tell you something, man, let me tell y'all something, man, let me tell y'all something. Okay, this comic book, let me tell you something, man. I'm sorry I'm so excited, people. But it is an exciting comic book, right? It is an exciting story. This is amazing conclusion to Immortal Hulk. It's ridiculous. It's crazy. It's... man, I love this thing. Al Ewing, man. Al Ewing. Oh, Al Ewing. God, I love Al Ewing. Okay. So here's the thing, this picks up in Ohio back in 1901 in like the middle of a blizzard, right? And it's long before the Incredible Hulk, before Bruce Banner was ever born, ever came into existence or anything like that. And there's a couple of guys who are basically meeting up. Now, one of these guys is named Samuel. So obviously you can basically derive from this, given just the context of the situation. This guy basically seems to be the guy who basically came before Samuel Stearns, right? Like his family line. And so the crazy thing about this is that, as most of you guys know, we had that story about like that crazy looking demonic Hulk being, whatever it is. The skull of it's basically here. And what seems to have been going on is that these brothers have basically been going through and essentially finding like all these different artifacts that just kind of exist around the world. And I wouldn't go as far as to say they were based on the notion of like Hulk itself, so much so as they were basically trying to like find their fortune or trying to find something great. I mean, like one of the things, for example, when the question's asked about that giant skull is that Samuel responds to saying that was a gift from a paleontologist I know. Some fool dug it up in the Ottoman region, tried to pass it off as a new dinosaur, right? Like, it's a clear fake. The bones aren't even fossilized, but even so, it's well made, right? So they don't really know the kind of stuff that they're dealing with here, right? We know that's the head of what is in effect the first Hulk on Earth. They just don't really know that. And so one of the things that happens here is you end up discovering that essentially a kind of radioactive wave has been discovered. This is basically the first time humanity ever discovers gamma rays, right? Gamma radiation. No one's ever really discovered it before. And it's one of these things where Samuel's like, this is gonna be it, man. Like, this is the night that our great-great-grandchildren will remember, right? Everybody, like, our family lines are gonna remember this forever and ever and ever. But you basically pick up in what is essentially the below place, right? The realm of the one below all. And one thing to understand here is that while you do see Hulks, these are more of like the personalities of Hulks that are given form. Bruce Banner, of course, is possessed by the one below all, or a prisoner of the one below all, who's basically siphoning off all his gamma energy, right? So the various Hulks you see here are just personalities of the Hulk, right? So Jackie McGee, of course, is hanging out with them. And remember, Jackie McGee is apparently, or has apparently been touched by gamma radiation due to her exposure to it. But unlike a lot of people around her, right? Walter Lankowski or Doc Samson or the Leader or anybody like that, she doesn't really have a physical mutation that pertains to gamma radiation. She doesn't really Hulk out in the traditional sense. Instead, she has the ability to see ghosts, right? Gamma-based ghosts. So again, how exactly that translates, I'm not entirely sure. One thing to keep in mind when it came to Al Ewing's run, technically it was kind of cut short. It was supposed to run longer than this, and for reasons that I'll never fully understand, Marvel cut it short. Maybe it's due to poor sales. I don't know who wouldn't be buying this comic and reading it. It's absolutely amazing, but it's still kind of a cool thing, right? Because one of the things to bear in mind is that this depiction of the Incredible Hulk as you see him here is still very childlike in nature, whereas you have the Red Hulk personality, which again is very authoritative in nature, right? Just kind of these aspects. Now again, Red Hulk is not normally a personality trait of Bruce Banner, but again, this is basically Joe Fixit in Hulk form, right? Joe Fixit, of course, being one of the personalities of Bruce Banner. But the important thing here is they end up basically coming across what is the lair of the Leader as he's currently possessed by the one below all, right? That's one of the things to remember, is that the one below all, his first real appearance on Earth, as far as we're aware, at least in this particular universe, came in the form of him basically possessing Brian Banner, or appearing as Brian Banner, using him as a vessel to influence people on Earth. With regards to the notion of the Leader, he's the one that essentially took over after Brian Banner, right? And so that's why the Leader is kind of the one that's being manipulated here. Again, I invite you guys to check out our Immortal Hulk playlist down in the description to get a better idea of everything that's going on. But the important thing, and kind of a side effect here, right? You basically have the Fantastic Four who are trying to figure out how to open a portal to the realm of the one below all so they can rescue like Bruce Banner and all those different guys, right? And then you have Walter Lankowski, Sasquatch, who's heading, he was going through the Holland Tunnel and he's heading to meet with the Fantastic Four. Not a major plot point here, right? That's not a super important thing. Switching back to these brothers, as they're kind of going through and experimenting with, or at least analyzing this gamma radiation, one of the things that happens here is that one of the brothers makes a remark, right? This brother Robert makes a remark to his brother Samuel and saying, Beatrice sends her warmest regards. One of the things you find out here is that Samuel is basically sleeping with Robert's wife. And the reason why is because due to Robert's cold nature, he basically pushed his wife away and she just ran into the arms of what was basically his brother, but Robert's still pissed off. So he literally loses his mind and just starts attacking him, right? Just starts attacking Samuel. And then in turn, like a great big huge fight breaks out. Now, switching back to what's going on right now, once you have these depictions of the Hulk who basically arrive at the lair of the leader, this is obviously not some stick fort, right? I mean, this is not the Three Little Pigs, right? I'm gonna huff and I'm gonna puff and I'm gonna blow your demonic home down, right? That's not really what this is. This thing is wildly difficult to get through. And the only way to get through it is to be allowed through it. And so that's one of the things that happens as Savage Hulk goes through and literally starts punching this thing as hard as he possibly can, that you do end up having the leader, or at least the one below all, kind of in possession of the leader, appearing to him and kind of goading him on. And he ultimately manages to punch a hole through this wall, and then he just walks through, and then the wall basically closes down around him. And the whole idea behind this, and the reason why this is important, is because for the most part, this is kind of how this works, right? It is basically a trap that he was in effect, quote unquote, allowed in. And so once he gets in there, he immediately basically sees all the people over the course of his life that have essentially died off, one of whom is Jarella, right? Now, Jarella was basically the wife of the Incredible Hulk at one point in time. Now, that whole era kind of takes place during what we call the Microverse saga in the Incredible Hulk comics, which really lasted between issue 140 running up to 205 between 1971 and 1975. It was all written by Roy Thomas. It was the idea that the Incredible Hulk had basically entered the Microverse, and it was one of those things where Roy Thomas was kind of experimenting with the idea of the Hulk possibly finding some location for himself, just kind of introducing concepts, ideas, just to see how people took them. It was interesting for what it was, nowhere near as significant as Bill Mantlo and Peter David's run, but it was still pretty cool. Of course, Jarella basically ended up dying in issue number 205, but one of the things to go on here is that that's kind of the consistent depiction here, that these are all basically people who in some form or fashion are related to the Incredible Hulk by some way, and that in turn, they have all basically ended up perishing. Now, there is a guy with the most amazing mustache ever that basically approaches the Incredible Hulk, and he doesn't know who he is, right? Like, Hulk doesn't know who this guy is. I mean, he says he knows him, but at the same time, he kind of doesn't know him. He seems like he's basically, like, he looks a lot like Samuel Stearns, and that's when you kind of flash back to these brothers, and you basically have, again, Robert, who in turn is fighting Samuel. And so because Robert felt like this was such a huge betrayal that his wife had basically ran off and then in turn got with his brother, that he basically ends up beating Samuel Stearns to death, right? Or it seems like he beats him to death. And he actually ends up taking this little green orb, right? That little piece of gamma radiation, and just plunges it into the mind of Samuel Stearns, and then basically leaves him there where he seemingly dies. And so one of the things that happens is that as he walks away, right, where he's basically choked to death, and Robert in turns just walks away and leaves, suddenly the green light starts emanating. Now, this is a very, very important thing, because while Al Ewing will not give us a definitive answer on what this means, there is something that we can kind of take away from that, right? There is something that we can sort of see, or we can kind of discern based on what we'll see later on, and one of the most insane revelations in the history of Marvel Comics. Okay, so what ends up happening here is you switch back over to the Red Hulk, and I call him the Red Hulk loosely, right? We just call him Joe Fixit. You basically pick up with Joe Fixit as, again, he punches through this fortress, you know, quote unquote, again, being allowed in. And as he gets in there, he actually ends up coming across Mike Baron-Getty. Now, unless you are someone who is knowledgeable about Joe Fixit, this guy's totally lost on you, but he's probably one of the most important characters from the Incredible Hulk mythos that you've never heard of. So the idea behind this is that when Joe Fixit basically appeared in Las Vegas and operated in Las Vegas for quite some time, that one of the things that took place is that Mike Baron-Getty basically became a father figure, right? That where the world had largely shunned Hulk, and even Mike Baron-Getty in the early days kind of saw, you know, Joe Fixit Hulk as something he could use for his own ends. In effect, a father-son relationship formed between the two of them. But because of the nature of Joe Fixit, because of the nature of what it means to be a Hulk, that while he was more of a thinker than your traditional Savage Hulk, while he was in some ways more capable and in other ways far less capable, the reality was his presence in Vegas caused a lot of disturbances more often than it didn't, right? Like violent fights and things being torn up and so on and so forth. And so ultimately Baron-Getty basically made him leave. The problem with this is that Baron-Getty had a lot of enemies and they gunned him down when Joe Fixit had essentially left. And so in a lot of ways, it's kind of this feeling of guilt that Joe Fixit carries around, that had he not left, Mike Baron-Getty would still be alive. And so basically his inaction or his leaving is basically what got Mike Baron-Getty killed, because it's not like it's something he didn't know about, right? He knew that Mike Baron-Getty had a lot of enemies, but at the end of the day, it was really more respect for Mike that drove him to leave than anything else. And so because of this, much like what you saw with the Incredible Hulk, right? With Green Hulk himself, where he basically follows Jarella up these Penrose steps for the purpose of trying to get her back and bring her back to life, that Red Hulk almost kind of does the same thing. Again, the difference here is that Joe Fixit's more intelligent, right? He's smarter than your average bear. And so he knows it's a trap and it's some kind of a ruse. And following this thread, it basically leads him directly to where the leader is, right? Where the one below all is. And so what you of course end up having is like, you know, the one below all kind of manifesting these weird, crazy looking mouths. They start talking to you know, Joe Fixit. They've basically seized control of the Hulk himself, who of course, you know, goes to attack Joe Fixit. And at the end of the day, one of the crazy things about this is that while he's not necessarily on par with like Worldbreaker Hulk in terms of physical strength, that he's certainly enough to just pummel Joe Fixit, right? Almost beat him to death. And that just kind of happens over and over and over again. Now, one of the things that also happens here is that where each of these people has basically experienced ghosts of their past, right? And in effect, the physical manifestations of what is really their own guilt. That Jackie McGee experiences the exact same thing when she talks to her dad. The difference here is that where she sees her father was always a man who believed in something greater than himself, right? Always believed that there's a plan, right? There's always a plan here. God always has a plan. And so because of that, where Jackie McGee had kind of doubted this, and even so far in her dealings with the Immortal Hulk and with Joe Fixit and just the sheer insanity of everything that's happened, the fact that she can now see gamma ghosts, she kind of sees herself as having lost herself, right? She's not the person she used to be. The reality is she definitely is, right? She's the same person she always was. Her perception of herself is in her head, and that's changed based on her life experiences. But regaining her tangible self, right? When her dad says, like, look at you, like you're a reporter, you're the person who asks questions, right? On his deathbed, kind of having this conversation, right? I'm so proud of the person that you've become, Jackie. You're the person that's going to ask the hard-hitting questions. You're the person who's going to be able to see things no one else can see. So again, Al Ewing kind of plays it with this idea that all these different paths that people have taken, right? The path of Samuel Stearns being born and becoming the leader, the path of Bruce Banner, the abuse he stood at the hands of his father, the path of all these different people that have kind of happened over the years, that it all basically comes down to the fact that they are all basically being led here, right? That it's almost like a preordained path, which was all destined to end at this particular location. And so that's when it kind of dawns on Jackie, like, yes, I've not lost myself, right? I'm Jacqueline McGee. I'm an investigative reporter. I look into things. And in turn, she sees directly into the leader, right? And actually has this kind of piercing gaze that basically punctures the leader and creates a kind of moment of weakness that actually allows Samuel Stearns to fall out. Now, again, we don't really get a lot of explanation here from Al Ewing in terms of exactly how this works. We simply just know that it does. And by and large, it kind of works here, right? A lot of what you're seeing is just metaphysical stuff, right? I mean, all this right now is basically taking place in the dimension of hell. But when Samuel Stearns finally like falls out, right? Kind of falls out of this shell, this cocoon that he has, right? Which was basically kind of being, was created at least by the one below all and was being used to basically control Samuel Stearns, or Samuel Stearns using it to consolidate his power. That one of the things you find out here is that given everything he's seen and everything he's experienced, he doesn't want to experience it anymore. And so it's basically one of these things where he made a bargain with the one below all because he wanted to basically destroy the Incredible Hulk and expand his own power. But he didn't realize the bargain he was making and the sheer amount of knowledge and the torment and torture he would endure in being a part of all this. And so what he basically says is that essentially the one below all has siphoned off enough energy from Bruce Banner that now it's arriving, right? The one below all is finally here. So that's the crazy thing, because now we get to see the one below all's true form, right? Because up to this point, it's just been like a giant cloud monster, right? And so that's kind of the crazy thing, is that this child Hulk kind of lashes out, right? Just freaks out, starts screaming and yelling, you know, why was the Hulk hurt so much? Why is the Hulk broken inside? Why am I always afraid, right? Like, I want to know, why is there a Hulk? Why does the Hulk exist? What's the purpose behind me? Am I really just some kind of, you know, result of exposure to gamma radiation and that's it? Is it some basic mutation? And if I am, then how do I tie into you? How am I involved with you, right? Like, explain it all, make it all make sense. And so that's one of the funny things, is because the one below all responds with this kind of cryptic phrase, right? Like, I howl through many mouths, I break with many hands, yada, yada, yada. You know, they are themselves, but they are also me. And so in effect, the one below all basically responds by saying, you are a physical manifestation of my wrath, right? You are a physical manifestation of me, right? I, the one below all, am basically a being here that represents destruction. I represent chaos. I represent violence. I represent the end of things. You are my earthly avatar. You represent me on Earth. All of you who have been touched by gamma radiation, who by whatever manner and whatever means passed through the green door when the opportunity was given to you, you are a reflection of me, right? You are imbued with a portion of my power. But the response of Joe Fixit is, that's not what he asked, right? That's not what's going on here. And honestly, we're tired of the games, right? We're tired of like this giant cloud appearing. We're tired of all this stuff. What we want you to show us your real face. Show us who you really are behind this mask. And so in response, the one below all says, very well. And that's when the one below all reveals its real identity. It is what happens when the one above all basically Hulks. What's going on here is that if the one above all represents creation, it represents life and all that kind of stuff, then the one below all is its complete antithesis. It represents everything opposite of that. And so that's one of the things that's kind of crazy, is because ultimately you get this kind of really wild explanation, right? And it's not even really a clear explanation. It's just, you are my creation, you are necessary, right? There is weight and there is counterweight. Where were you when I laid these foundations? Declare if you have understanding. And so what the one above all really kind of reveals here is the Incredible Hulk, the concept of the Hulk, and really just the Hulk in his most pure form is basically the counterweight. That much like what the one below all said, that the Incredible Hulk is just violence incarnate. It's the darker side of the one above all in human form, physical form on Earth. And the reality is that all their paths really did lead to this point, that it's always this way, and it's always been this way. It's always been that kind of thing, right? Where he says the left hand is strength. What this seems to indicate is that the Immortal Hulk, or the Incredible Hulk, whatever you want to call him, is the strength of the one above all incarnate. And that seems to be the reason why, or at least an explanation that Al Ewing is giving us as to why it is. There is no discernible limit to how strong the Incredible Hulk can get. There's just an infinite level of strength there. I mean, that's something that we hypothesized as comic book fans and theorized until you got to Secret Wars. And then Secret Wars confirmed it. And then in the aftermath of Secret Wars, you would just see these moments where the Incredible Hulk would just have this astronomical level of strength. And the highest level of strength the Incredible Hulk ever achieved, of course, was during the Heart of the Monster storyline, where he was quite literally shattering the dark dimension of Dormammu and Umar, right? Like breaking their reality apart. That's the power that he has. Now, it's not the one above all saying you have an infinite level of strength, and here's how you reach my godly level of strength. It's simply saying you are a reflection of my strength, right? You are a reflection of me. And therefore, because you are my earthly avatar, insofar as you represent the antithesis of me, that I am creation, therefore you are the mortal physical manifestation of destruction, that in turn, that's your role. That's why you are the way you are. I created you to serve that purpose. And with that role comes pain. With that role does come suffering. But that's why you exist. That's why you've gone through all the things you've gone through. That's why you suffered through all the things you suffer through. Because with this role that I've created for you as basically the god of destruction on Earth, that just comes with it, right? So again, one of the things about the one above all when it comes to Marvel Comics is you don't really get straight answers, right? It's not one of those things where the one above all sits down and breaks things down in an easy to digest way, right? Where the Red Hulk's just like, okay, give us the whole rundown and everything that's happening. And the one above all is like, okay, so here's the rub. 7 universes ago, I got this really, really good idea, right? It doesn't really work that way, right? It's not like that the one above all always answers in just a super cryptic way. The only way you're ever really gonna get any clear-cut answers from the one above all is if somebody like Jim Starlin's writing him, and the circumstance is relatively simple, right? I mean, even then, it's not necessarily the case, right? If you go and you read the Infinity storyline where Adam Warlock became the new Living Tribunal in the aftermath of Secret Wars from 2015, even then, the one above all is kind of like, I mean, you're gonna have to basically leave your world behind and become the Living Tribunal, but maybe you can, maybe you... And he was just speaking in like a super cryptic way, right? Ultimately, it was both Thanos and Adam Warlock deciphering it, figuring it out, and then, you know, kind of going forward from there. But it's just one of those things where the one above all just never gives a clear-cut answer. It's always some kind of, you know, weird situation where it's just speaking in riddles, and that's basically it. But where the left hand of the one above all is strength, the right hand is mercy. And that's why you actually end up seeing the Hulk here being merciful towards Samuel Stearns and saying, basically, you've hurt me multiple times over the years, right? You've hurt me so often over the course of my life, but I forgive you. Now, something that I do want to explain here, something that needs to be stated here, is this is not just the Incredible Hulk forgiving Samuel Stearns, it's forgiving everybody else, his father, the whole 9 yards, right? Letting all that guilt and all that rage go, because now he's got a much better understanding of who he is and what he's about. He's got a much better understanding of what he stands for. And so what this basically leads to is, again, because Walter Lankowski Sasquatch met with the Fantastic Four, they basically found a way to open a portal to hell that, you know, Ben Grimm comes through with Sasquatch and like, hey guys, we got your way home. And they're like, cool. So they basically go through the portal and that's essentially it, right? They just kind of go back. And again, all these personalities, they don't pass through. And so that's why you don't really see Joe Fixit here. You don't really see like like, you know, the Savage Hulk here, because they're just personalities in the mind of Banner. And so basically Banner passes through and those personalities kind of incorporate back into him again, and then it's basically just Bruce himself. But going forward, Bruce now is far more whole than he used to be. There aren't really any parts of him that are kind of broken and fractured, where he's kind of split all over the place. He doesn't really know what his purpose is. He doesn't know why the Hulk exists in the first place. He was basically told quite literally by God, you are my avatar of destruction on Earth. That's just the role that you play, right? That's the role that I created for you. And I gotta be honest, man, if ever you felt fractured and broken and scattered all over the place, like you were somehow an actor in your own life, that the reality is if God comes and talks to you and offers you even any measure of a meaningful conversation, well, it only really means one of two things. Either God actually did it and it'll make you feel whole, or it means you're schizophrenic, right? I mean, ideally it'd be the first, that you're not some kind of schizophrenic and, you know, struggling with mental illness, right? You would certainly hope that's not the case. But it's cool because basically Bruce Banner goes forward with a clear-cut understanding of who he is, what he's about, and he doesn't really see the Incredible Hulk as a curse so much anymore. Instead, he sees the Incredible Hulk as what is, in some ways, a gift from God. Even if he doesn't always want to see the Hulks that are looking back at him, even if he knows in these times when he's going to descend into violence and tear things up, at the end of the day, he knows that's the role that was given to him by God himself, that now he has a purpose where previously he didn't feel like he had one. But with that being said, guys, this is the end of the Immortal Hulk. This wraps the whole thing up, and I gotta tell you guys, while it's not the best Incredible Hulk story there ever was, it's certainly the most interesting, right? I loved this run of Al Ewing when it came to the Hulk. It was phenomenal, right? This was just absolutely fantastic. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Keep an eye out. What we're probably gonna end up doing is just making a big full story video out of the whole Incredible Hulk thing. Yeah, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.